Testing. Oh. All right. How are my levels, Sarah? Testing. Oh. Hey folks, if you're joining, we're just waiting for the hearing to start. And I'm checking a few levels and stuff. I might go back to the title card in a second, but hearing's not on yet.
Yep, I'm on audio right now. Oh, are we live? Live? Okay. I'll be right back then.
If folks are turning in, Congress is late as usual, but we're expecting them in the next 5-10 minutes. And I'm going to be joined by a few colleagues. We can chat about the hearing, what we're expecting, stuff like that. Oh, there we go. Hey, Jabron, we're live.
Morning.
So, I was just explaining that we're expecting them to be late because they usually are. But we can chat a little about what we're expecting, what's going on, what this hearing is.
Yeah, so I'll need my microphone set up.
So this hearing is an informational hearing. It's not a markup, so not expecting them to actually vote any of these bills out of committee. It is 19 bills. It's a lot, so we're expecting a long hearing. They have an interesting lineup of witnesses, including someone we know. I might have to switch cameras. Okay. Sorry, a few technical difficulties. My camera is overheating. But yeah, so we have an interesting lineup of witnesses, including folks that are going to give them honest feedback on what they like and don't like on the bills. I think that's unusual because a lot of times these hearings are curated so that they only get like what they want to hear from the witnesses, that everything they did was fantastic and perfect and good, doesn't need changing. But, I think that some of these bills have some good ideas. Some of these bills have, majority good ideas. Some of these bills have a lot of bad ideas. And so hopefully we'll get some honest discussion between the panel and the members. Obviously a lot of these bills, if they were passed as is, would probably break the internet, or at least parts of it that we care about, which is why we're streaming this hearing and chatting about it. And yeah, I don't know, Gibran, do you have anything to add? What are you looking forward to in this hearing?
I'm looking forward to seeing how lawmakers are talking about these bills, and it changes a little bit every time, but it's a good opportunity to get a sense of the mood, the vibe, how people are feeling about things, what arguments they think are compelling. And then sometimes they say stuff that's like pretty bad. We had a KOSA hearing like a year ago where a bunch of people in favor of KOSA basically said that they thought the bill was unconstitutional and that it was going to get struck down if they ever passed. So sometimes you get people being, perhaps too honest for their own good. So yeah, hearings can be pretty interesting. They can also be a lot of grandstanding and tedium, but hopefully it will be more interesting. And I do really want to see where the House is on this, right? We talk to people in the House all the time, but it is a chamber with 435 members and voting members. And and so it can be really hard to judge for sure um, how things are going. And so this is an opportunity to hear from members and see what the mood is on all of these kids online safety bills.
Yeah, I apologize. I might have to switch. Okay, well, that's not going to work. Yeah. Having some technical difficulties on my end, but might have to go cameraless for a little bit while my camera cools down. But
Oh,
yeah,
no.
yeah. Did a tech test yesterday and everything worked great. So, yeah, the thing that I am interested in is how engaged the members actually are. Sometimes they show up and they just read from a sheet that their staff are prepared for them, and you can tell that they're not like really engaging with the witness or understanding. Here we go. But yeah, what I was saying is that if they, look more engaged, then they probably are more engaged.
Will come to order. The chairman recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Absolutely. I think some of the
Good morning and
times
welcome
you get
to today's
witnesses
hearing
are
to
like really
discuss
grilled,
legislative
and
solutions
other
to protect
times
children
really the
online.
committee is just trying to make space for them to
Our
say
children
things
are
that
facing
they already
an
agree with.
online epidemic.
And usually it's a mix,
This
right?
issue is
Some people will treat a
personal.
witness
We have parents
in
on
one
both
way and
sides of
others in
the
another,
aisle,
having like
and
go
we
back
all
and
have
forth to witnesses.
constituents who have been affected. They're why we
All right.
are here.
Well, we're starting up now
We're
with
examining
opening
almost
statements from the chair.
20 bills today, which together form a comprehensive strategy to protect kids online. Our approach is straightforward: protect kids, empower parents, and future-proof our legislation as new risks and technologies emerge. These bills are not standalone solutions. They complement and reinforce one another to create the safest possible environment for our children. There is no one-size-fits-all bill to protect kids online, and our plan reflects that. Parents must be empowered to safeguard their children online. Just as a parent can observe their children's activities and social behaviors at home and at school functions, so should they be able to check on their kids' activities online. Our bills ensure parents have the tools and resources to keep their children safe in the modern world. A child's life in the 21st century is much more complex than generations past, and parents need the tools to adapt. Our bills are mindful of the Constitution's protections for free speech. We've seen it in the states. Laws with good intentions have been struck down for violating the First Amendment. We are learning from those experiences because a law that gets struck down in court does not protect a child. And the status quo is unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. All our bills employ this strategy, including the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, that I'm proud to lead. KOSA sets a national standard to protect kids across America and mandates default safeguards. And
I just want to pause for a second because this is really interesting. We have told this office and others that KOSA probably violates the First Amendment, which fully believe it does. And similar provisions have been struck down in states. It sounds like the message got through because a lot of the changes that we saw, which, to be honest, take it in a better direction, or at least the changes to the duty of care, seem to be motivated by the fact that these laws are getting struck down in states. And so, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting development, hopefully positive.
Easy to use parental controls to empower families. It blocks
Yeah,
children
and I
from
mean,
being
this has definitely been a
exposed to or
subtext of some
targeted
KOSA hearings in the
with ads
past,
for
but
illegal or
it's really interesting to see
inappropriate
this
content
right
like
out the
drugs
gate.
and
Previously this has
alcohol.
sort of come
It
up
takes on
in
addictive design
hour
features
two
that keep kids hooked
of a discussion. Someone
and
will say
harm their
offhandedly
mental
that they think
health.
it might get struck down,
And
but
most
this is
importantly,
very different.
it holds big tech accountable with mandatory audits and strong enforcement by the FTC and state attorneys general. I made precise changes to ensure KOSA is durable. Don't mistake durability for weakness, folks. This bill has teeth. By focusing on design features rather than protecting speech, we will ensure it can withstand legal challenge while delivering real protections for kids online, and then kids and their families. I'm proud of the members of this subcommittee for working on legislation to address a myriad of harms and challenges. This issue is personal to every one of us up here. It shows in the number of bills before us today. I know this is a shared bipartisan goal. My office is open. Call me or find me on the floor. I think you'll know that I'm willing to listen. Let's find a way to work together, and this is not a partisan issue, folks. Let's find a way to work together and save America's kids from the threats they are facing online. That's the bottom line. I yield back the balance of my time. The chairman recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Schakowsky, for her 5 minutes for an opening statement. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is not a single thing that we deal with that, in my view, is most important to take care of our kids. And I do not believe that the legislation that has been offered by the Republicans does not do the job. And it's really frustrating because we have been working on this bill and moving it around here and there.
So this is
for
really
a long
interesting.
time. Yesterday I had
Schakowsky is a
the
retiring member,
of meeting with 3 women who are here today.
fairly influential,
in the
but
audience,
it seems
who have been
like
here for
they
5
are,
years
at least
because their
as
children
ranking, she's taking the strategy
died.
of going
Not
full in behind the
necessarily.
Senate KOSA
They
bill.
didn't need to die.
And
And it's the kinds of things that we can learn from them that we can do much better. I mean, to say that the,
Are you
Yeah.
right? Did we lose you?
that who can't,
Um,
yeah, the,
can you hear
I
me?
think my screen is lit. Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
the,
Yeah, so I was
difference
saying
in
that
states.
Schakowsky is going hard on criticizing the
states-
House version of
states, sorry,
KOSA
cannot do their own bill.
and supporting the Senate.
Cannot do their own bill.
I think that this
sorry.
criticism
We
is
have a long, long way to
the
go.
preemption criticism is one that we
to
would probably
protect our
agree with.
children
We are generally
and to make sure
anti-preemption.
that all our
because we've won a
And I
lot
want
of
to,
strong victories on
yield
AI and
at
surveillance
this
in
point
states, and we
to
want to preserve them. And obviously, they're trying to preempt all state AI legislation right now. And so,
Congressman Mullen.
even when it works against us, it's still good
Continue
to
in this
allow states to
discussion.
do
Thank you,
things and
Ranking
test out
Member
new ideas.
Schakowsky. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for convening this hearing on
Definitely.
a very important topic.
I mean,
Protecting
I wonder
kids is
strategically
perhaps the single
how,
most
I guess,
unifying bipartisan issue
I
we
don't know. I'm
have
kind of
here in
curious
Congress.
from her
We all
perspective
want to keep our kids
if
safe.
she
I
thinks
myself,
that the Senate
the
version can
father
actually
of
move in the House,
two
given
small
the
boys who
opposition of
aren't
House
yet, but
leadership
will
to
be
it. But
before
yeah,
I know it,
we'll see.
an age when they will be navigating the internet on their own. To say I am worried for them is an understatement. But the country and Congress is not without tools to keep people safe online. In fact, more than 100 years ago, the Federal Trade Commission was set up to prevent harms to consumers of all kinds, including kids. Indeed, most of the bills we will be discussing today rely on the FTC to enforce them. So that is why it has been stunning to see the contempt in which the Trump administration has held the FTC. Rather than seeking from Congress a change in the law, President Trump has simply attempted to
So this criticism
unlawfully
is
fire
shared
two of its
by
commissioners,
the CDT
eliminating
witness, Kate,
bipartisan input. Meanwhile,
who's really
the chair
smart
of
on
the
these
FTC has
issues,
attempted to dramatically
um,
reduce the commission's staff,
pointing out
buyouts,
that the
and other
FTC is
drastic
being run
measures. He's
extremely
actually
partisan
bragged
right now,
that he
including the
wants to get
firing of the
commission's staff
two
size to,
Democratic
its lowest
commissioners.
level in 10 years.
I'm
Chair has
just going to
also
leave
been
this
using the
camera
tools
off
of the
to cool down
FTC
for a
to wage a
second.
culture war
Sorry.
against medical professionals
Um,
and parental choices he disagrees with. This is more than a harmful deviation from the Commission's mission. It undermines consumer protections for all of us by taking cops
But yeah,
off
I think I
their
expect
normal
to see a lot of criticism of
Today,
the
we will be
FTC
talking
under
about
the
all
Trump
the things we
administration
want
by
and need
Democrats,
the FTC to do to
and
protect kids
obviously
online.
at least one
Who will
witness.
be doing that work? The remaining employees at the FTC
Yeah,
who
it's been
are already stretched
pretty
thin?
crucial
As
as a
evidenced by
weakness
this
of
long list
KOSA
of
that the
bipartisan bills, there's
FTC has
clearly a lot of
gone kind of
alignment across the
overnight
parties
from
about the
the
role we want the FTC to play.
epitome of
In that
a
spirit, I hope that as we
nonpartisan,
discuss the legislative proposals
well-regarded
today,
regulator
we
to
acknowledge the need to fully fund
basically a
the
partisan weapon.
FTC,
And
protect
so
its
it's very
bipartisan
difficult, I
commission
think,
structure,
or it
and
should be
ensure the
difficult for
FTC
people
is
to see
focused
it
on the
as
mission
a neutral
Congress
arbiter
gives it.
and
I look
enforcer
forward
of
to a robust
laws like
discussion
this.
today. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Guthrie, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis. Thanks for having this hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us here today. Tragedy strikes children every day online. In March, I shared the story of a constituent who took his life due to a sextortion scheme. I know each of us here today and many others have similar stories to share. And while we passed the Take It Down Act into law earlier this Congress to address sextortion, countless other harms persist, and it is our responsibility to find a solution. That is why we're here today. We have almost 24 bills before us that take a broad approach to create a comprehensive strategy to protect children online. Imagine a 14-year-old child trying to download a social media app on their phone. There are many different layers needed to protect them from harm, and we are discussing a comprehensive approach today where different types of legislation could work in harmony to address various concerns. For example, age verification is needed first and foremost, including appropriate parental consent, even before logging in. Once a user's age is known, privacy protections under COPPA 2.0 would be triggered. We also have a range of bills to further address issues like parental monitoring of online activity, restrictions on the types of apps kids can access, how information is presented to kids in apps, and how children's data is used by online platforms. And finally, the Kids Online Safety Act provides robust parental controls and limitations on harmful design features to ensure that platforms live up to these standards. Now, I would note that we went to great lengths to address concerns that members of the House on both sides of the aisle raised regarding KOSA in the last Congress, as well as concerns that the previous version would not pass a legal challenge and thus not protect a single child. The KOSA we are considering today still holds platforms accountable while addressing these concerns. Further, when it comes to AI chatbots, we learned about this in committee a couple of weeks
As
ago.
Matt had said earlier,
The SafeBots
here
Act and
again,
Aware Act
we're getting a
will
really
ensure
explicit
users are appropriately
KOSA
informed
as it was
and they're
previously
using
constructed
AI in that there
likely
are actual,
unconstitutional.
there are
And
educational
so
resources
they've
for
done a lot of
kids,
things from their
parents, and
perspective to
educators
mitigate that.
on the safe
Uh,
use of AI
so
chatbots.
yeah, it's interesting that
These exemplify our
this
strategy
has clearly
that
influenced the
Chairman
process.
Bilirakis has highlighted. The online world is large
Yeah,
and
this is
complex.
also interesting to me.
There is
Guthrie
no
was a
silver
blank
bullet
slate
solution
when he
to
became
protect
chairman
kids.
for a lot of
Each
us. We
bill
had no idea where he was
we're
going to
looking at
be.
today will be a piece of a puzzle
And so
designed to work together
his, I
to
guess,
create the safest possible
his
environment
stance
for
is
children
going to be
online.
really important for
They
a lot
empower
of the
parents
committee
with
activity going
parental
forward.
consent mechanisms, standards for
He
parental
came out
tools,
strong
and
in the
educational
beginning for
resources.
age verification, which
They
is
are
obviously
curated to withstand
problematic.
constitutional challenges.
There
A
is
law
sort
that gets
of
struck down protects no one.
a
And if that happened, it failed to
bipartisan
protect
sort
the
of
very children
group
we're
of
here to
folks
protect.
who are all in on age
We have a unique
verification and
opportunity
mandating
to
it.
work together
And
to craft
we
a
have, several
multifaceted
actions
solution to
against
protect children online.
that because
Thank
of
you
its
again to our
implications on
witnesses for being
privacy,
here.
security,
Really
and
appreciate the efforts you
speech,
made to be here. We
which
greatly
are,
look forward to the
pretty
discussions,
dramatic and
and I will yield back.
pervasive.
Gentleman yields back. Now I'll recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis. Today we're discussing the important topic of youth online safety, and as more of our lives are lived online, there have been tremendous changes in how we communicate, socialize, and learn, and with these changes come new challenges to ensuring the health and well-being of all Americans, but particularly our youngest and most vulnerable. We can all agree that we want our kids and teens to be safe online. Congress, along with parents, educators, and states, can and should play an active role in keeping minors safe, and that role must include prioritizing strong
We are
comprehensive
also
data privacy
disappointed
legislation,
that
which unfortunately is
comprehensive
not
data
included in the
privacy
19
legislation is
bills we're
being considered
considering
today.
today.
This is something we quite
Comprehensive
like,
data privacy
and it
legislation is
came
something
pretty close
I've
to
cared about
passing
for
last
many
Congress.
years. But in the absence of
Really
data
unfortunate that it's
privacy
been
legislation,
just
companies will
completely
continue to collect,
ignored.
process, and sell as much of our data and the data of our kids as possible. And this data allows companies to exploit human psychology and individual preferences to fuel invasive ads and design features without regard to the harm suffered by those still developing critical thinking and judgment. Artificial intelligence is only accelerating existing incentives because, like social media, AI relies on the exploitation of our data. Without such a strong legislative solution for children, teens, and all Americans, we must recognize that the measures we take in Congress will not address the full scope of the problems perpetrated by an online ecosystem fundamentally built on reckless and abusive data practices. We can and should do more for our children and for all consumers. But if comprehensive privacy legislation
Pallone is really
easy, it would
interesting
already be
because
law.
he's
And the
been
urgency of addressing
occasionally a
harms to
pretty strong
children and
ally
teens
for a
presents
lot
an
of our
opportunity
issues,
to make progress
including
towards
really caring
ensuring the
about
internet is
data
a safer
privacy,
place for all
as we can see
Americans.
from his
This
speech.
is why I'm pleased
His
we will be
bill in this
discussing my
mix is
bill
actually
that
one
will
of the
prevent
ones that we
shadowy
think
data brokers from selling minors'
probably
data
is good,
and allow parents
although we
and
haven't really
teens to
dug in too
request
much
the
on it.
deletion of any data
I
already
will
in the
note
hands
that
of
CDT,
brokers. We simply should
one of
not
our
allow
allies in a
nameless
lot
data
of
harvesters to
our
profit
work,
off of our kids'
who
data.
has Kate
Our
as the
kids
witness,
deserve the right to
they
enter
do seem to
adulthood with a
also really
clean
like
slate,
Pallone's bill
not a
that is in this
detailed
mix,
dossier
maybe
that will follow them throughout their
exclusively.
adult lives. They also deserve online
But
safety
it is a
legislation that will make
privacy-focused
the
bill.
internet safer, not
Pallone
put
has
their
also
data
in the
and
past
physical
pointed out the
safety
problems
at
with
risk.
KOSA
And I'm concerned
and
that mandating
how it might
third-party access
allow
to children's
restrictions
data
on
and
LGBTQ
requiring additional
speech
collection
and
sharing of sensitive
allow
data
the
before
FTC to kind
accessing
of dictate
content,
in a political
sending a
way
message or
what speech
downloading
is
an
allowed
app would
online.
move us in the wrong direction in the
And
fight for online privacy.
hopefully
Congress must
continues
also
to be
remember
an
that
ally in those
unfortunately
issues.
many kids find themselves in unsupportive or even abusive or neglected households. There can be real-world harm from allowing parents complete access and control over their teens' existence online.
This is such a good
Instead of
point.
shifting
I feel bad I
more
was talking
burden
over
onto
it.
parents and teens and putting ever more trust in tech companies, we can give everyone safer defaults and more control over their digital lives. We can also require companies to evaluate their algorithms.
One of the things
for
I've
bias
raised repeatedly
harms before making
is
our
just
kids
the
guinea pigs.
impact
We
of
can resist efforts
these
to
kinds of
preempt
laws
existing
on
protections
family
and let
relationships in
states
which
continue
the
to
parents have
respond to
antagonistic
rapidly
relationships with their
evolving
children.
technologies like
And
AI
I think,
chatbots
a
and
good
enforcing
percentage of
existing
kids
child
experience
safety and
this
privacy
unfortunate
laws. And
situation
we
where
can
their
all
parents are
stand
not
up for
supportive
independent
of
Federal
them,
Trade Commission.
actively
The FTC,
hostile
under both
to them,
Republican and
maybe
Democratic leadership,
because they're gay,
has
maybe because they
consistently
don't
been
agree with
America's
certain
strongest
life choices
champion
or other
against the
things
abuses
about
of
them,
all who seek to exploit our
and
nation's children and adults
allowing
and
invasive
profit
parental
both
tools
on and
will
offline.
allow
When
sort of
President
another
Trump
mechanism
attempted
for
to illegally
abuse
fire the FTC's Democratic
in
commissioners,
relationships
he
that
made
could
our
be
children less
fairly
safe
abusive.
online. My Republican colleagues want to further empower
I
the
know
FDC
when I was in high school, I knew
to protect
people like
kids and
this
teens,
that
they
were
must
suffering in
join
this way. I
Democrats
think a
in
lot of
standing
people
up for
do, and I feel like
bipartisan
lawmakers
and
often
independent
forget
FTC.
those
You
types
should
of
join us in
family
demanding
relationships also
Democratic
exist.
commissioners be reinstated. So I look forward to the discussion today on this important issue, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'll back the balance of my
Absolutely.
time.
Gentlemen,
I
yields
think,
back.
one of
Appreciate
the
that.
sort of
And
key
now
points
we're going to
from this
introduce
whole like
our
we should
witnesses
do
for today.
comprehensive data
Mr. Mark
privacy
Berkman,
argument
CEO of
is
Organization
that
for Social Media
adults
Safety.
deserve
Welcome, sir.
protections too. And so
Mr. Paul Eckes,
if we're only giving
Executive
privacy
Vice
protection to
President,
children,
Software
adults are
and
getting left behind.
Information
And a lot of
Industry
the
Association.
things that
Welcome.
we're
Kate
worried about with
Bruin,
kids about
uh,
their data being
Director
sold
of the Free
or
Expression
you know
Project, Center
just
for
perpetual
Democracy and
online
Technology.
surveillance, those
Welcome.
apply to adults as well.
And Mr. Joe
And
Thayer,
so more
Joe
comprehensive,
Thayer, Vice
universal
President of the
solutions
Digital
would apply to everybody
Progress Institute.
without all
Welcome
the
to all our
problems of
witnesses.
having to
So,
identify which
Mr.
users are
Berkman,
kids.
you're recognized for your 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, and thank you to the distinguished members of this committee for the opportunity to offer my organization's social media safety expertise at this historic legislative hearing to protect our children from online harms. My name is Mark Berkman, and I am the CEO of the Organization for Social Media Safety, the first national nonpartisan.
So the way these
consumer
witness
protection
panels work and how they're put together
organization
is
focused
usually
exclusively on
majority
social
staff. So Republicans would
reason
get to
for this
select the
legislative
majority of
hearing must be
witnesses. They may give
explicitly
the
clear.
minority one
Social
witness.
media is harming children. It is
And,
harming
the
millions
leadership
of
kind of
America's children.
works together
Up
to
to
figure out who they're going to
95% of
invite.
youth ages 13
It's usually
to
a mix
17
of civil
report using
society
a
and,
social media
and
platform,
business.
with more than a third
And we see
saying they
something like
use
that
social
on this
media
panel.
almost
Although I don't
constantly.
honestly know who invited
Nearly
who,
40%
but I'm
of
expecting there to
children
be like
ages
3
8
Republican
to
witnesses
12
and 1 Democrat
use
witness.
social media. Our own
But
study,
as we were talking about before the hearing started,
including over
interesting enough, a lot of
16,000
these
teens,
witnesses
we
were
have found
selected to
that
give honest
50%
feedback
self-report
and not to
using
like
social media
curate
for more than 5 hours daily.
a hearing
The
where
evidence
they just hear
based
nothing but
on
positive
credible
things about how
research
great they are and how great their bills
testimony
are.
in this very chamber shows severe,
Which always leads to
pervasive
a more
harms
interesting hearing
related
when
to
we actually have
adolescent
like a real
social media
discussion, right? I mean,
use.
this is what hearings are supposed to
Cyberbullying,
be. It's
harassment,
supposed to be an
predation, human
opportunity
trafficking,
to
drug
bring
trafficking,
in
violence,
experts and
fraud,
stakeholders
sextortion,
and actually
suicide,
get Congress to listen to
depression,
them.
cognitive
Um,
impairment, eating
and it's
disorders,
fantastic when
and
that
more.
actually happens, and
Social
really
media
unfortunate when
related
hearings are
harm
just
is far reaching,
one
impacting
set of
homes in
voices saying,
every
"Yep,
congressional
do this
district,
thing."
families of every demographic. But to understand the true toll, we need look no further than the many parents here with us today who have tragically lost a child to a social media-related threat. Sitting behind me is Rose Braunstein. Her son, Nate Braunstein, forever 15, died by suicide after suffering severe cyberbullying over social media. And Samuel Chapman. His son, Sammy Chapman, forever 16, died after ingesting fentanyl-poisoned drugs that he easily acquired from a drug dealer operating on social media. Rose and Sam and the many other angel parents who traveled from across the country to be here today have collectively spent years fiercely and bravely advocating for urgently needed legislative reform in the hope that Congress acts to ensure that other families do not have to suffer such tragedies. We owe them a debt of gratitude. The record on the extent and severity of the social media-related harm impacting our children is clear, yet the social media industry continues to fail to protect our children. Thank you to the brave work of whistleblowers and attorneys general across the country. We know that the industry.
So one of the problems that I hope that they
durable
have some
conflict of
discussion
interest when it
about
comes to
is
safety.
that,
Even in the
obviously
face
there
of
are
mounting
real
child
harms that
fatalities,
happen, and
social
there
media
are real reasons why there's
executives have
interest on
prioritized
online
growing
safety.
the number of child
But
users
I feel like there's like a
engaging in our
lack of
platforms
connection between
over our
solutions
children's
and the
safety,
harms
making a
and
federal
what
legislative
those
response
solutions might mean
absolutely essential
for
and
things like
critically
privacy
urgent.
insecurity.
social
And
media
so, like, for
industry has
example, when you're
been
talking
too
about
slow,
drugs
their
that are bought
solutions too
online,
ineffective, their
obviously there are
apathy
private channels
sadly
offline where
too
drugs
apparent.
sales happen.
And so we are grateful that the committee
And there are
today
probably drug
recognizes
channels
that a
online.
broad
And
approach with
the
multiple
only
tactics are needed.
solution in order to
Resources
stop
for
that is to
education,
start
accountability,
essentially
and rules for
surveilling private
platforms,
chats, which
research,
is
privacy
terrible
reports,
for privacy and
critically
security.
safety technology.
And so, like, there
I
has
would
to
like
be
to
some sort of
highlight
balancing or
Sammy's Law.
honest discussion
One of the
about
most
what
effective
harms
ways for
you're opening
parents to
up
protect
versus what
children
harms you're
is
trying
by
to solve,
using
and
third-party
targeting
safety
solutions
software,
to,
which
you
can
know,
provide
things that
alerts to parents when dangerous
will
content
actually
is
work, will
shared
not
through
cause a lot
children's
of
social media accounts,
problems,
enabling
and
life-saving
not lead
interventions
to more
at critical
harms.
moments. For example, if a
And
child is
I
suffering
think when you have an
severe
emotionally
cyberbullying
charged
via
subject like this,
social
it
media,
becomes
then a
unfortunate
parent
because a
who
lot of that
receives an
discussion
alert
seems to
through
be
third-party
sidelined
safety
because people
software
have real
can
pain
immediately
and,
provide
you know, they're dealing with real
critical
tragedy.
support. We know that this intervention is highly effective. Over the
Yeah, it's
last
hard
several
to
years,
convince
safety software
lawmakers to
companies have
care about
provided alerts to
hypothetical harms
parents
that might
that have
arise
protected
from a
millions of
bill
children,
versus
saving
the
numerous
actual harms
lives.
that are existing
Sammy's
in
Law
the
will
world that
finally
they
provide
feel like they
families
can
with this
address
option on
with
all
law.
major social
And as
media
you said, there's often
platforms,
not a lot
while
of
also substantially
clarity of
increasing data
how a bill
security
will
and
resolve a
child privacy over the
I
status
mean,
quo.
I've
We
heard
urge
people
this
say that
committee
age
to pass this
verification will
bipartisan, common
prevent
sense
child
legislation that
predators.
will
It's not
save
at all clear
lives.
how that would be the
American
case.
families
Examples
sat
like
for
this are
years
kind of abound,
living
right?
in quiet
We have
despair,
to do something because
watching
there's a real
social media
problem,
steal from their
but the
children's
solution has to be
potential
a real
and
solution to that
well-being.
problem
We
and
are
not
hopeful
just
that this
something
year,
that can be done.
this committee can join together and deliver the solutions families so desperately need. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so very much.
And
Now,
obviously, one of the
Mr.
reasons why we
Rogers,
work so hard in
for your 5
bringing
minutes.
new voices into Congress is because, you know,
Chairman Bill
there needs to be
Ranking
some
Member
balancing out.
Schakowsky,
There needs to be a
members of the
more full
subcommittee,
look
thank you
at
for the opportunity to appear before you
what's
today.
going on, because
My name is Paul
otherwise,
Lekis, and I
you know,
serve
you
as
get a lot of
Executive Vice
one-sided
President
sort of
for the
policy
Software and
solutions that
Information
don't
Industry
recognize the
Association.
harms that it might have for other
SIIA represents
communities.
nearly 400 organizations at the forefront of innovation, from startups to global leaders in AI, cloud computing, education, technology, and more. Our mission is to support policies that foster a healthy information
I don't think it's
ecosystem.
we're saying that, like,
That cannot occur
I think a lot
without
of people
responsible
involved in
data
lawmaking
use.
do care about their
We share the
constituents and they
subcommittee's
do
goal,
care
making the
about
internet a
these
safer
things,
place for all.
but they need to
We
be made
appreciate
visible,
that the
right?
subcommittee is taking a
If
fresh look at how
there
to
is a
achieve this.
hypothetical
We are
harm
here to urge
to
passage of
people who
bipartisan
are your
legislation
constituents
that protects
who
online
you
youth
are not
privacy
even like
and
aware,
safety.
you're not aware of that harm.
It's
How are
exactly
you
for
going
this
to plan
reason that
around
we
that?
work
And
closely with
so,
industry and
yes,
policymakers
they
to
should be
develop
more
our child and
thoughtful,
teen
but
privacy and
also,
safety principles in
we can help
2024.
help
Many of the
them in this
themes and
process
principles are
by
reflected in
bringing
provisions
your
of bills under
constituents to them,
consideration
by
today.
bringing people, by
I'd like
bringing
to highlight
stories
a
to
few
them
of
that they are
these.
not hearing otherwise.
First is data
Because DC
minimization.
can be a bit of an echo
Companies
chamber,
must
right?
be
Like I have the
required
same
to
couple
minimize the
of
collection of personal data from
ideas, the
youth
same
and restrict how
stories
that
get
data is
repeated, and
used.
it ends up
This is
creating
widely
consensus.
recognized as a best practice
But
employed by privacy
you know,
experts and is
that's
even
what
more
we're here to
important in
fix.
a youth context.
Also, I just
Second, we
noticed we
believe
have our
companies
first
should not
question.
advertise to youth based
Thanks,
on their
Silent
online
Rogue.
behavior, nor should they create profiles of youth for targeted advertising.
Just to
Intentional advertising
paraphrase,
should remain
do
prohibited
lawmakers
and
realize
ensure
that if their legislation goes through,
content.
it would
Third is
repeat
empowerment
mistakes of
and
prohibition,
transparency.
making people resort to
Legislation
going
should
on the dark side of
incentivize
the internet?
companies to provide easy-to-use tools that
I
allow
think it's a good
families
question,
control over their
and
settings
it's got
and
kind of a complicated answer.
transparency is
Basically,
key to building trust and helping families
there are
make
535 members of Congress, and they are
Finally, we
like
need
normal
national
people,
consistency.
and they have a
The internet
variety of
is not
level of
partitioned by state
engagement and
lines.
sort of like
The current
personal
patchwork of
viewpoints.
state regulations protect
And
users
some of
and
them, because
platforms
it's
and
complicated, are
consumers.
just legitimately not
Federal law must be
engaging
strong and
with
preemptive to
this
ensure all
on
American
any,
children
besides the
same high
surface
level of
level. Like
protection.
it can be very complicated.
As Congress considers new
Some of
legislation,
them,
a threshold
this
to
is like
strike the right
unintended,
balance between the
and they don't really
Constitution's
care.
protection of free
I think
expression,
one good
the
example of
governmental
that
interest
is
in youth safety. Thus
the
far, many online
attacks
safety laws
on
have failed
pornography
to strike that
sites.
balance. Several states have proposed
You know,
inherently content-based
we know that a lot of
regulations
people are
requiring
making the
platforms to
argument
judge
that it's
speech
true
as
that like
harmful or
if you set really
These
high
regulations
standards
trigger
that kind
strict
of
scrutiny, and
prevents
courts have
lawful
historically
sites,
struck
people
them
go to
down,
unlawful
being
sites where
overbroad
there's a lot more
and
illegal
infringing
material
on free
and
expression of
problematic
adults and
type of
minors,
stuff going on.
including content
and a lot of the sort of anti-porn lawmakers, they don't care. They see that as like whatever. Like they would just want to kill domestic industry. They don't really care about the consequences. Obviously, you had the Blackburn comment about, trans, and you had Heritage articles about turning kids trans. Like, in some ways, like it is intended to sort of push a lot of folks more underground. And, for other members, I don't think necessarily believe that the harms will happen. And for some members, they just don't fully understand our side. And that's where a lot of our work comes in trying to bridge that gap and connect to those members. So yeah, it's like member to member dependent.
In addition to creating new tools, we support modern.
Yeah, just to like,
we support
think about the
codifying
numbers here for a
FTC
second, right? There are
regulations,
435 voting members in the House. Each of those members is on, 2+ committees. They have maybe 3 to 5 legislative staffers helping them go through bills. There's thousands of bills considered every session. So there is an enormous amount of bills, an enormous amount to sift through, and often decision-making in Congress depends on who makes it easier for members of Congress to sift through that information, right? Because there are usually good and bad reasons to do almost anything. And if in this just sea of noise, all that Congress is seeing are the good reasons to do a bad thing, then they're likely to do it because, they're human beings. They are dealing with this enormous amount of information. And so it is really important to speak up, to get involved. Members of Congress, they do care what their constituents say. If you call an office and you're a constituent, they will, record what you have to say. And if it's a well-organized office, they'll then tell, the member, maybe in some aggregate form, what people are calling about. Like, they are trying to sift through this in general. But they're also people, they have their own ideas. And as Matt said, sometimes this is completely intentional. It's like transparently, no, the things that we think are bad about these bills, they think are good about them. But often, that's not the case. Oh, Kate's on.
Yeah, we should let Kate speak.
Ranking Member Schakowsky, Chair Guthrie, and Ranking Member Pallone for the opportunity to testify today. I am Kate Ruan, Director of the Free Expression Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology. Children will use online services for their entire lives. The subcommittee is right to...
We should message Kate and ask her to move the mic closer.
5 points essential to protecting children online. First, Congress should address root causes of online harms, including privacy. Comprehensive consumer data privacy legislation is the best way to protect everyone online. Currently, many online services business models are based on advertising sales powered by platforms' collection, use, and sale of personal information. This is harmful because it is privacy invasive, increasing the risks of data breaches. It is also deficient because it ignores better signals of what users value about online services by conflating engagement with user preference. Congress could realign this business model to benefit everyone through comprehensive privacy legislation. Enhancing children's privacy protections is also a laudable goal. Measures like COPPA 2.0 and Don't Sell Kids Data Act, crafted properly, would address some of the root causes of harm to kids online. But the bills under consideration today put the FTC in charge of enforcement. At the same time, the current administration is undermining its independence and ability to enforce the law fairly. As the committee considers how to protect kids, it must also ensure that the FTC executes its policies to protect all children and support the rule of law. Second, protecting children includes protecting their right to express themselves online. Minors use social media for everything, including to access news, communicate with family and friends, do their schoolwork, and create art. Children have First Amendment rights, and as Justice Scalia wrote, only in relatively narrow and well-defined circumstances may the government bar public dissemination of protected materials to them. We are encouraged that today's Kids Online Safety Act narrows the overly broad duty of care in an attempt to grapple with the tension between ensuring safety and protecting free expression. This is a difficult balance to strike, but it's preferable to flatly banning minors from accessing critical speech services like social media. We hope to work with the committee as the bill moves forward. Third, age assurance creates significant privacy risks that should be mitigated in legislation. Age verification and assurance raise significant concerns for all users' rights. To name just two, age assurance techniques mean either more collection or more processing of sensitive data, leading to increased risks of data breaches, which could include people's IDs or biometric information. Age assurance also chills online engagement with sensitive topics that people want to keep private. These concerns are not theoretical. Researchers at Georgia Tech have a forthcoming study demonstrating that the privacy and security concerns related to the use of age assurance techniques are playing out in real time, with increased risks for end users. If Congress nevertheless feels obligated to impose age assurance requirements, it should mitigate the risks by requiring the highest levels of privacy guardrails, including data minimization, deletion, reliance on high-quality data, transparency, and accountability. Fourth, creating good policy requires taking into account the perspectives of minors and their caregivers. CDT has conducted research asking a sample of teens and their parents about features of current child safety proposals. To give just two salient examples of their views, first, parents and teens expressed safety and privacy concerns with subjecting minors to age assurance methods, preferring parent-centered approaches that enable parents to declare their children's age. Second, we found that teens preferred algorithmic recommendations. Teens trust these feeds precisely because they feel that they are in control of that content. Knowing what parents and minors want and how they currently navigate their online lives will improve policymaking at both companies and in legislatures. Finally, Congress must not unduly restrict states' ability to act. Many of the bills at issue today would preempt state laws and regulations that simply relate to the provisions in the bills. We're concerned that the relates to standard will broadly preempt many existing state laws and emerging legislation that provide significant protections to children online, even if state law would provide better protections for kids. To make matters worse, public reporting indicates that Congress may be negotiating a deal to pair a kid safety package with the controversial provision preempting state laws on artificial intelligence. It would be ill-advised to broadly preempt states' ability to enact laws related to AI's impact without putting in place strong federal protections, at least equal in scope to any such preemption. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Now I'll recognize Mr. Thayer for your 5 minutes.
So Kate's kind of a rock star in our world. There is a Congressional Research Service that puts out like really easy to understand reports. I gotta turn my camera.
I'm Joel Thayer. I'm a practicing attorney, and I sit as president of the Digital Progress
I was relying on a few and I found out that they were written by Kate back when she was a staffer. Now she works at CDT and helps put together a lot of this stuff for lawmakers.
in tech policy is at the core of
Yeah,
our
the
advocacy.
Congressional Research Service,
Indeed, some of the bills
amazing
before you
resource.
today are based off
Most of the
frameworks
reports
we helped
are
develop.
freely available online.
This
A lot of
hearing,
them take
coupled
the
with
form
its
of like
bevy
1 or
of
2 page
bills,
reports
makes
that
a
are
few things
just
abundantly clear.
fantastic.
First, we
And
care about our children
and their more
and
in-depth
their
ones are
well-being
also
on
excellent.
and off their
It's
devices.
really high quality.
Second, we are no longer
It's an
satisfied with the
independent,
status quo. In so many ways,
not an
today's
agency,
youth
but it's an
are
independent.
robbed of their innocence
Um,
far more easily
it's
than ever
like part of the
before.
legislative branch, actually.
This
It's
is
part of
thanks to the ubiquity
but
of mobile
they have like
devices
great people.
and the services they host.
Strongly
Large
recommend if
tech
you're curious
platforms are
about stuff
inundating kids with
and
lewd
you
and
want a
lascivious
source of information
exhibitions
that's like going to
and
be
even
good, high
connecting them
level.
to child predators. This is well documented.
Yeah, if a
Senator
lawmaker
Marshall
is
Blackburn
curious
went as
about
far as
something, they can
describing
ask
Instagram
the
as the
CRS to give them a
premier
report,
sex
and then they
trafficking
like
site in this
it's
country.
like very easy to understand,
Despite what the
short
tech companies trumpet
summary,
in their press
where to go
releases,
for more
parents are
information.
left
It's
with
like
almost
if
no resources to
you're ever
combat
coming
their
upon a new
encroachments.
issue and you have absolutely no
Worse,
idea what's going
tech
on, you can
companies
usually
are,
find
in
a good
fact,
report
perpetuating
on
the problem.
CRS. And then
Therein
it's
lies
also
the rub.
interesting to know that lawmakers
Big
care
tech's
about that
form
too.
of child exploitation pays very well. Our children are not only big tech's users, but are also their product. Meta specifically
Wanted to go
targets young
through
users and
some
even
more
places a
comments we
monetary
got.
value of $270 on each child's head.
Yeah,
But the
Legit
issue is worse
Alpha.
still.
We
Children are
share
not
your
only
concerns
feeding big
about
tech
age
algorithms to
verification,
sell to
and that's why we got
advertisers,
the
but are
action going
also
on right
used to
now.
inform their
But
respective AI
I
programs.
think one of the big
AI
issues
programs
for
like
me
chatbots
is that
have already resulted in some
there's 3
child
reasons why
deaths
age
by
verification is
encouraging
bad:
kids to commit suicide.
privacy,
At
security,
DPI, We are
and
all
speech.
for winning the AI war.
And the privacy and
We do not
security
believe
aspect gets
children should
focused
serve
on
as
quite a
its
bit
casualties.
in that, like,
It is
obviously
why
there's a lot of
measures you are
hacks.
considering today
It
are
opens
so
you up to
essential
more
to both
scams
ensuring
and
that we
risks of
remain
bad
dominant in the
actors.
AI race, and we
When they get
protect our
your
most
sort of
vulnerable,
sensitive personal
our children.
information, also like you're
However, we
associated
cannot
with
ignore
what
the
content
long
you
road
view if
ahead to get these passed.
they're
Big
sort
tech's
of
lobby is not only fierce,
logging an
but
ID
also unrelenting.
with
They
your
admire the
visit to
validities
whatever
of
site
these solutions while
that has
instilling
huge
fears
privacy
of consumer
concerns.
forfeiting privacy and the stifling
But
of speech.
I think our
This is
over
all a
reliance on
farce.
these sort of talking
As to
points
privacy,
is
I say
problematic
consider the
because
source.
there is
Courts,
theoretically
regulators, and
a
consumers
solution to that
have found
problem in
every one of
having
these
like a
companies
zero
to have
knowledge
violated
proof
their
age
users'
verification
personal
system.
privacy.
It's being
Take
worked
Apple,
on
for
right now,
instance, that
and
proclaims your privacy is
industry
a
seems to be kind of
fundamental
like
human
lining
right.
up behind it because they see it as an
Discovery from a
easy
class
out for a lot
action
of
lawsuit, however,
issues they're
reveals that since
facing and
October
concerns.
2011,
And
Apple had
if
routinely
they start
recorded
pushing
users'
it,
private
then we need to
conversations
also
without their
have
consent and
adequately
disclose those
explained
conversations to
the speech
third parties,
concerns
such as
about sort of
advertisers.
walling
Some of these
off parts of
disclosures
the
include
internet,
private conversations
sort of
with their
suppressing
doctors. So much
speech
for
that is
privacy being a
like
human
you
right.
have to be age verified
One
to
of Google's
view
privacy
and
violations was
stuff
so
like that.
egregious, the
So,
Federal Trade Commission created a first of its kind
we've
settlement
been ramping up a
requiring
lot of
Google to
our
implement a comprehensive privacy
education on
program
that on the
it
Hill,
unbelievably
and
didn't
talking
already
with
have.
lots of people.
Social media
Jabron and
companies
I
do
are
not
the
fare
Fact
much
Feature
better.
Hill team,
Again, an FTC
and then
report found that social media companies
doing our
like
best
Snap,
to
Meta,
make
and
sure
TikTok
that folks
have
really
all
recognize
engaged
that
in
those are
vast
significant
surveillance
threats as
of
well. That
users
even if
with
you
lax
had
privacy
perfectly
controls
private
and
age
inadequate
verification,
safeguards for
you would
kids
still
and
face
teens.
internet that
Point being,
is
these
now
companies are
fractured
hardly
and
an
segmented
authority
based on how
on
old you
proper
are
privacy
or
hijackers.
whether or not you
As to free speech,
are
I
able to
stand on
get the
shoulders of
proper
Third Circuit
tokens and
Judge Paul
identification
Meany,
to
who
access those
poignantly
things,
stated that big tech smuggled
which has a
constitutional
lot of
conceptions
implications
of a free
for
trade in ideas into a digital
what your
culture
income
of
levels are,
illicit
what your
loves
technology
that leap and boil
sophistication
with
levels
no
are,
oversight,
things like that.
no
So,
accountability, and no
yeah, those are all
And
also
it's
equally
true.
problematic.
Big tech has leveraged the admittedly
Yeah,
messy
what
First
gets
Amendment
classified as
jurisprudence
adult
to turn our
content is
bulwark for free
incredibly
expression
important,
into a
and
sword
in
to
some
cut down
cases,
laws they frankly don't like.
LGBTQ content is
But here's the good
explicitly treated
news.
as such.
The Supreme Court
And
is creating a
so
clearer
it's
pathway for
very
these
important
measures. To
that
start, in TikTok v.
either we don't
Garland,
just
the Supreme
follow
Court categorically
what we're
rejected
preferring,
TikTok's argument
or
that the
they
mere
are really
regulation of an
careful about what we do.
algorithm raises First Amendment scrutiny.
And I think
Even
one of
better,
the
the
things that
court
we're
clarified
seeing
that a law
this year with the
regulating a
FTC
tech
is that
platform doesn't invite First
even
Amendment
if you
review
have
if the
pretty
law's primary
reasonable
justification is
regulators
not
for a long
content-based,
time,
even if its
the
ancillary justifications are.
wrong people get put in
In
those
sum,
positions,
the
and
bills before us
suddenly
today, particularly the
they
App
start
Store
interpreting
Accountability
things
Act,
in
the
very
Screen
different
Act,
ways.
and the
So
Kids Online Safety Act
this
have
will
taken
be
these
a threat.
considerations
If
into
we
account
do
and are
mandatory age
poised to resolve many of the
verification
challenges
for adult
parents are
content,
facing in
the
today's
definition of
digital
adult
age
content
with
could
respect to
change
child
someday,
safety. With
and
that, I
could be a
appreciate the
huge
committee's time
problem.
for inviting me
And
to
even
testify, and I look forward to all of your questions and working with
there's
you
the problem
further.
of like LGBTQ
Thank you
content
so
getting
much.
picked up. There's
Now
also
I'll
sort of like
begin
just
the
a lot of
questioning and
like
recognize myself for 5 minutes.
collateral damage from
Mr.
something like age
Berkman,
verification.
for
If you
too
need to be age
long,
verified
the
to
narrative
view
has
adult
been that
content, and
online
that's
safety
broadly
is solely a
true. I
parent's
mean, YouTube is
responsibility.
pretty
But
aggressive
as you
about
know,
classifying
80% of
stuff as
parents
adult
say the
content. And it can
harms now
swear
outweigh
within the
the
first like 5 minutes
benefits,
of your video,
and
it'll
they feel
typically get
completely
defined as adult.
outmatched by these highly complex
Small things like
platforms
that, you
designed
can
to keep their
see
kids
on
hooked.
social media platforms,
My bill, the
TikTok and
Kids
YouTube,
Online
I mean, really across
Safety
the board,
Act,
but
again,
particularly
it's
on
a
YouTube, it's
discussion
really
draft,
obvious that people are already
fundamentally
adjusting
flips
how
this
they
dynamic.
create
We
content
require platforms to
in
enable the
order to
strongest
avoid
safeguards by
running
default,
into
rather than forcing
issues with
parents
age
to dig through
classification that could hurt their
multi-layered
ability to make money off
menus
of their
to find
videos.
these critical
Right? And so you
tools.
see how like
Can
these
you
sorts of
explain
regulations
why
can
shifting the
put
burden of
pressure on
safety
speech, even if they're
from the
not
parent
directly
to the
banning a certain
platform
kind of
can
speech.
change the
So you're
trajectory
going to
of
get
this dire
less
safety
adult
crisis?
content
Thank you
however
for the
that's
question,
defined,
Chairman.
if there is this
And I think
burden
it's a
of
very
variance
apt
in
one. You are
between
correct that parents across
users
the
and their
country
code.
are frustrated, they are saddened, and they feel defeated.
Legit
For
Alpha, I
hundreds of
100% agree
thousands
with
of
you in that,
families,
like, if we have to have age
there are 12
verification,
schools
it has
teaching
to, in my
essential social
opinion,
media
be
safety skills.
open
So we
source
can
zero
hear from
knowledge
families
proof,
on the ground,
privacy respecting and secure.
nationwide.
But I would,
Children are using
I'd still have some
multiple
problems or a lot of problems with the
platforms,
speech
many hours a
aspects.
day
But
with
like, if I
many
have to
different
face,
teachers,
you know, the
and
best
they are
of a
not
worse
set to be
situation,
safe by design.
you know,
And so we do believe that the provisions
at least
you
that
put forward
seems
in
to
your
be available.
legislation would materially
But I
move
do want to
safety
get
forward
to
and ensure that
Silent Rogue's
parents
question
are
about
not battling
why not just
for their
going to
children's safety
ADPA or
alone.
ADPRA
And I
or
would
some sort
note,
of
saying
comprehensive
these laws,
privacy.
well, would give parents
That's kind of
one
complicated.
unified tool
There
to
is
help
a
maximize
sort of
safety. And so that is why we've
wide
supported that
range
bill.
of industry
very
interests that were lobbying hard
Mr.
against
Thayer, in
privacy.
your
It's
testimony,
also
you
very
state that
complicated
KOSA, along
and
with many of
politically
the
very
other bills
complicated.
considered today, will resolve
There are members that care
many of
very
the
deeply
challenges
about
parents are
passing
facing
comprehensive
in today's
privacy,
digital
and they've
age
gotten
with
close
respect to child
several
safety.
times.
KOSA includes
But
numerous other protections such as parental controls.
I think there were a lot of
default
hurt feelings in the
settings,
last
laws,
collapse
design
of
features,
this.
and mandatory
What
audits.
happened, and
Can
like
you
a lot of
explain
this,
on
I think
how,
all of this is
how KOSA
publicly reported,
will
but
empower parents to protect their kids
there
online
was
and will hold big
important
tech
sort of
accountable?
core areas or
Well, you
issues
took
of
the
the
word
bill,
right out of my
and one
mouth.
of
The
them
key word
was
there is
around civil
accountability,
rights
and right now there
protection.
is absolutely none. At this point,
Heritage
we have to
and some
rely
Republican
basically on their
lawmakers
musings
sort
via
of
press releases
agreed
or
to
in
take
other
that
terms of
out.
service that we
In a
hope
Republican
they will adhere
Congress, they
to.
thought they could sort
And
of do
we
that,
have actual data to
but
support
it
that. At this
forced
time,
all the
TikTok,
Democrats
Meta, and the
to
like all have
essentially
so-called
start turning
parental
against the
protections,
bill
and they all have failed miserably.
because
The problem is that
you know there
there
were
are frankly
aspects
no
that were
laws
not
that actually
fantastic that we
articulate
didn't
what their
love that
goals
were part of the
are and
compromise, and
what they are
without the civil rights
responsible for.
protections, it was
Things
no
like
longer a good
KOSA,
deal.
what I
And
prefer, which I
so
prefer over
it collapsed. I
more
think
general
members
statutes,
have a lot of hard
articulates
feelings
clearly
about it, and I
what
don't know that
these
it's going to be
companies are
raised
responsible
again
for
in a
doing
comprehensive
and when they
manner
run afoul of those responsibilities and
this
when they can be
Congress.
enforced.
It
At
might
this point,
after
they have no
midterm
sort of
elections, they
Damocles
might
over
try
their head,
again.
and
But
even if they
yeah,
did,
that's the way
they
of
wouldn't
a
be
lot
able
of these
to cut
comprehensive
it
bills
down to
sometimes.
get the results that we need to protect kids and protect parents. So KOSA will go a long way in ensuring that the status quo is not going to be the status quo forever.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lekus, in your testimony, you call for online tools that empower children, teens, and families. In your view, are KOSA's requirements for platforms to implement new safeguards and parental controls workable?
Thank you for that question. In our sense, and we're still reviewing this with our members, but the tools that would be required under KOSA are definitely workable. There's a number of companies that have implemented some of these tools already, but we need them to be implemented across the board. We need to protect all children on all platforms. The other thing I would say about KOSA is the requirements to establish procedures and processes and so forth seem really well designed to address the constitutional concerns that have come up with respect to earlier drafts of this legislation.
Very good. Thank you very much. I yield back, and I'll recognize now.
So Billy Ruckus is important because he's the House Republican leader of KOSA. He's also, I think, been a bit more open, well, a lot more open than Senate side to our sort of complaints and criticisms of the bill, which is what led to the changes you see in the House. Some good, some bad. But it is interesting that he seems to be digging in on those changes.
What is the biggest gap that you see right now?
The split between Joukowsky and Bilirakis doesn't really bode well for KOSA. The fact that Joukowsky is pushing for the Senate version and Bilirakis is pushing for the House version. These are these like big bipartisan bills are very hard to do if there isn't bipartisan support by committee chair or he's chair of the subcommittee on innovation, data, and commerce. If there's those tensions, it's very difficult to get something like that.
That are currently before the committee. We are
Still,
concerned
we
that
should
the
be
religious
pushing back on this, and there's a lot of these bills here. Some of them may have less baggage to this.
Specifically protect kids, and also state laws that have general protections that also apply to children. So state UDAP laws, state tort laws, and also state comprehensive privacy laws that have specific protections for children, including enhanced protections for children's data as sensitive data. Texas, for example, protects all children's data as sensitive data at a higher standard than the current COPPA does. The current preemption standard under the bills that we're considering today would likely preempt that law as applied to kids.
So Schakowsky went to
finish this process
Kate
with the relates to standard
with
in place,
a
we will
question
likely
that
wind up with children having
at
less
least the staff knew
protection
there was a
at school level
large
than they
sort
do
of
today, and we will
alignment
have failed to do our
because
jobs. So I think that's one of
CDT,
the
as well
biggest
as like a
gaps
lot of
that
us, are
I
very
see.
against
I
preemption.
also see that there is
And so
not enough in any of the bills
she's
that have
attacking
verification.
the
We do
changes
not see
Billy Rockus
sufficient
made by
guardrails
attacking the
to
preemption
protect and
edition,
require
which I think we
privacy
would
and
also
security
be against.
practices within the age assurance
But
requirements, and to
preemption
ensure
was
that any age
inserted
assurance techniques
into
that
the
are
House
used
COPPA
are fairly
2.0
and equitably accessible to everyone who has to
and
go through the age assurance process.
KOSA.
You know, when I
And
listen to you, I think there are so many things.
I know that
need
Markey,
to
who
be
is the
changed
Senate lead
as soon
on
as
COPPA
possible.
2.0, is like
And the
pissed
idea
about the preemption
that the
language and has already made a statement
not
about
do
that.
anything in the legislation is quite shocking to me. And so I just really think that we have to go back to the drawing board and make sure that we know. The other thing I wanted to ask you is about LGBTQ kids and making sure that they have some authority to be there, to be heard. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Ranking Member. We are significantly concerned that any censorship incentives within some of the bills that are before us today and within the Senate's version of KOSA could lead to the censorship of LGBTQ speech, access to that content by LGBTQ kids, and speech by LGBTQ kids, because oftentimes that speech can be miscategorized as sexual speech or as speech that falls into categories that platforms look to take down because they are concerned about enforcement and about harms to children related to accessing sexualized content. Our second concern with respect to that is that the bills at issue today delegate authority to enforcement authority to this current FTC, which has demonstrated its willingness to target groups that it disfavors, including transgender families, including transgender people, their families, and their caregivers. If we do not have an independent FTC that is enforcing the law fairly as it applies to all children and protects all children, we have significant concerns about how these bills would operate in practice, even if the way that they are currently constituted is neutral and would protect everyone.
So appreciated. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
General Lady yields back. Now recognize the chairman of the full committee.
So that's actually really interesting, and
Thank you.
I think good
appreciate
news
that, and
that
thank you
Schakowsky,
all for
who
being here.
I think we
So,
think
Mr.
is
Bergman,
largely
there's
against
no
us on
single
KOSA,
solution for
is
protecting
asking
kids
the
online.
right questions
And
to
that's
the right
why we're
witness
advancing a
about
comprehensive strategy
impacts on
of nearly
speech.
24 bills that
And
build in layers of protection
and that
from
was a
age
great answer by
verification
Kate.
and COPA
And
2.0
so
privacy protections
hopefully
to
that stuff
parental
is breaking
tools and
through.
default by design.
I guess
Can you
we'll
speak
see.
to the urgency
But,
of this moment and
but
the
yeah,
need for
that was a good
Congress to protect
interaction.
kids and children and teens online?
Yes, I appreciate the question. We're seeing still an alarming disconnect in terms of the awareness of how
Also,
severe
glad to
and
get the FTC
pervasive
point
the
in,
harms of
because that's,
social media
I think,
are.
really important to
We are seeing
why a lot
millions
of
of
these
children
bills
across the
are
country
just
harmed. We are
a
on the
terrible idea,
ground
especially right now.
working with families, and the actual data is absolutely stunning, and the stories are heartbreaking. And so I appreciate the approach taken by the committee. We need to find consensus and pass meaningful social media safety legislation this year to protect our children.
Thank you. And to add to that, Mr. Likas and Mr. Thayer, can you explain why we need a layered, comprehensive strategy rather than just one single bill?
Thank you for the question, and I think the question sort of beckons the answer. That is that individual layers require different policy solutions. Like the same thing that would apply to a social media company may not be apropos to maybe something on the App Store layer, or even the operating system layer or device layer. Each one of these folks have a role to play, or each actor has a role to play, and every policy solution should be attuned to what those particular roles are.
So legit alpha, I think that's a really good point you make about
Whether it's privacy, competition,
censorship
or
and the
even
Hays
child
Code. I
safety,
think
has
one
to
of the
be,
big problems that we
make
see see
sure thought
is
through.
the
So,
sort of
again,
self-censorship,
in full agreement, with what
where,
I've heard
you
today.
know,
It
if a
seems
law
to be
comes
the case
out
that
and it's
each individual layer requires
unclear what it
special
means,
sensitivity to
and tech
what those
companies
particular
are
areas
sort of,
do,
you know,
and
scared of government
needs
and
a policy
regulation, they're
solution
more
that
likely to
meets
sort
them
of
where they
like
are.
Good, thank you,
go
Mr.
above and
Ramos.
beyond
Thank you for the question. I
what
think
is
the
necessary,
overall goal that
and maybe
seems to be
even,
the
you
consensus
know,
of everyone in this room is we need to protect youth online.
self-enforce
We need
things
to
that would be
improve
unconstitutional under the
privacy
First
protections
Amendment
and
if
safety protections
challenged.
for youth.
And so you have a
I
situation
think
where you really have to
stepping
rely
back and
on
looking
like
at all the different
third-party
components
civil
here,
society groups to
and
make the
trying
First
to
Amendment
identify
challenges,
what's the best way to do each of these components is a really
and,
smart
you
way to
know,
proceed.
potentially cowed tech companies that
Congress
are
has
like
been
over
debating,
censoring and
legislation in
overreacting to this
space
legislation.
for years.
I don't know that
and it's
that
urgent
sort of
to
worst
move
case
forward now,
scenario is
so
going
we
to
appreciate
happen
your perspective on that
because
committee.
we have
Thank
seen
you. And also, Mr. Thayer, in my opening
at least
statement emphasized that
some
a child
industry
that- a law
associations
that gets struck down
be
by
very
courts won't protect a
aggressive
single
in
child.
suing on these
From a
First
legal
Amendment
and
grounds.
constitutional perspective, why is it so critical
But, you know,
that
you can't really
Congress would
trust
step
big
in to
tech.
establish a single,
So,
uniform national standard?
they're just
And
going to
how
act in
does
their
this package
best
of
interest at the
bills
end of the
from,
day.
learn from
So
the
I
defense
don't
of
know
laws
that you
that
can
have
trust
failed
them to
judicial
really
review?
fight on behalf of marginalized communities
As
or
someone that really
LGBTQ
does
communities or
appreciate
other
the structure of
folks
our Constitution,
if it
and
doesn't
especially,
make sense to
the
their
federal structure that they've
business.
created, and again, leveraging
That's another
the
big
insights
reason why
from,
we've been raising
from
alarms about
different
these
justices,
bills.
much smarter legal minds than my own.
And
Justice
you said
Brandeis, for
something at the
instance,
beginning that
said
I think
that
is worth
the
going
states
into,
are the
which is that
laboratories
a
of
vague
our
requirement
democracy, but
can
at the
be
same
worse than a
time,
specific.
those
A
laboratories
specific
yield
one
results.
is very
And I
likely
think
to
what we've
be,
seen in the past 10
as you
years,
said,
absent
found to be
federal
unconstitutional by a
insight
court
onto
and
as to
struck down.
what
But a vague
Congress
requirement
actually wants or what
that
the national
simply
standard is, has
creates a
allowed
situation where
for a lot
companies
of these
are
experiments to go all the way
concerned that
through
they
the
might
courts.
be
The courts
violating
have evaluated each one of
will
these
encourage them
standards
to
and
adopt
has
a
given,
maximum
as
risk
I said in my
perspective
opening
in
testimony,
order to
a
minimize their
pathway for
liability.
Congress to
And
actually
so
set those standards. Because
it is
part of
actually
that
very important. And
experiment
right, like
is not just only seeing
we saw
where
like a
Congress
porn
can step
ban
it's
in
seeing the
Michigan.
limitations
It
that states
specifically
have
said
in
you
fully
can't
protecting
depict trans
children.
people in
A
any way, which is
child
horrific. But that
a
would
child
almost
in
certainly get
Texas
struck
should
down.
be equally
What's
protected as a
perhaps more
child in
dangerous is a
California or in
vague
Iowa and
requirement
everywhere else.
that
And that's
it
where I
has to be
think the
interpreted.
federal
Companies
standard
has to
is
be interpreted by the
probably
FTC,
preferable in many
and that
cases. But
will
again,
lead to
that comes from
more.
a lot of the insights that we're getting from states.
Okay, thank you. And that concludes my questions. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis. Data brokers collect and sell billions of data points on nearly every consumer in the United States, including children. And while I believe that
I love that
privacy
Pallone is
the
just
preferred
laser
path to
focused on these
addressing the
privacy
risks of
issues.
Data brokers. I also believe it's imperative to do what we can now to prevent data brokers from
I
exploiting
think
the
like that is
personal
going to make a
data
very
of our
brief
kids.
appearance.
So I have a series of questions for Ms. Ron. If you could just answer them quickly, because otherwise I won't get through them. First is, why is it so important that kids and teens are able to enter adulthood without an extensive profile already built of their online activities and inferences about who they are?
Thank you, Ranking Member. Well, kids are growing up online, right? They are sharing all of their information all of the time. They are engaging constantly, and their data is also being collected constantly in ways that they might not understand or even be aware of or be developmentally capable of making decisions about. They don't know they're making a trail that's going to follow them forever. But what's most important is that children are not commodities, and their lives and privacy have to be respected. Ensuring that their information cannot be bought and sold by shady data brokers will meaningfully protect their privacy in general and their ability to enter adulthood without a profile that will follow them for the rest of time.
Well, thank you. Now, many of the bills being considered for this hearing today contain broad preemption clauses, and in many cases preempting any state laws that relate to the legislation. So the next question is, what are some unintended consequences of such broad preemption? Could common law and product liability claims currently being used to hold tech companies accountable be impacted by that?
Yes, absolutely. We are concerned that currently extant state protections that protect everyone will no longer be able to protect children across all 50 states. One other thing to note is a lot of the bills today focus on legacy platforms and services that have existed for a while, and they do not focus on emerging technologies like generative AI. If we institute a broad relates to preemption standard across all of these bills, we run the risk of preempting states' ability to act on emerging technologies quickly.
Okay. Many of the bills being discussed today also have provisions that expand access to the data of teens, both to third parties and to parents in the name of increased safety. And while I encourage parents and teens to have conversation about teens' online activity, that also needs to be balanced against teens' rights to privacy. So as we consider the bills before us, how do we best balance privacy and safety? Are there any specific provisions in these bills that pose a threat to kids' privacy?
Absolutely. Parents and kids, families, need tools to help them navigate their online lives, and CDT fully supports giving parents those tools and children those tools. But we are concerned about any provisions that give parents access to and control over the content of kids' communications. One thing that KOSA, that the current version of KOSA does well, is it ensures that parents and that platforms.
Polona's doing such a good job of teasing out some of the most important issues with these bills.
Of COPPA 2.0, for example,
and bringing the conversation back to like privacy, which he's a huge champion of.
To delete their kids'
Kids have
data
privacy
and
rights too.
and to delete content that they may have created. When we talk to parents and kids about whether they wanted to have those sorts of tools, parents told us that that seemed overly burdensome for parents, and kids told us that seemed overly invasive to them. Moreover, as you noted in your opening statement, not all kids are growing up in families that are perfectly supportive, and some kids are growing up in situations where they don't have families at all.
Well, that's sort of my last question,
Yeah.
because I know we're going to run out of time. But unfortunately, the reality is that there are parents who abuse or neglect their children. And for these kids, access to safe spaces online can be critical. So the last question is, how do we foster healthy connections online while ensuring that kids and teens are protected? Are there potential risks to children and teens in dangerous or hostile family environments caused by the measures in these bills?
Well, when we talked to teenagers about how they use, for example, direct messaging services, they told us that what they really want are more controls over who gets to message them. So the ability to reduce their own visibility online. Congress could also incentivize more friction or speed bumps in interaction with kind of unknown profiles or unknown adults. We also took note that one of the bills today would restrict access to ephemeral messaging. Now, while it's understandable that in some circumstances ephemeral messaging could be linked to harm, we also want to note that it could also be used to protect kids' privacy. So, for example, children might communicate with each other, teens might communicate with each other through racy text messages. Ephemeral messaging could reduce the likelihood that those messages be used for abusive purposes like non-consensual intimate image distribution at a later date. Ephemeral messages could also be helpful for children who have relationships with domestic violence victims or who are domestic violence victims themselves to ensure safety and to ensure their ability to communicate privately without risk to their physical harm, to their physical selves.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman yields back. We'll recognize the vice chairman of the.
Kate made so many good points there, and I'm glad that Pallone
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
focused the
Question for
conversation
Mr.
on
Berkman. This
those
has to do
areas. It also highlights sort of like
recommendations
a
you might
fundamental
have for,
area of
adults who are
disagreement where
engaging with some
I think
self-harming
some
behavior.
parent groups
In
and
your
some folks
testimony,
think
you cited
that
some statistics
having
about
absolute
the
surveillance on their
self-harm,
kids is what's going to keep them
cyberbullying,
safe,
eating
or some
disorders,
form of
and,
surveillance. And
that
uh,
particular topic. And we've
we just
also
don't agree
learned
with that.
various
And,
court
you know, for a
filings
lot of
that social media
situations,
companies would know
it's
about this.
making them less
They know
safe,
this is going on.
including what Kate mentioned.
Not
If
long ago, we had some hearings with
two
TikTok,
teens
and,
sext
we
each other,
learned
that's
that
like not a
they had
great
sent
decision,
13-year-olds
but
even more
that
content
decision
on
can have a lot more
self-harm,
repercussions
eating
if
disorders, and that came
that
out
message is
also
being
that Meta
monitored by a tech
had pushed
employee,
body
if
image
those
content,
messages are being sent to a
when
parent
teens
and that
had
parent's
expressed some
account is
dissatisfaction with
hacked
their body. So
and
these social
it leaks on the
companies,
dark
they know
web.
about this.
In
And
situations
I dealt with this in a
where
previous
those
life
are
as a state
disappearing, where kids are
legislator
making at
with,
least less bad
some mental health
choices, like
issues. And I just want to ask you, from your
you know, those choices
perspective,
should be respected, and
what
like
recommendations
also
or
just that is
guidelines can
they
you
are
offer
minimizing their harm.
for this body here to address this
And
growing
similarly, like, you know, I think kids need private spaces to talk about issues that they either can't or not ready to talk to their parents about, and like having parents be able to like surveil those conversations are also like very harmful and problematic. And so I think that like there's not enough grappling with what it means when you have tools that's constantly monitoring everything a kid does online, including their conversation.
And so one
Yeah,
of
there's a bit of a tension
the
between the
bills that
framing
would
of
really support here
kids'
is a bill
safety
called
or
Sam's
kids'
Law,
rights
and that
and
would
families'
give
or
parents,
parents'
families
rights.
access to what we
And
call
I
third-party
think,
safety
as
software,
you said,
software
these things
not
often get elided in
connected
these
to the social media
conversations. That, like,
platforms
there are real
themselves
trade-offs
that can
here.
provide
And I
families
think,
with
again, a really important
critical,
point is
life-saving
surveillance
alerts,
is not just like
like
a
eating
positive
disorder
safety trait. Like,
related
I remember
content
in the early
involving
2000s, people talked about
suicidal
it in
ideation,
terms of like the
so
war on
that
terror
families can
and
provide
like, oh, surveillance,
life-saving
it's
support
making us
at the
safer, but it's
exact
a
right
sacrifice. But
critical
really,
moment, which
surveillance is not
right now they are
doesn't make
not
people
getting,
safer.
and because of
There's
that,
certain
we are
situations in
seeing
which
fatalities.
having to disclose
So
certain
engagement
information
with
might
the
make
parents
people
and,
safer,
and
but
that
there's no
third-party
like
software
objective
is a
trade-off here.
help.
Third-party
Surveillance
software, and I would
creates
note, it
inherent vulnerability,
significantly
creates
adds to
all of
privacy in a
these points of
significant way
failure
over
in
the
which
status quo.
you become
This is
vulnerable and
technology
susceptible
that we now
to
have
data
that
breaches,
can
hacks,
limit
or
alerts to
in the case
parents
of, for example,
on a
a
list
parent
of
who's
harms that
mistreating their
every
child,
member of this
not
body
a hack
agrees
at all,
on,
but
and
just
that children
surveilling them,
vitally
right?
need
Preventing
support
them
to
in a
protect
legal
themselves
way
from.
Thank you for that. I'm going to come back
from
to you here in just a second,
accessing,
but I want to
private
get a question
conversations
to
with
Mr.
people who might
Thayer
be able to
here.
help.
We
So these
really
are like,
need
this is
real
these are tough
consequences
issues,
for bad
and
actors.
it's
And
complicated and
in the
messy, but
enforcement that goes with it. And
oftentimes,
all the bills we
the
consider
conversation
today,
really skews
they
towards
place
a framing around
regulatory
families' rights
obligations
or
on tech
parents' rights.
platforms and include both
And children's
FTC's
rights are
first fine
often forgotten,
authority
partially
and
because they're
authorizes
children,
state
and
attorneys
so it's
general
hard for them to advocate for
to
themselves.
engage with this.
Parents
First of
can
all,
show up
do you
hearings,
see
they
that as
can
adequate?
talk to the members of
And can you
Congress.
discuss the benefits of these
Children struggle to
enforcement
do those
tools and
things.
how they will actually be used to hold some of these tech firms accountable?
Yeah, our DPS.
And I will just
will
highlight that,
obviously
like,
be playing,
kids' voices are very important in this
very
debate,
special role in
and
terms of
so
consumer protection,
we've
as
been
does
doing
the
our best
FTC.
to
I think
amplify
one value
them.
of these bills is that there are specific
And not
authority
just us, but I
statutes
think
as opposed to
ACLU
general
and
authority statutes,
CDT have also
which means you can
done a
target
tremendous
the
amount of work
specific
in this
harms
space.
on both the
ACLU,
federal and and the
who
state
a
level
much
on
larger
exactly
organization has
what,
been able to
on what they want. And in terms of
host like kids
combining
lobby
this,
days where they fly kids
you
in.
have the
It's,
FTC,
it's
which
really,
has a
really
giant
awesome.
remit already. They have a national remit, whereas state attorney generals can react almost in real time, or if not very, very close to the local issues that they can observe. So I've worked very closely with state attorney generals' offices in California, Texas, and Louisiana, and I can tell you that they look at these statutes, and they look at these statutes in a very comprehensive way, and they also look at it from the perspective of protecting their populations in particular. So again,
So
in my view,
this
you
is
need
like a
both. You
pretty
can't just
specific
put
issue,
all the reliance
but
on
one
the
of the
FTC. You're going
problems
to need some
with
state attorney generals
KOSA
looking at
last
this
time
as well.
around was
Thank you.
that
Mr. Bergman, I got 20 seconds left.
state
Any
attorneys
input on
generals
that?
were able to enforce it, which
Yeah, we
is
agree. You need a
problematic because
robust
there are a lot
enforcement
of quite
regime.
bigoted
State attorneys general kind of added
state
to that
attorneys
regime.
general. And
We
so
have
this was
leadership
something that was
across the
removed
country
from the prior
Mississippi,
version in the
Illinois,
last session, and it
Arkansas,
was
and California attorneys general
only the FTC was going to
prosecuting
be able
in
to
an
enforce it.
effective
And
way
now we've seen that the
violations of law
FTC
by
is
the social media
also
industry
now
that
going
has impacted
after
children. They are
gender
doing
affirming
it
care for
collaboratively,
minors.
which
It
means
is
more
now just as
resources. That
partisan
means effective
as states
enforcement. That
attorneys
means saved
general.
lives.
And so this
Thank you,
was
Mr.
this was
Bergman.
a
Mr.
point
Chairman, I yield back.
of like apparent
Gentleman
progress,
yields
like a
back
problem
now.
that was
Recognize
apparently
Ms.
resolved, and now we're
Casper from the
backsliding
great
onto it.
state
We're
of
saying, well,
Florida.
not
You're
only
recognized for
is
5
the
minutes of question.
FTC that has been
Well, thank you,
thoroughly
Mr. Chairman.
compromised
Thank
going
you
to be
for teeing
enforcing
up
this,
action
now
on
also state
to
AGs are
address
going to be
the
enforcing
privacy
it,
intrusion,
which is
surveillance,
concerning.
and targeting of kids online, and the growing
Yeah, there's a
harms
joke
due to
that
the
AG
malign
stands for
design
aspiring
of
governor,
online apps
and a lot of
leading to
AG's
physical and
offices are
mental
filled with people
harm to
who
young
have
people.
much
I wanna
higher
thank the
political
witnesses,
aspirations,
but
which is unfortunate
the
because,
panel is
you know,
missing a parent.
obviously
There are
it's a
many here
position you
today who
want,
could have
sort of like
testified.
straight
You're missing a
shooters,
young
people who are
person.
just, you know,
There are
doing their
other
best
young
to
people here who
enforce the
could have
law
testified. You're missing a
in a
psychologist or
positive way.
pediatrician.
And you
And
know,
one of the many
I will point out
whistleblowers,
that
former tech
Pam
company
Bondi was a
employees, to
Florida
testify on
AG,
the
and so
insidious
you can kind of
scheme
see the types of
to
people that
addict and exploit children,
it attracts.
even as tech
Obviously,
company
Texas has Ken
executives
Paxton,
knew
who
the
is now
harm
running
to kids.
for
And it was 2021 when
Cornyn
Francis
Senate
Haugen
seat.
The
And
Facebook
so,
whistleblower testified before Congress.
a lot
that,
of AGs use their
Facebook and
office
Meta built a
to
business
try to
model that
generate
prioritizes its profit over the safety
news
of
for
the
themselves, to try to
She
generate
said
political
Facebook repeatedly
movements, to try
encountered
to
conflicts
like
between its own profits
advocate
and safety,
and
that Facebook consistently
jump in a lot of
resolved
these
those
culture war
conflicts
issues to
in favor
improve
of
their
its own
profile
profits.
with their
She
base
went on to
and
testify that
run for higher
Facebook became a
office.
trillion-dollar company by paying for its profits with our safety, including the safety of our children. Doesn't this remind you of the tobacco company propaganda of years ago?
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out
This
that
committee
in
knows too
most
well
states,
that the big tech
AGs are an elected
companies
office like any other.
take
They're just
advantage
their
of young
statewide
people online.
office.
That is why it is so
In some
disappointing that
states, they're
Republicans in
appointed
the House
by the
are
governor
offering
or the
weak,
legislature or the
ineffectual
Supreme Court,
versions of
but
COPPA and KOSA.
in almost every state, they're
These
elected office.
versions are a gift to the big tech companies. And they're a slap in the face to the parents, the experts, and advocates.
I just want to highlight something
to
that
the
Castor just said, where she started
members of Congress
comparing
who
what's
worked
going on to
long
big
hard
tobacco.
on strong,
It's kind of unfortunate
protection
that
bills to protect
there
them
was
from
a lot of this sort of
online. So
glorification of this
despite
sort of big tobacco hearing moment. I
broad
think there's even a
agreement,
movie or two about
among
it
House members and Senate
that happened in
members,
Congress, which was like considered a
we-
watershed between,
really need to
allowing
address
tobacco
these watered-down
companies
bills.
just
And I'm
like
hoping that the rank and file membership and
market purposefully to
members of this
kids
committee
to get
will
new
chart
customers
that
and
course.
then, sweeping the
For
harms
example,
under the
we
rug,
should
all
not
that
put a
stuff.
ceiling on
And
kids'
obviously everyone knows the
protections,
story.
at
It's
the
like
state
big
level, or
cultural
stifle the good work of the
touchstone,
state,
and like
or
they are
weaken,
really trying to manufacture
knowledge
that right now
standards
with big
of
tech
critical
and a lot of these
development tech
online social
companies
media
and government.
platforms.
Ms. Rand,
But like these are
you've,
speech issues that are so
already addressed,
complicated that it just doesn't fit.
preemption. You said a lot of
And
the
so
preemption language
they're
in
really
the
hung
bills
up on it.
provide less
But it's
protection to
probably
kids.
not going to happen.
You've touched on,
And it is
weaker enforcement
unfortunately
that's
distracting from
contained here. You talked
a
about
lot of
minimization.
more nuanced conversation that
Nor
needs to be
does,
happening
there's now a difference in the knowledge
about
standards, too.
what all this
The
stuff
Senate
means,
versions are
what
kind of
like
viewed as the
it means to
strong
have
bipartisan
harmful
versions.
speech, whether
The
like you
Senate knowledge
can have
standard
harmful
further
speech,
protect young people compared to
and
what's in the House version.
lots
Thank you,
of complicated
Representative
issues
Castor.
around
Yes, there is
content
a difference
moderation,
in the knowledge
technical
standard in the
limitations
bill
of
that
that,
today,
like manpower
particularly
limitations
in
of
COPPA
that,
2.0.
categorization
We see a tiered
of
knowledge
different
standard
kinds of
that
speech,
preserves actual
problematic,
knowledge for the vast majority of
also
actors.
insanely
That's,
difficult.
basically preserving
So, so yeah, I think that like the big tobacco
the Senate version
comparisons
of
are
COPPA
kind of
2.0 has an updated knowledge
an
standard
unfortunate
for all
distraction,
actors.
and that these
Honestly,
lawmakers are not
this
going to
is
get
a
their like
difficult
big
balance
tobacco
to
moment.
strike, but the hope is to land on a standard that does not permit a company to look the
I
other
want to let
way
Kate speak,
when
but
they know
when
there
she's
are
done,
kids on
I
their
have something
service,
to
while avoiding incentivizing
piggyback on
broad
that.
age assurance across the entire internet. While we think there needs to be changes to House COPPA, we fully support enhancing protections for children's privacy, and we hope that we can all work together to update COPPA 2.0 in a way that would do so.
Thank you for that. Do you want to say anything else about enforcement as well? You already talked a little bit about the FTC, but when we're talking about kids, isn't it appropriate to have a number of tools in the toolbox to make sure they're safe and tech is held accountable?
Absolutely. It's not just appropriate, it is also how Congress has approached protecting children historically. Congress has generally not chosen to preempt states' ability to act and has always ensured that there are more tools in the toolbox. It was good to hear, and it is good to see, that the FTC would have things like first fine authority, and that state attorneys general would have the ability to act. But we also need to see things like private rights of action as a force multiplier for families and kids to be able to enforce their rights under any statute that Congress passes.
Thank you for that. I also want to make sure that I get into the record a number of provisions. Mr. Chairman, at the end of the hearing, we will have a number of documents to submit for the record, a lot of letters from groups, the Federal Trade Commission September 2024 report that I recommend to the committee, some of the whistleblower testimony from the United States Senate that is very illuminating. Some of the other reports from various medical societies. I think all of this would really inform our decision-making as we move forward.
So,
and I'll ask
on this
unanimous
big
consent
tobacco moment,
at the appropriate time.
I I wanted to bring up
All
that
right,
sometimes
now
we get
we'll
accused of
recognize
being
Dr.
big tech
Dunn.
shills, which is pretty weird
He's
given that we
the
spend a lot of our
vice
time
chair of the full
yelling
committee.
big tech.
We'll recognize you for 5
But
minutes. Or
we're
whatever you
Thank you
opposed to
very
this not
much,
because we
Mr.
think it's
Chairman.
hard on big tech.
I've been
We think it's
fortunate to wear a lot
using
of
them,
hats
right?
in my
It's
life. I was a
sidestepping
soldier, and I served
the
my
much more
community as a
profound ways that
surgeon
their
for
business models are
35 years.
predatory. That's
But the
what a
title
more
that keeps
comprehensive
me up
privacy
at
bill
night,
would do.
that
It
drives
would
me, is
prevent them
granddad.
from, as the
My
legit
sixth
Alpha said at one
grandchild was
point,
born
I
yesterday.
think,
Yeah,
if
she wrote that.
you're not paying for the product, you
Yeah.
are the product. Yes, that is the
Fortunate.
default business
I
model
made it look
online.
easy.
And if companies
We're
are
living through a
dramatically
crisis right
restricted
now.
in how they're allowed to use your
We've handed
data,
our children
that is a much
devices
bigger
that are more
challenge
powerful than the
to
most
big
powerful
tech and
computers that sent
to
men to the
their
moon, but
various
they
abuses
failed
online
to install
than
the digital
these
equipment,
regulatory
seat
burdens
belts
that
and smoke
ultimately
detectors and
will
these things.
not
As a
really affect
doctor, I
their
said,
bottom
when
line.
I see a patient bleeding,
It
I just
is
apply a
it is
tourniquet. I don't have to
something
call a
like
committee
you're
meeting.
not allowed to use people's
Right now,
private
our
data
children are
to,
bleeding.
create
Our
this
children and our
algorithm that
grandchildren
is
are
automatically
being
showing them
targeted,
whatever you
groomed,
think
and
they're most interested in
exploited
based
on
on
social
surveilling them
media
across the
platforms
entire
that are
internet, right? That's the
designed,
kind of thing that really challenges big
intentionally
tech.
designed
And
to
I think what's
hide the
frustrating about
evidence
how these
of their
conversations get framed in
exploitation.
Congress is that
That's why I introduced
we're
HR
sidestepping the real
6257,
profound
the
issue
Safe
here
Messaging Act for
and
kids,
working around the edges
or
of
the
deeper.
called SMK Act of 2025. This bill is a
Yeah, it's
direct
also an
intervention
unfortunate
about
thing
two
that
specific mechanisms
some of
the
these
predators use
are
to
so
hunt our
expensive to
children.
comply with
Ephemeral
and so hard to
messaging
comply with, especially when they're
and
unclear,
unsolicited contact.
that it gives big tech a
Problem
huge
is
leg up
disappearing
against their
evidence.
competition.
Let's talk about
And we've
ephemeral
actually
messaging.
seen
This is a
some
fancy
big tech
term
companies flip
for a
sides
dangerous
and support
feature
these
that
bills because I
messages
think they think
automatically
it's good for
delete
them from
themselves
an
after
optics
they're
perspective.
viewed. Imagine if
And
a
it's good for
drug
them
dealer
for
could
maybe
sell
improving their
fentanyl to a
relationship with Congress.
teenager in a
And it's good for
school
them from a
hallway,
business
and then
perspective
the
because they
moment the
have like
transaction is
huge
done,
amounts
any
of money
security camera
that they could
would
throw
finish
at figuring out what all this law
automatically
means, but their
That's what's
competitors don't.
happening.
And it kind of breaks
Predators
a lot of
love
open source
ephemeral
and
messaging.
other sort of
It's
like
their
experimental
best friend.
stuff.
It destroys any
I think Blue
evidence
Sky
of
would have a lot
grooming,
of trouble
cyberbullying,
complying with a lot of
illicit
this stuff
transactions
based on
before
how
a
they're
parent ever sees
designed.
it and before law enforcement
I have no
can build a
idea
case.
how some of the other, like Mastodon
My bill
would
would put
comply
an
with
end
some
to
of this
this.
stuff.
Under Section 3 of the
and
SMK Act,
and yeah,
social media platforms would be strictly prohibited
to be a competitive
from
advantage if some of
offering
these bills
ephemeral
passed.
messaging to any
Yeah,
user
there's
they
this sort of
know or
counterintuitive
willfully
thing. People like
disregard
kind of assume
who's a
that all
minor under
regulations are something
17.
that companies are going to oppose.
If you're a
But
tech company and you
imposing
know
regulatory
your
burdens on your
user is a
competitors can be a good
14-year-old
thing,
child, you should
even if they
not
cost
be
you money,
handing them a
because it
tool to
now means
destroy
there's less
evidence.
competition.
It's that
So
simple. The
there's this
solution is, of
weird
course,
counterintuitive
parental
element to this
authority.
where, as
The
Matt said,
second
they can
part of
flip
this
flop. They can
bill
go, "Wow, this is
is
going to be expensive goods,"
unsolicited
and then they realize,
contact.
"Oh, actually, it's going to
Right
cost their
now, in the
competitors
digital world,
more than they can afford." So
strangers
great,
can
we
walk
support
up
this.
to our
We'll
children
pay.
and
We'll
whisper
pay
in their
to
ear.
do this regulatory compliance.
We
That's
would
fine.
never
That's worth
allow
it.
that on a playground. Why do we allow it in direct messages? The SMK Act mandates parental direct messaging controls. We are putting parents back in the driver's seat. For children under 13, the bill requires that direct messaging features be disabled by default. A 10-year-old should not be fielding messages from strangers. If that feature is to be turned on, a parent must proactively give verifiable consent. For teenagers under 17, parents have to have the tools to see who's knocking on the door. The bill requires platforms to notify parents of requests for unapproved contacts and gives the parents the power to approve or deny those requests before any messaging occurs. And this isn't about hovering. This isn't helicopter parenting. It's just about parenting. It's about giving moms and dads the dashboard they need to keep kids safe.
So, to get your question, this is sort of one of those really complicated areas, but like,
we have
I
allowed
think
social
the answer
media
is
platforms
kind of
to
yes.
violate that oath.
Um,
And they've built features that
Trust
harm
and
our
safety and
children,
content
harm
moderation is
engagement
like
by our children.
very,
Safe
very
Messaging
complicated and
Act for
difficult to
Kids
do at
is
scale.
common sense.
There's so much written about this by Mike
treatment plan
Masnick,
for this that
a little
preserves the
bit by
evidence of
myself,
crimes
and
and
like
restores
a lot
parental
from other
authority and
colleagues.
protects our kids. I
Um,
urge my colleagues
it
to
can
support
be
this legislation.
essentially
I will submit
impossible to do
questions
that
to our
perfectly.
Sorry, I've used up my time, but
But
wanted to
I
make
do
a
think
case.
that
Thank you
one
so
of the
much, Mr.
solutions,
Chairman.
and we did
Thank you.
Jerron and I did a
Mr.
Reddit
Chairman,
AMA
Mr. Soto is recognized for 5 minutes.
yesterday, which we could throw a link in the
Thank you,
chat.
Mr. Chairman.
But the
Today, we're here to empower
the,
parents
this
to
some
protect
people are
kids
touching on this question,
online.
and basically, like,
And Congress
I
needs
do
to
think
do
if
its
companies
job, make
invested
rules of the
more
road.
in
It's
trust
been
and
5
safety,
years since the
and there was
Children's
more
Online Safety Act
collaboration
has
and
been filed.
communication
5 years too
among
long to
various trust
address
and
this
safety departments,
critical issue.
it
When we
would
look
solve
at
a
the
lot of these
internet and social
problems.
media, we see education,
But yeah, you're never going to get like 100%
communication
safe
with friends,
internet, just like you
all
can't
great
get
things for
100%
kids, but we
safe
also see
anything, any public
a
space.
quagmire of
You can
issues that they
get
could fall
safer,
into, which is why we need guardrails to protect children's
but you're never going to
privacy,
get
stop
perfectly safe.
access to adult content, unbridled chatbots, even predators online. So today we have 19 bills, including our bipartisan Promoting a Safe Internet for Minors Act with Representative Laurel Lee, my fellow Floridian. H.R. 6289 directs the Federal Trade Commission to conduct nationwide education campaigns to promote safe internet use by minors, encouraging best practices for educators, parents, platforms, and minors, and sharing the latest trends about negatively impacting minors online and making publicly available online safety education. The only issue is we have an FTC where President Trump fired both the Democrats, and now there are only 3 out of the full 5 strength that they need, and the courts have been taking their sweet time to address this issue. And so it's critical that we as a committee make sure we get the FTC up to strength and hold the president accountable for this unlawful action. We also need to limit kids' access to chatbots. We saw a tragic story.
So one little
in
interesting
Florida.
thing that folks might not know is that before these big hearings, staff and members will sometimes meet or coordinate along party lines and sort of outline what they think their best strategies or points are. And you can see that sometimes in hearings when every member of a party says the same thing. I think that this is so chaotic with 19 bills. We're not really seeing major trends, but the focus on the politicization of the FTC is something we're definitely seeing. And I wonder if that's something that was sort of circulated among Democrats or is sort of more organic. But I also know, because I read Kate's written testimony, that she focused on it quite a bit as well. So could be organic, could be something that they circulated to make sure to hit on.
And not to toot our own horns, but we've been yelling about this.
Yeah, we were active in some of the protests, especially around the targeting of trans healthcare by the FTC, which is ludicrous. Like, it is outside their scope. If it's awful and outside their scope. So ludicrous on several levels. But yeah, this FTC has just been a bit beyond the pale in terms of politicization, and
even if they pass, how does the decimation of the FTC
and I think undercuts a lot of the arguments for giving them the power to potentially dictate speech online. I mean, we would oppose that regardless, but obviously, even if you're playing devil's advocate and you're saying, well, they're an adult organization filled with, respectable, well-meaning people, they wouldn't use this authority to regulate speech. And if you look at this FTC, I don't know how you could say that with a straight face.
Laws are only as good as their enforcement mechanisms. They are only as good and fair as their enforcers. Laws without good enforcement are, at best, just words on the page, but at worst, they are weapons to be used by the powerful against the powerless. And the worry with the FTC becoming a politicized institution is that rather than enforcing the laws to protect everyone and uphold the rule of law, it will instead become a partisan tool that could be used and weaponized against those that the administration, whoever occupies the office, dislikes, or, on the other hand, favors. If, for example, the president has a particular relationship with a particular company or a particular CEO, we are concerned that the politicization of an FTC could lead to favorable treatment and lack of enforcement of laws against those companies.
This is a good point, and something I've been worried about because of Musk's sort of championing of KOSA it seems like it's easy for him because he's chummy with the administration and won't face any of the consequences and
make sure we protect
could take advantage of obviously the
Thank you,
competitive
Congressman.
benefits.
Look, we're going to need a lot.
Less than a year ago,
again,
we
the-
saw
the-
a
the
large
rate
number
at
of tech
which,
billionaires
this adoption is happening
gather
is
around
unlike
Trump
anything
for his
that we've ever
inauguration.
seen,
So I
with
think
respect to social
yeah,
media,
I think this is an
particularly
excellent
when it
point by
comes to
Kate.
kids.
The idea
Kids are now
that
using
key
chatbots for
companies may
everything
be
under
able
the sun,
to
whether it's
bribe
If there are times expired, you could
the
wrap really
president
quickly.
Sure.
in order to get
But
favorable
in general,
treatment is
solutions
very
that you guys have proposed
plausible.
today can go a long way.
I want to
Also,
go
with something
to
Holly has,
a question in
is
chat by
another,
Silent Rogue,
interesting
and
avenue along with
would
something
encourage
Bill.
folks
So,
to
I look forward to working with you in your office.
engage
Thank
with
you
us
for
in
that.
chat.
Time's
It's helpful
expired. Chair
when we get
recognizes
questions,
gentlelady from
but
Florida. Ms. Kamek, please.
I don't think that
Well,
this
thank
is
you, Mr. Chairman,
particularly
to our witnesses and
insensitive.
for everyone in the audience here today.
What we
As we
found
move
with a
on,
lot of
today's
parents
hearing
groups
certainly
is
is
that
hitting
like
close
they
to
did
home.
suffer a
Today we're
tragedy
reviewing 19 new bills,
and
but we are
they
missing
are
a critical
very
one, the App Store Freedom Act.
invested in
This
trying
bill
to
would
solve the
empower
problem.
parents and consumers,
But
foster innovation, and
we
most importantly, protect
we
kids
spend a lot of
online
time
and their data.
getting smart
This
on
bill
very
has
complicated
broad
issues
bipartisan
around
support
content
on this
moderation,
committee and
speech,
is a
the First
critical step in
Amendment,
keeping
other
kids
things
safe
like that.
online. I want folks to imagine for a
And
moment
we do our
what it
best
would
to
look like if
advocate
parents-
where we think that there should be
parents were
solutions for
allowed to
solutions
build an
that
online
don't
marketplace,
harm
an
marginalized
app
communities, don't
marketplace,
harm
where
speech,
they
don't
could
harm
vet the
LGBTQ
apps and knew
individuals.
for sure that their kids were safe.
That
Today,
it's why
that
we're
is not
focused
possible.
on a lot of
And only
privacy
our
and
bill,
competition
the App
solutions, so
Store
on and so
Freedom
forth.
Act, can do that.
Um,
I would also like to point out for the record,
Parents
last year
they
alone,
don't
in
have that
2024,
same sort of
the Apple App
experience. They
Store
don't have that same
facilitated
interest,
nearly
and
$406 billion in sales. So
I
taking that
think
into
that in a lot of
consideration, the
cases they
30%
rely
tax,
on people
no
that
matter how
tell
you
them
slice
that this
it,
is the
Apple
thing,
requires
like
of
this is
these
the
apps
thing
and
that's
their
going to fix your
subscriptions,
problem,
is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
they believe them.
So it would stand
And
to reason
so I think that
that
in some
Apple
instances
has a couple
it can
billion
be
reasons why
irresponsible
they
when
don't
someone
want to protect kids
tells
online.
someone going through
And they
that
don't want parents
something is
creating their
going
own
to fix
marketplace.
the
So I'm gonna
problem
jump to
that
our
led to their
questions. Panel,
tragedy,
we're gonna
and
go
it
rapid
doesn't.
fire to start. In 2024, in my home state
For
of Florida,
obviously a number of
13 and
reasons,
14-year-old boys
but
were using
yeah,
Notify
it's
apps to
like
take
it's a
pictures
problem,
of their
and
12-year-old
we've seen
classmates and digitally unclothe them.
some situations,
Perpetrators,
like I
because
think
that's
the
what they
most
are,
common one
then
is like
shared those
parents
images
who
with their classmates and others.
their
Another
child might have
investigation into
bought like
Apple showed
fentanyl
that
or
it allowed
drugs
a Notify
online,
app
and
in
they're
its app
championing a
store
bill, and you look
and
at
then
it, and
rated
it's,
it.
and you're
Apple
wondering
rated
like
that app as appropriate
how it's
for
going to solve that
4-year-olds.
particular problem,
4-year-olds.
especially
So
when
for
these
the
drugs
panel,
are
rapid
sold
fire,
through like
we'll start with you, Mr. Beckman.
private
Do you
chats
think
and
that
other
App Store
things that
should be
should
allowed to
not
have
be
children
monitored
accessing Notify
under
apps?
any
Yes or no?
circumstances.
No.
But I think that there are
No.
some solutions
Excellent. I like this rapid fire.
that might help with
For
stuff
the
like
panel,
that
yes or no,
around
today,
like
Apple and Google profit by taking a
by
30%
default
commission for
blocking
sales of app
stranger
subscriptions. Apps that
messages
include the
or
ability to
messages from
notify
people
underage
accounts that
classmates. Is that acceptable?
is not on the friends list or not on approved list or whatever. Stuff like that is
have
helpful
no
for
awareness
those
of
situations,
this
but
fact
some of
of
those things aren't even in the bills that they're
Interesting.
championing. So yeah, it is tricky, and we
Yes or no?
try our best not to
I'm not sure, but I think no, because
God, I would hope no.
downplay the fact that they
the question is
often
whether they
have
should
suffered
profit off of
tragedy,
Should they profit? Should
but
Apple and
that's not
Google
going
be
to stop us from
profiting off of
advocating
profit off
against bills that
I
we think are
appreciate the
bad
clarity in
and
your
do
answer.
harm.
Thank you, Mr. Thayer.
Again, hell
On
no.
a personal
I
level,
appreciate that.
I don't blame
Now, I
any
think we're all
parent
aware that there
who
have been
has
investigations
gone through an
into
experience
Notify
like
apps
that,
being used by
going to
minors
Congress,
against fellow minors
trying
and
to get
also
something
adults
done.
using these apps
It's not
to notify
really
minors.
on
This
parents
has been covered
to
extensively through the BBC,
have
Fox News,
the sort of
CNN,
clear,
CNBC, and
balanced
others. So, Mr.
perspective
Thayer,
about
Apple and Google
how
have
to
said that they
do
are
these
keeping kids
things
safe
in a way
online.
that protects
But based on
our
that
rights.
track record, that is well
I don't see that
documented,
as necessarily
you
the
think that Apple
responsibility.
and Google are
It is
doing
the responsibility of
everything
lawmakers
that they should
to
to
make
keep
those
kids
judgments,
safe
and it's
in
the
the App
responsibility
Store?
of
Not even the bare
experts
minimum.
who are commenting
Now,
on
as
this
mentioned
to
before, we
think
have a
very carefully
bipartisan
about
bill
these things.
with many
And
co-sponsors
so
on this committee
I,
that would
from
stop Apple
on a
and Google
personal
from
level,
maintaining
I
their
don't
App
really
Store
blame the
monopoly,
parents at
because
all.
that is in fact what
I
they
do
have.
think that their
Often, when we
stories
talk
are
about monopolies,
often
we focus on
exploited
price
by
gouging, but
people
there
who
are
really
other
should
good
know
reasons
better,
why you
that,
would
that
want
the
to stop
solutions they're
a
pushing are not
monopoly
going to
from
solve the
abusing their
problems.
power, like speeding up
And
innovation,
it really,
improving
it's
quality,
if there's
protecting
someone to blame there,
kids, for
it's
example.
not, in
So,
my
Mr. Thayer,
opinion,
you recently signed a letter
the
in
people who've
support of our
experienced
bill,
these,
the App Store Freedom
because
Act.
they're
Thank
you know,
you for
these are
that.
horrific things that
It's
people
not
are doing.
easy taking on the tech giants, is it?
Someone who's taken them on in every state? No.
You can just keep your microphone on, too.
Okay.
Now, could
And
you?
I just point of clarification, I think we led that letter, so.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership in that. Could you help the committee here understand how more competition keeps kids safe?
Well, it's pretty intuitive. So, I mean, more competition means more tools. More tools means more access for parents to use. So, at the end of the day, competition is another area
So this
where
is
we can actually
an
increase parental
interesting
controls and
exchange.
also
Kamak is
make privacy
pretty
actually
interested
a
in
thing that you have
antitrust
to fight for in the
issues,
market. Right now,
and
as you note,
generally
there
we
is
think
no
that
free market
antitrust
in the App
enforcement is
Store
good, and
market.
it's not
There is
happening.
no apps.
That there's not
There's
enough
no, and there
competition,
actually is no
and that
competition
that
in
is
the search
allowing
market
a lot of
either.
big tech
But
companies
I would like to
to
just
get
quote
away with
one
that
thing
stuff.
from a antitrust
And
case that
it's something that can
involved
be
Apple, the Supreme
bipartisan at
Court.
Okay,
times.
go fast.
This is Justice Kavanaugh.
Often
There
been
is no
more championed by
intermediary in the
Democrats, but
distribution chain
Kamak is
between Apple and the
Republican, and
consumer,
it's
and
good to
they need to be
see
held
her
accountable.
taking issues like this seriously,
Mr.
and
Thayer,
it
appreciate
is
that.
good
And I just want
that
to end
these
on
sorts of
this.
solutions
Do you
are
think that any
being
monopoly, particularly
considered
those like Apple and
because they're
Google, are in the
important. They're
best
part of the
position to
story, right?
protect kids
We've talked a
and their
lot so far in
data?
the stream
Is that a
about
yes or a no?
comprehensive privacy and how
Uh,
important that is.
Time's
And
yes,
Matt has mentioned a few
but
times that antitrust is also really
without,
important. So
we
yeah,
need
that's there
legislation
too,
to make
and
sure they
that
actually
is
do
that
what
is
they
important.
say they're going to do. But
I
the
have
answer is
not
kind
looked
A
at
bit
the
of the
specific
fox guarding the
bill
hen
that she's
house?
referring
A little
to.
bit.
To be honest, I
Okay,
haven't
More,
had
more than
time
a
to.
little.
It
Your
was
time's
just been
expired.
previously
I
this week,
appreciate that.
but
Chair
I yield.
recognizes the gentlelady from
in general,
Massachusetts, Ms.
good to
Trahan, for
see
5
the
minutes.
antitrust
Thank you, Mr.
being
Chairman.
raised along with
Well, I don't
privacy.
think I need to belabor the
Yeah,
points that
Kamek
my
has
colleagues have
two
correctly
bills,
made
I think,
about
in
this
this
hearing's
area,
policy
and one is
procedural
currently
failures. The
before
flagship proposals
it
for
like is
today's
in this
hearing,
mix
KOSA
for
and
this
COP
hearing.
2.0, have been
And
gutted and co-opted by big tech.
I don't.
And
I
in their
think we have
process
some
of
issues with
backroom
it. I mean,
deal-making,
there's
committee
19 of them,
leadership has
so I
shunned
don't remember
parents,
which one's which. But
advocates, and
um,
bipartisanship.
I will point out she does have
sincerely hope we can
another
move
bill
past
that
this
is
to get
not in
meaningful,
this group
balanced
of
kid
19
safety
that we've looked at,
legislation across the
and
finish line. And I'm here, as I always have been,
think that
to
it
work
could
with my
actually be a
colleagues on
good
both sides of
bill.
the
It,
aisle
it sort of
to
promotes
achieve that.
competition and
To
other
that
stuff.
end, I do want to call attention
It's
to an area that is
basically
missing from
Sammy's
this
law
hearing's
without the sort
slate
of
kid
like
safety measures,
invasive
App Store
surveillance
competition.
baggage.
App stores are the
Sammy's law
distributors
was a
of
bill
the
we kind of
software
wanted
kids
to
rely
like, but
on to
then
run
they
their
added this
digital
thing in there
lives.
that like
Apple and Google
the
control
tools, the
access
third-party
to nearly
tools
all
have to
American
monitor
smartphones, and
kids'
federal courts
chats
have
and
already
like
found
notify
that
parents
they
if
hold
certain
monopoly
keywords were
power
triggered,
over
which
those markets.
completely
They
ineffective,
wield that
obviously,
dominance
because
to block
like
third-party app
kids will stop
stores
using that
while
language. They'll
profiting
say
from
like
their own
unalive instead of
inadequate
kill, so
child
whatever.
safety
Like once they know the
practices.
keywords are,
As a
they're
coalition
going
of
to use
child
substitute
safety
words.
organizations
And then
recently
obviously you
noted
have
in
to
a
like
letter to the
surveil
committee,
kids in order
quote,
for that to work,
without
which is
meaningful
bad.
competition, these firms
But
have
like
continually failed to protect
opening up
children from sexual
platforms for
exploitation,
interoperability, more tools,
exposure
stuff like
to
that,
obscenity,
competition, we generally
abuse of their
support.
data, and
Obviously,
more,
this
end
is
quote.
like the blue
In the
sky
case of Apple,
experiment,
one of its engineers even said in
where,
private
you know, it's
messages
like
that it
protocols,
is,
not
quote,
platforms.
the
I'm going to
greatest platform for distributing child
stop
porn,
and pause
and
because
called child
Trahan's
predator
usually
grooming
smart
a,
on
quote,
stuff
under-resourced
in this field.
challenge. Mr. Thayer, in your testimony, you call out some of the specious arguments offered by big tech against practical solutions to improve kids' safety. What is your response to Apple and Google's suggestions that the App Store Freedom Act and other measures will hurt kids' privacy and security? And are these companies' financial incentives actually aligned with the needs of our children?
So in my testimony, I'll state it again, it's all a farce. It's always the case where they play this game of, if you want to regulate competition, it's a privacy issue. If you want to regulate privacy, it's a competition issue. So frankly, it's the same story being told over and over again. And as I said in my testimony, big tech's lobby is
So Trahan's
and unwavering on
very
these points. And frankly,
educated
it
on
has
this
to
stuff
stop. And
for a
the
member,
fact that they've been gaslighting us for the past
and has a lot of really good
couple
bills.
decades is a bit absurd. And I think
But she's
now
also
it's
kind
time
of
to
in the
act
like, we
on
got to do
bills
something,
like how
anything
you-
kind of
bills that you
crowd. And so
proposed and many of the bills that we're
sometimes
seeing today.
Thank you.
we
It is, I
oppose
agree,
some of the
exhausting.
things that
What we need
she's
is
championing.
competition
So
in parents'
it's
and
it's
kids'
a
interest.
interesting
And as my
relationship
colleague
we've had
from
with that
Florida
office.
posed
She's
earlier,
also had some of
imagine
like
for
the
a
most
moment a kids first app
informed
store.
staff
One
on
built
tech
from the ground
policy.
up to protect children,
And
replete
we've
with a
enjoyed
curated
chatting
set
with
of
them
apps,
about a lot of stuff,
tailored
but
review practices run
often
by
disagree,
experts in
often
child
agree pretty
safety,
strongly.
and feature-rich parent controls. In this app store, safety ratings are vetted by experts, not self-reported. Bad actors are promptly booted and not allowed to return. Such an experience is technically feasible, but made virtually impossible by Apple and Google's policies. Mr. Thayer, do you agree that the App Store Freedom Act, a bipartisan bill that I'm co-leading with Representative Kamak and Soto and others,
So
would
this is the
empower
bill that
parents
we
with meaningful
think
choice
might be
over what
good
software is
based
on
on
their
our
kids'
first read of it.
devices?
I think it's a huge step in the right direction, and it would absolutely go a long way in helping parents. More competition means more tools.
Thank you. In closing, I urge this committee to internalize two important points. Apple and Google cannot be trusted to protect our kids, and parents deserve better. It is vital that Congress ensures that the open market can foster competition that, unlike big tech, actually takes kids' safety seriously. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Obernolte, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the committee for holding this hearing. This is a critically important
So
topic.
unfortunately,
Frankly,
one of the
Congress is
elements
far
here
behind in
of
enshrining some of these
antitrust is that,
protections
like
into
everything needs
federal
to be
law.
enforced,
So we've been
and
trying
the
for years to get this
FTC
across the finish
is
line.
largely
I'm hoping that
responsible
this
for
is the
antitrust
year
enforcement.
that
So
some of
when
these
they are
bills will make
going
it through a
after
markup and get
gender
passed
affirming
in the House.
care, they are a small agency with
As
limited
most of the people on the
resources,
committee
and they are
know, for
therefore
many years I
not
ran an
actually
app developer.
enforcing
And so when
antitrust
I read
laws,
these bills, I
as is
kind
their
of
job.
look
And
at them
so
through the lens
the
of if I was
FTC
still
angle
developing, how
infects
difficult would these be for
every
me to
part of
comply
this. It
with, and
makes
how
the
would I go
censorship
about
problems
complying
worse,
with these
makes the
requirements?
antitrust legislation less
Through that lens,
meaningful.
unfortunately,
Because
the bills
a
that we're
law that's
considering today
unenforced is nothing.
have
It
a couple
doesn't matter.
of pretty serious implementational problems. Let's start with age verification, which is key to the protections we're trying to provide here. Because if we're going to say that that an application can't do certain things if a user is a minor, then we have to be able to figure out whether or not the user is a minor. That's really central to the protections we're trying to provide. The problem is, and a couple of the panelists brought it up in your testimony, when you force every single app developer to do that, and the typical user might have 100 apps on their phone, you're collecting private information used to verify that age is 100 times, and you're storing it 100 times, and that creates these repositories of private information that
So,
really
Legit
prey
Alpha,
targets
short,
cyber criminals. So let me just
short
suggest
summary,
that it's much
App Store
more
Freedom
efficient
Act,
and much
it
safer to do
forces
that
a lot of
once. Let the operating
interoperability
system
and
work, and that means
competition
that in case of
on
an
sort of
iPhone, Apple
allowing
would do it.
third-party
In
tools
case
on
of an Android
platforms,
phone, Google would do it. They have a lot more
which is
information than
what
developers
Sammy's
do
law
about
did, but
the
as I
users
said
of those
earlier, it
platforms.
kind of
And
got into
when you do it
specific
that way,
requirements
you can
around
enforce other protections. For
requiring
example, if you have
surveillance
an application
and
that's labeled for
filtering
adults
and
only,
parental
the operating
notification
system
that we
shouldn't
all
even
thought,
launch it
or at
if
least
a
our
minor
side
is the
thought
current
was
user of
extremely
the
problematic
system.
and made us not able to support the
A
bill
couple
at
of the
all.
bills,
But
talk about
it
when an
mostly
application
builds
developer is
on a
allowed
lot of
to
competition
rely on
principles
the age
and
signal that's being
interoperability
generated by
principles,
the
which we
operating system.
champion across
And
tech
there's
policy
been
across
kind
the
of
board.
an assertion
And
that there are conditions under which
we've only
applications
read it
shouldn't be
once,
able to rely on that
kind of liked
signal.
it,
And
starting to
that's
chat with
crazy because
allies about
the
it,
developer doesn't know as
see
much
how
as
everything
the operating system
feels,
does. So, let me just assert
a lot of
that,
times when it
if
comes
your
to like
application
whether or
is
not
for
we can
adults only
support a
and
bill,
the operating system is
there
telling
can
you
be
that
like
there's an
little
adult using
nuances
it,
or
you
things
should
that are
be
hard to
able to rely
catch
on that.
that
Another
interact
thing that I think is really
with
important for us to
technology
have
in a way that
discussion on
is
this concept of
problematic
duty of care.
or
And I think it's
impossible,
reasonable that we should impose
based on sort of
a
just
duty on
legal
the
or
people that are
technical
developing and
issues.
deploying these
And
applications. But I also think that it is lazy
in an ideal
legislative
world, we
oversight
highlight
to
those
define what
issues
we mean
and the
when we
office
say
fixes
duty
them
of
because
care.
obviously
We had a
like they
good
don't want
example in a
to,
hearing in
they
this
shouldn't want to
subcommittee, I
pass a
believe it was
law
last
that
year,
is either
when we were talking
impossible
about
or
whether
violates
or
the First
not
Amendment. But in
an
practice
application should
lately,
have a duty
offices
to
often
prevent
just don't
online
care.
bullying by
They
taking
like
down
want to be on the
a
record as
post
having done
if it was
something,
reported as
and
bullying.
whatever happens
And
after
we all
that
could
is
agree,
kind of
that is
not their
reasonable. That's a
concern.
reasonable
And
requirement.
that is one of the
But
biggest issues
we're
that we've
also
been
obligated to say, when we
facing
impose that requirement,
with a
well,
lot
what
of
is
these
the requirement?
bills, to
What's
be
a reasonable
frank.
amount of time? Is it
And
2 days? Is it a
one
day?
of the
Is it an
reasons why
hour?
we got to win, not just
If we
on
don't define
policy
what
and
we
good
mean
ideas,
when
but
we
also
say duty of
politics.
care,
So one
then
of the
we
reasons why
are
it's really important
allowing
for
some
folks
court in the
to
future
contact
to be
Congress,
arguing about
let their voice be heard,
about what we meant when we crafted the legislation. And I would just assert that, it's our
notify them whenever they
responsibility
care about
to
this
not put
stuff.
our courts and our judicial system in that place and define what we
I
mean
yet
up front. Enforcement, there's been a couple assertions by the
sorry, lost
panelists
train of
that
thought.
private right of action is a good thing. Let me just say, we have to be really cautious about that. There are numerous examples in states across the country where that has gone awry. I'll give you an
Here we
example
go.
from my home state of
So,
California. We passed
yeah,
in the state legislature a few
reading
years ago
bills is
something called the Private
complicated,
Attorney
and a lot
General
of our
Act
job is like
that
both very
allowed
carefully
private
reading
parties to enforce
legislation,
labor laws.
but also so
And now,
talking to
if
various
anyone
experts,
that has a district in California
inevitably
has horror
there are
stories
going to be
about where
nuances
abusive
that
law
not
firms
any one
go after
person
not big
can catch,
businesses
which is
because
why
they
it's
can
so
defend
important that
themselves,
these
but
things get
small
discussed,
businesses.
right? I mean,
And I could
even
point to
someone who's
multiple
very well
businesses in my
meaning can write
district
a
that have
bill
been
and then
driven out of
not
business
really
by
understand what it does,
frivolous lawsuits that anyone would agree is
which
frivolous.
is a big problem.
And then one last,
Both
and I'm not
not
gonna find
necessarily
more questions
understanding the
'cause I
first
talked too
order
much,
implications. There may be
talking
some
about preemption,
definition in there somewhere
here's the
that
deal. Like,
does something different than
we
they
are
thought it
trying
would,
to craft
or
a
the second
compromise
order
between
implications.
being
How will
permissive
people
and
respond to
being
this?
protective.
Will
I mean,
this,
if we wanted to
include
completely
things that they
protect our
never
kids, we
intended
would
to
say
include
kids
in their
can't go online,
definition?
right? But we don't want to
Which
do
one of
that.
the
We
reasons
want to
this took
strike a
takes
balance.
forever.
Once we've struck a
But
balance,
another
why would we allow different states
raised
to
earlier is that
enact different
there
policies?
are,
That creates
just
a
now as
barrier
well,
to
that
entry
there's
that
this
favors
impetus to do something.
large businesses over small
And I
businesses.
think,
And just think about
unfortunately, a lot
how
of bad
difficult it is
ideas
to comply
come
with
about
potentially
because
50
people are
different
more
state
invested in
standards
doing
if
something
you
than
are two
making
people
sure
in a
that
garage
it's the
somewhere
right
trying to
something, that
start
it's a bill that
trying to
will
start a telephone
survive
company. So I'm really
the
happy we're
scrutiny of the
having this
courts, that it
conversation,
will actually
and
be
I
constitutional, that it
think
will
it's critically
actually
important
achieve what
we
it's
get this
supposed to.
balance right. We
I
get
think
something
a
across the
piece
finish
of
line
this
this
that's
year.
worth thinking about is how
Appreciate
Congress
the
has
discussion, Mr. Chairman. I'll be back.
record low approval
Okay,
ratings, right?
gentlemen
People are
yields
very
back.
unhappy with
Now
Congress
I'll
as an
recognize Mr.
institution,
Mullen for
and
his
so members of
comprehensive
Congress
question.
are very concerned
Thank you,
with
Mr. Chair.
not appearing
Turning
to
to
be
the
as
Safe
useless and
Bolts
dysfunctional as the
Safe
institution as a
Bots
whole is
Act.
generally perceived
As with
as.
some of the other bills
So
being
they'll
discussed
support
today,
things
I'm
that
concerned that
purport
this
to
bill would
solve
require
problems
sensitive
that their
age
constituents care about,
verification data
and care
from
more
users for it to be
sometimes about being
effective.
seen to do
Data
something
that, as
than
pointed out by my
making sure it's the right.
colleagues, in recent
Um,
times has not been
I don't
collected
think
or
that's
safely stored
universally true, but
by
it is a thing
companies.
we have to contend with.
So,
That,
Mr. Wayne, in
if
your
especially in
testimony, you
cases
described the
like
First Amendment
kids'
and
online
privacy
safety, right?
concerns
There are
with
these
the
horrible
age
stories. There are these
verification
parents
tools. Can
who
you
have
briefly
had these
outline
horrible
some of the
experiences. There are
tools or ways
children who
companies verify
have had
the
these horrible
ages of their
experiences,
users
and
and
so
some of the risks with
it
those
is
methods?
Oh, I just
hard to
want to
resist that way.
Yes.
Sorry, go on.
stop
Yes,
because
absolutely.
this
Thank
could
you
be
for the question.
important.
Yes, age assurance techniques create privacy and security risks, regardless of where they are deployed. And if we are going to require their usage, we need to require them under the safest, highest guardrails we can possibly implement, including ensuring data minimization, and deletion of that data. We also need to ensure that there is equitable access to services that impose age verification to access them, because some age verification techniques are disproportionately ineffective when applied to people who have differing gender identities and people of with differing skin colors than white people, basically.
So thank you for that. I believe the Safe Bots Act discusses important issues. AI chatbots should not impersonate licensed professionals, but I think this is
for
true
folks that
under all
missed it,
circumstances, not just
Mullen was asking
minors,
about First Amendment and
especially given
other
the
sort of
difficulties
issues
around
with age
verifying
verification
the age of
requirements.
users. So turning to a separate issue, in your testimony,
And I think that
Mr.
this
Wayne,
kind of
you
goes back
outlined this
to
important role
what
that
Jabron
states
was
have
saying and
historically
highlights kind of a
played
point
in protecting
that I'd like to
minors
make is
from
that
harm.
ethically,
This is an
one of the
important point
things that
to
we
acknowledge,
grapple with the
particularly
most
as lawmakers
is
look to close gaps and loopholes that may have left some emerging
being
technologies
absolutely
outside
correct versus harm
the reach of
reduction.
current law. So what are
And
the
so
risks of widespread
when it comes to something like
preemption,
age verification,
displacing long-standing state-level protections or preventing lawmakers at all
we
levels of government
argue
from
against
adapting
it
current laws
for
to novel
a large range of
circumstances
reasons.
chatbots?
But going back to the problems that it's
Absolutely, thank you for the question.
hurts privacy, security, and speech. And if they're going to do it, we'd rather them do it in a way that minimizes the harm to speech and solves completely the problem with privacy and security, which there are claims that technologically that's possible. And there are people I've talked to who are experts who say, we're not there yet. That's not true. It's a little bit of a false sense of security with some of these technologies. But yeah, are we willing to accept certain harm reductions? I think as an org, no. But at the same time,
there is certainly no question
we try to
that
fight
protect kids
for a
online, but we
world
need
that
also
is less
balance
bad. So we try to
government's
structure
right to
advocacy,
access
knowing that
legitimate
sometimes we're just
information.
fighting
Kids
for a
use the
less
internet
bad
to
world than a
find
perfect
community
world.
as well as to access important resources
But
that
we
are
try
essential
to
to their health,
do our
safety,
best to
personal
be
development,
clear
that may
on
not be available or easily
what is right,
accessible
what
in
is
offline
protecting all
circumstances.
people, and so on.
As we consider proposals like KOSA, we need to ensure we're reducing real harms.
And then just going back to a
new
point Jabron
risks
made, when you've got
unintended
lawmakers
censorship
throwing
or
this stuff
limiting
out,
access
sometimes
to
even
critical
lawmakers that write
resources.
bad
So again,
law
Mr. Wayne,
intentionally
you noted
write
in
it
testimony
worse
the current version of
than
KOSA
even they
moves
know. And
in
so
the
some
right
of it is just
direction
going
by
and
strengthening
telling them is
protections
hey,
for
this
kids
is
online,
actually
while preserving
not
access
working the way you
to
think it's going to work, and it's like way
elaborate on
worse.
that, just
So
a
an
little
example
bit?
of that
Why
is
do you think
Wisconsin,
this
I believe,
better ensures we
had
maintain
an
that balance and
pornography
avoid
and
unintended
anti-porn and
restrictions
age
on the research
verification
that kids
bill
and teens are
that
currently
they like randomly at the end tacked on
Absolutely, thank you. So
a ban on VPNs. So pornographic sites can't allow traffic from VPNs in Wisconsin. Well, the problem is that the whole point of VPNs is you don't know where they're coming from. So there's no way to block VPN traffic from VPN users in Wisconsin. And so they would have to worldwide block VPN traffic. And yeah, and so there was a lot of rush from a lot of folks across industry and us being like, your bill is bad, but also this provision is like terrible, and please take it out.
Narrows the duty of care, requiring platforms to essentially address what are already illegal categories of content, hopefully narrowing and limiting the amount of guessing they will have to do about what content to deliver to kids. And we think that that is moving in the right direction in terms of preserving all kids' ability to access information and speak online.
Thank you for that. Yield back.
Appreciate it. Gentleman yields back now. Recognize Mr.
Yeah, this
Lynch
comes
for
back
his
to the
5
fact
minutes
that
of question.
legislation is very complicated,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
and
Thank the panel for
as we were
sharing
talking
with
about
us your
earlier, right?
thoughts on
There's
this
a
most
huge
important
number of
issue.
people in
Back
Congress,
in Oregon,
more so in state
legislators
legislatures.
have contacted me and asked
They are dealing with
what
hundreds
we're
of
going to do
thousands
in
of
this
bills,
space. Their primary
and
concern
they're often
is
very
preemption.
complicated. They
And
touch
so,
on very
Mr.
technical
Thayer,
issues.
starting with you,
You
one
know,
of the questions
no
that's
matter
been
how well
asked is that
educated
several
one
states,
person
California,
is, they're
Utah,
never going to know
Arkansas,
everything
Texas,
about
Florida,
everything,
have passed or
right? And
implemented
so
laws that
there
require
are
parental consent,
genuinely, particularly in
default
tech,
time limits,
a
secure
lot of just
curfews, or age
honest
verification for
mistakes
minors.
that, like,
If this
they
bill
don't
preempts
know that
those
they
laws,
are
it does not
drafting
itself
a bill
impose
so bad. So
deferrable
it's very
restrictions.
important in those
Are you
circumstances
effectively
that
asking
people
Congress to shield
reach out and
business
tell them,
models
like,
from
hey,
the very
you've
protections
written this in
states
such a
decide
way
our
that it
children
will have
need?
these horrible unintended, or we
So
hope
on the issue of
unintended,
preemption, obviously it's a
side
slippery wicket
effects.
and something
And,
that we have to
you know,
take
often they go,
care of
oh,
the thought.
whoops,
And
and
I
we'll fix
actually
that.
agree a lot with Ms. Ruane's, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, statements when it comes to the relates to standard. I like a more conflict type of preemption and be a little bit clearer about what it's conflicting out. And so at Digital Products Institute, we're very interested in narrow preemptions. And so again, happy to work with your office, and I'm sure other folks as well would like to work with you as well to figure out exactly how to straddle that line.
Mr. Berkman, your thoughts?
On the App Store Accountability Act specifically?
No, on the thought of if we act here, as we are going to, I hope, to protect children, and we include in that packet of legislation preemption of states getting involved, how do we explain to the states that we've gone to the very top level of protection when many would say, no, you haven't? In other words, how does this preemption piece fit? And how do we justify it here in Congress by saying to states like my Oregon, saying, hey, we have it right, and you guys can just watch?
Yeah, so we make this analysis on a bill-by-bill basis.
So preemption is going to be one of the biggest fights, I think, with this package and also just in general. And Republicans have really kind of locked onto this because a lot of interest groups that they listen to
when I was thinking this through,
argue that they need one national standard for all these policies, and it's too hard to follow the states. The problem with that is Congress just doesn't really act that often, and
the question is, why would we
a lot of the stuff that they do is fairly watered down.
Ourselves?
And so, I mean, I've been in a lot of conversations with people about whether or not we would ever accept preemption, and I think our thinking usually comes down to, like, if they're raising the ceiling on protections from privacy and other things, like, great. But if they're lowering the floor, as in, like, they're making everyone, like, less protected nationwide, or at least people in certain states become less protected, then no, like, we're going to oppose that. So that's resulted in us generally opposing preemption because, like, most of the time when the United States Congress is acting to preempt something, they're lowering the floor. There's some state they're preempting that has stronger protections that they're trying to invalidate. And I think that is what's
things that you
happening
can't
in a lot
do.
of these bills that
Bear
have
with me
preemption,
why
and
one is
obviously
better
they're
than
also
the other.
trying to
The broad general
preempt
of
AI
defined,
regulation
although we
or do a
could,
moratorium on AI
as opposed to
regulation
calling out
in the
specific
states.
practices that
And
are
since
not
Senate has
allowed.
not done anything on
In terms
AI,
of
that
a
means
duty of
that
care?
there would be
Yeah, but
no
tell me which
regulation
one's
on
better for
AI
the
anywhere
protection
in
of
the
the
United
child.
States.
I mean, our focus today is on the legislation in front of us, and we're
Yeah,
desperately
the
trying to
moratorium is
seek
particularly
consensus
bad
on
because in that
legislation
case,
that moves social
there's no
media
floor.
safety
There's
forward.
Congress hasn't done anything about
So
this
right now,
issue,
we're not
and
looking at
they're
a
maybe
broad level
considering
duty of
doing some
care
stuff,
in the
but
hearing today.
there's no
Well,
guarantee they will.
ignoring that
Which
attempt
is
to
sort of
answer
why
my
the AI
question,
moratorium
which one do you
died in the
think is better,
Senate
or is it
99 to
is it a
1,
combination of the two? Or
because
as a
it
lawyer, I
is such a
understand
just
how great it is to
horrible
have a
idea that
specific, clear
almost
standard that
everyone
you then have
agreed
to
it was
prove,
not
as opposed to
something
a
that
broad
should be
general
done.
thing that you're,
But yeah, these, these, I think
shooting
as
at as
Matt's
you're
pointing out, these like
bringing
little bits
witnesses
of
in.
preemption
Which one do you
nibbling
think is better?
away
I mean,
at
it's
what
really
states
hard
can
to
do
answer in the
are perhaps
hypothetical.
more
We
dubious
support
in a sense
language, specific
because
language that
they
is going
seem
to
a little
give
bit
the
more
most
reasonable, right?
robust
Just
and
saying
workable
no AI
protection
regulations
for
anywhere
children.
unless we
At
do
the end
it.
of the day,
Also, we're not
we
going to
want
do it.
language that
That's
can
just like
pass
obviously
Congress. We
terrible.
want language that's going to
But yeah, there's a lot
stand,
of
be
these cases
implemented,
where
and enforced.
a bill will
Thank
preempt
all of you
in
for being
a
here.
more
Yield
limited
back.
scope,
Gentleman yields
and
back. Now I recognize my
it still
friend
be
from the great
as,
state of
as Matt said, it
Michigan,
can
Ms. Tingle,
lower
for her 5 minutes of
people's
questioning.
protections in
Thank
states
you,
that are
Mr.
actually acting on
Chairman,
these
and
issues.
for holding this
It
important
also has the
hearing, and to
impact.
all the
A
witnesses
lot
for
of
testifying
laws
today.
move
But I hope,
up
Mr.
from the
Chairman,
states, right?
this is our
States
last hearing
will
and we move to action
try something,
because we need to be
and the
moving
federal government will
legislation.
then
I want to
consider
remind us
adopting
why we're
laws
here
on the
today.
basis of state law.
In
Not
this
always,
room,
but
there are parents
often
who lost their
ideas
children
move up.
because big tech
And
failed
if
to
you
protect them.
preempt all
This
state laws on
picture
an issue,
sits on my
that
desk.
doesn't happen. You're not going to see
Sam and
states
Laura Chapman are
experimenting with
here for
how
their
to
son.
regulate AI.
Sammy was
Instead,
just 16
Congress is going to have to figure
years
it out
old when a
themselves,
drug
and
dealer contacted him
that's not
through a
easy.
private Snapchat message and delivered fentanyl-laced pills to his home. On February 7th, 2021, he was found dead in his bedroom. And that is why, along with Representative Evans, we have introduced the No Fentanyl on Social Media Act. Joanne Bogart is here for her son. Mason was a 15-year-old who filmed himself attempting the choking challenge that he had seen on YouTube. That day, on May 1, 2019, his father found him unconscious. He died 3 days later. This coin sits on my desk too. Maureen Moloch is here for her 16-year-old son, David, who died by suicide on January 4th, 2016, after enduring relentless cyberbullying, harassment, humiliation, and threats by his peers via text message and on social media. Rose Bronstein is here for her son, Nate, a 15-year-old who died by suicide on January 13th, 2022, following nonstop cyberbullying and online harassment by his classmates, in which no one stepped in to stop. And Deb Schmill is here for her daughter, Becca, who was 18 when she bought what she thought was cocaine from a dealer she found on Facebook. It was laced with fentanyl, and it killed her on September 16th, 2020, the night before she was supposed to enter rehab. These families are here today because they're fighting for what's right, to hold big tech accountable and protect every child online. And I know there are other parents here. I want to hear your stories. But Sammy, Mason, David, Nate, and Becca are just 5 of the countless young people whose lives have been stolen because big tech won't act, and it's time for us to act. We owe these families real bipartisan action. So I'm going to move to my bill quickly. I want to discuss the legislation that I've introduced with Congressman Evans. This bill directs federal agencies to examine how traffickers use social media to reach minors, how platform design enables access to fentanyl, which I hope anchors the President of the United States on down through all of us, and what solutions could
Congressman
help
Dingo
keep
here
deadly
has,
drugs out
I
of
think,
kids' hands?
articulated
Mr.
very
Berkman, how can
clearly
this
the sort of
research under our
broad
bill
thrust
help
of this,
identify
which is
platform
that
design features
there are these very
that
real
enable
tragedies,
fentanyl access
and
and
because of that,
trafficking
Congress
that targets
must do
minors?
something, right?
Thank
They
you, Congresswoman,
owe
for the
families
question and
something.
for your legislation, which
And
we do support.
the
There are a
disconnect
number of
comes
families
in the
here
next
today. You
step, which
mentioned
is,
some, you don't have
does
time
this
for all of them. There are a
actually
number of
work?
families here
Would
that have
any of this
lost
actually work?
children due to fentanyl trafficking and drug
And that is
trafficking over
part of the
social media.
problem, right?
This is a
That
vital issue.
there
We
are these
see it
very compelling
impacting children
stories,
across the
and
country. And
that
so
is a
your
very hard
legislation
force
is
to
incredibly
resist.
important because we need to
Yeah, and
understand
it's like
with
one of the
more
reasons why
specificity,
I feel
the
like we
features
really
of
owe
platforms that are
it
enabling
to
trafficking.
policy
And it is
generally,
happening.
and
Someone
also
mentioned,
just
drug
these
trafficking
people
happening in high schools.
to
There was an
look at
example
root
in Portland.
causes.
It's happening
And
on
some of the stuff,
phones
I mean,
in high
it's
school
really hard to
via
talk
social
about
media
and deal
platforms.
with.
We have looked into this issue. We
I've
have
been
able
in
to
a workshop
connect with
about
a
child
drug
sexual
dealer
abuse
that we
material,
obviously
other
did not know
things like
before
these
in
things are
minutes.
difficult, but
That
like
is how
when you
accessible
look at the
this has become.
evidence,
Drugs have
they don't
become to
always
children in the social
show
media age.
that the
So
like
research
easy
is
solution
necessary
is the
so
correct
that we can have
solution.
the
Sometimes they
interventions,
show that
both
it's
legislative
counterproductive.
and educational as well.
And so
Thank
it's
you. Mr.
important to really
Chairman,
kind of
I'm
drill
going to
down
beg my
on,
colleagues on this committee,
you
can
know,
we
what the root
please work
causes are and
together
what's
to
going to be the
protect children
solution.
and
And
keep other children from dying?
oftentimes
And with
it's
that, I
also
yield back.
important to like
Absolutely. I'm
try to
with you,
figure out what the
Mr. Chair.
cost is. And
Okay,
so,
next, I'll recognize
for example,
Representative Fry from the
the
great state of South Carolina. You're recognized for your 5 minutes.
situations in which
Thank you, Mr.
drugs
Chairman.
were
I've
sold
actually
through
really
private messaging, does that mean
enjoyed
that the
hearing
members
discussion
want private
here
messaging to be
today on the
monitored? That's a
bills. I
huge
think
privacy
in
violation.
preparation, my staff made this giant binder of homework
When
that I
it
had
comes
to
to
go through.
classmates
But I really
bullying,
wanted to kind of hear the discussion evolve because what I
that's
see
obviously awful, but the
in
root
this-
cause
on
is
this
sort
issue
of bullying
generally is
in
that
like a
you have two
localized
sides
sense.
that are
And
talking at each
does it
other or
necessarily
against each
matter
other,
that they
not
have
necessarily with each other.
avenues of
And I
communication
think
that
it's
are
really important when
online,
you've got parents in the
offline?
room. Typically in energy and commerce
I think
today,
it's
you don't see
obviously
this level
horrific
of
to go through something like
engagement
that, but like,
people that are
you know, what is causing the harm? How
tremendous
are
interest in
tech companies supposed to deal with
what
that?
happens in these hearings.
In a lot of
But I think it's
situations, you
important
do
that we
see
get this right.
sort of like a forcing of
It's
tech
incredibly
companies to
important. I've
like
got an
take
8-year-old,
on an
thankfully,
expertise
not
of
on
like
social
child
media. I don't
psychology and other things that
anytime in the
like
near future where he
I
will
just
be
would not trust them to do. And so
but kids aren't.
I don't
And,
think that
it's
like, you know,
important that
even setting aside a lot of like the
Congress
speech
gets this
and other
right.
issues, the
The audience
politicization, the sort of
Brandon
like
Duffy,
manipulating these
state of South
laws for
Carolina,
culture
gave a
war kind
statement
of
this
stuff,
legislature
other
from the
things,
Rockville
just getting
area.
down to like,
Not my
if
district.
it was being used by
Representative
reasonable
Beach was,
adults
and
and they're
that's
trying
where
to
it
do
was.
right by everyone, would they be able to do it?
But
And like
Brandon
assigning
has made it his life's mission
tech companies with the
to
responsibility
go after
of like
sextortion. His son
understanding complex psychological issues that like even like is like a case by case basis, and like psychologists struggle with like matching the right treatment to their patient and so on, and they're just supposed to like do that en masse with all their users or like figure out ways like, I mean, granted, there are probably certain like design things and other things that might be antagonistic that researchers might highlight and say, please change. In an ideal world, like we'd have these ways of like addressing this stuff. But yeah, like this is kind of like when you match the tragedy with the policy, are they actually like working in the same direction? And I think that in a lot of these bills, like they aren't. And also, obviously, they're kind of steamrolling over a lot of our complaints about speech issues, privacy issues, security issues, how it impacts, you know, a lot of communities online and other things like that. And so it's just, it's like, it's very challenging, both just because it's very complicated, but also because there are, at the end of the day, like some real tragedies that are interwoven in this policy.
Simon Rowe brought this up earlier about the Patriot Act as an example of this kind of thing, where you know there's a real tragedy, and then the legislative response is to do a bunch of things that
Thank you for your question.
maybe
appreciate your
help
legislation as
prevent,
well.
I don't
think
know,
it's a really
unclear, right?
smart approach,
But
and bringing
impose
more people
real
together
costs
in a room to come up with
everywhere,
solutions is
right? And I think one of the
always
things that's
valuable,
really hard to
especially
think about in
here.
policy is
Not
how
every
to
solution is going
like,
be
we have to remember that we're in a country
there are
of
things that
what,
Congress
350 million people.
So
And so
I
we need
think
to think
that,
about
you know,
like,
this is an
what are we
area where
gaining
a lot can be done
from
on a
a piece
voluntary
of security
basis, but
legislation,
it also
and what are
needs
we
some teeth
giving
from
up?
Congress.
And
we're supportive
also becomes difficult to weigh, right? Like
turning data minimization for youth
if
to law,
everyone has to, spend 30
prohibiting
minutes of their
targeted
life
advertising
every
of
time they
youth, we think
fly
is
in
a
airport
really
security, how does that
important,
weigh
meaningful
against saving a
steps
single
that
life?
can be taken. And the
I think
challenge
these are
is
the
we
kinds of
may be able to bring together a number of
hypothetical
companies that believe
questions
in
that
upping their
we
game and
mostly
being more
associate with
responsible and
philosophy.
recognize the
But
real concerns out there.
really, legislative
But we
policy is
don't know
about
that that's
questions
going to
like
be
this.
the
It's
case
about being
across
able
the
to
board.
think
And very
not
quickly,
just
there
in
will be
terms
real quick, I
of
want to
a
jump into the
particular
hot topic
event,
of the day, which is
but
preemption.
how things
You
happen in
like
general,
the House
and be able to
version of
think
preemption
about the various
as opposed
costs
to the Senate
and
passed version.
benefits
Is that fair
to
to say?
everyone throughout the system, because you're not
With
passing
respect
laws just for
to, well,
kids.
we believe
You
the
are
preemption.
passing laws that will
We think
affect
the
everyone in this
preemption is an
country, and
important
probably to an extent
concept
everyone in the
to
world.
start with,
Right?
because
When the US or the
right now,
EU
and
does
I've got
something
46 seconds.
in
I just
terms
want
of
to nail
tech
this down.
regulation,
You like
it
the House
impacts
version
how
of
internet
preemption
companies
better
behave
than the
elsewhere. That's
Senate.
why
We're
you
still
get those
reviewing that
cookies
with our
pop-ups. That's
members
because of
specifically
EU
in which,
legislation.
but we believe there
It's
needs
just
to be a strong
easier
national standard
for these
everybody.
tech companies
Mr.
to
Thayer, you do not like
have
the
their
preemption of the House
American
version. Is
websites
that
comply
correct?
with EU
Not as much
laws
as
than to have
maybe the
two
Senate
different
version.
versions.
I prefer to be
And so,
conflict
yeah, these are
preemption
very
over as it
difficult
relates to the Senate
issues,
version.
and
I believe the
the
Senate
sort
version
of
has
it
something
might
similar to what the
sound
House
kind of
version has, but
insensitive,
it's
but
unclear right
you
now
have to
as
be
to
able to
whether or
hold the
not this is a
tragedy
conflict preemption
and
standard or
think
as it
about
relates
everything
typically
else
as a
at
broader
once.
standard.
We can't just let the conversation be about
At DPI, we
9/11
typically like
or
incremental
like
approaches
some horrific things that
to
happen to some
policy. So
kids, and not
the
think about
closer we can
the
get to a
fact that
conflict
the internet is
preemption
something that
standard, I
is used
think the
by
better
billions
off
of
we are.
people around the world
I mean,
every day,
you like the
and
conflict
their
preemption
rights
standard
matter.
over
And
the broad
we don't
preemption
like,
standard. Is that correct?
again, this is sort of hypothetical. There are hypothetical tragedies that could occur because kids are cut off
And
from parts of the
unfortunately,
internet as
Thayer, I'm
well.
out of time.
Maybe less obvious, and maybe harder to articulate that. And certainly if they are things that are going to happen in the future
Where the
because of these
components
bills,
are
we can't point
that
to
we could
them
drive
directly and say this
differences.
actually
And
happened.
are there ways to rectify that, right? I
But
mean,
they
you
are
hear
the
the
kinds of
arguments on the
things
other
that
side on why
lawmakers need to
maybe a
consider and
broad
people
sweeping
in
preemption
policy
would be
need to consider
beneficial.
and think about.
But you hear
Because
compelling arguments too on the other side
choices
of allowing
like
states the
this
flexibility to do their thing too.
matter,
So
and they have an enormous impact.
unfortunately, Chairman, I'm out of time, so I yield back. But I still want to.
Yeah, and I think two strong points. One is there's like an incentive to engage in security theater, like similar to after the Patriot Act. There was like one failed shoe bombing attempt that I think people were like curious if it would have even worked. And now, for all time, we have to take our shoes off at the airport. And visibly, they're doing something. Are they actually protecting us, or are they just inconveniencing us? It's, open question. I think similarly, online, there is an incentive for folks to have something to show that they are doing something, even if it doesn't work. And I also just say, like, following up on Jabron's points earlier, that like one of the big tragedies of the last policy is it's pitting, communities against each other, and that like, families that have suffered this tragedy are like on opposing sides to marginalized communities or other folks that like have already seen a lot of their speech rights infringed and could see it infringed more. And
interactions with chatbots and online services.
And I think that like that's not necessary. Like there are solutions out there, like privacy and competition, that we're all aligned on across the board. And so like let's just do those things. And if they don't work, we can keep talking. But like I would prefer to see a lot of folks kind of aligning more on things that there's broad agreement on across a lot of impacted groups.
Sensitive data about their emotions.
And I'm going to pause because Member Kelly often has
they may look to these
smart
tools
stuff to
receive
say.
guidance on addressing their struggles in lieu of a friend, family member, or trusted adult. We have seen this lead to devastating situations, as Adam Rain, who ended his life after seeking emotional support from ChatGPT. With that in mind, how can we prevent chatbots from attempting to diagnose, manage, or treat children?
Absolutely. So we think that chatbots should not be allowed to present themselves as mental health professionals when they are not licensed to do so. Another aspect of this that's worth thinking about is like this is another good example of why broad preemption would be concerning in this circumstance. Chatbots, basically all generative AI services are data vacuums. They are collecting and compiling information from first parties, from third parties, from data brokers all over the internet, and they are still in need of more and ever more data to train their services. If we preempt states' ability to deal with that issue, along with the issue of the prompts that children are giving to services that are, as you noted, very private and related to extremely sensitive information, we will be failing children if we leave that gap in federal law and at the state level as well.
Sure. You answered my other question, like how do we protect? But I did want to ask everyone really quick. This is a question that was posed to me that I'm just going to ask. Someone wanted to know, why don't we just codify massive statutory damages that make it so painful to be caught that then companies will pay attention? Do you think that would work? And just go down the line.
Yes.
Oh, you do? Oh, that was short and sweet.
I think there needs to be a showing of harm.
A showing of
actual harm. Yes.
We absolutely agree that damages need to be meaningful. For example, earlier this year, the FTC issued a fine against Disney for $10 million for COPPA violations. Disney is a $200 billion company. $10 million is a rounding error. We need any damages that come as a result of violations of these privacy laws to be meaningful so that it incentivizes compliance.
Thank you.
Yes, with strong injunctions.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the witnesses, and we'll go back.
So a few interesting things. Congresswoman Kelly is from Illinois, which is a state who has been aggressive in
our witnesses.
taking on some of these privacy and AI issues. They have, my colleagues worked on this before I got to fight, but they have some really good bills around like facial recognition and other stuff. And so like that's one of the states that's being targeted by preemption right now. The other thing is like, just as a general comment,
I have dedicated much of my
as someone who works in DC, I really like offices that like actually engage and try to understand the material. Even if I don't agree with them or they don't agree with me 100% of the time, because I feel like we have better conversations and we have more alignment on trying to come to solutions. And they're also just like more interesting to talk to. I think the offices I have the most trouble with are ones that either won't engage with the issues on a substantive level, that they're keeping it more political, or they just, don't care about substantive stuff. And so, whenever we're at these hearings, I always kind of like watch for the offices I know we've had really good conversations with. And, sometimes they say things I don't agree with. Sometimes they say things that I think are dead on.
National education campaign, similar to what the federal government has done for seatbelts and cigarettes, is
an interesting example of that. John Hickenlooper, kind of odd, but he usually asks interesting questions in the hearings. He just, I don't know, he has an interesting perspective, but he's like clearly engaged, which is nice. And, sometimes really interesting changes come out.
We are across the country.
Not that I agree with his perspectives, to be clear. But
students, parents,
similarly, it's nice to see people
and
being
administrators at schools on how to keep children safer on social media because of that harm. And so I'll say, first, on the advocacy part of your campaign, it is absolutely critical. I've mentioned this before in the hearing. There is an alarming disconnect in the awareness of how severe and pervasive the harms are. People are concerned and frightened, but they just don't understand how truly bad this is. And so your legislation in that campaign is very sorely needed to bring awareness, and that helps us and other NGOs do our job. In terms of specific education, we need help certainly on the ground. We can't cover every single child in every single school, though that is our
there
goal.
are these really complicated
in terms
balancing
of talking about best
legislation.
practices, there is a
Something
lot
that
of talk
Palone
out
has
there. It
brought
seems
up,
accessible when we
something
talk
that
about
Kate
social
has
media
brought up,
safety. There's a lot of talk out
there
there
are
about
children
social
who
media
will suffer
safety, and
because
curriculum
of
there
the
is not
in this
necessarily
package.
evidence-based.
if
and that
we
leads
create
to
an
time
environment
wasting
where,
at best and at
as
worst,
Matt has said, if
counter results or
kids are not able to have
detrimental
privacy from
results
their
to the
parents
child.
in any
And so we
way,
thank you for your
all of their
legislation. I
activity
think it's going
is
to do a lot
easily
of good. I
monitored
hope
by
it
their
passes.
parents, that
Thank you.
puts children
Mr.
in
Lucas.
abusive
Thank you
situations
for your
in a
work
much
as
worse
well in
place
protecting the
than they
safety
are
of minors
today, where
online
it
and
is
your perspective on
potentially
modernizing
easier for them
COPPA
to
for the
reach out to
21st
someone, right?
century.
I think
When it was originally
this sort
enacted,
of
of course,
ties into
it
this
was well
question of like,
before
on the
today's
one hand,
landscape
privacy is
of
very
digital
important,
devices
and
and
also
online
so is
platforms.
community. That
One of the
isolation
principles
is really
that you
harmful,
have
and
discussed is the approach
if we are
to
doing things
child
that
and
encourage
teen privacy
isolation,
and restricting
they're going to be
advertising to
quiet
minors.
tragedies because of that.
COPPA
They might
2.0
be
would
harder to
prohibit
identify,
targeted
but
advertising to children
I
and
think
teens. But
during
would
the
you
COVID
explain for us
pandemic,
how
during the height of the
targeted
pandemic, when everyone
advertising
was locked
differs
down,
from
we really saw the
contextual
psychological toll
advertising
that
and the
isolation
risk that targeted advertising poses
inflicted
to
on
young
people en masse.
Absolutely. Thank you
And
very much for that
there are
question.
many people for whom the
So targeted
internet is
advertising
a
involves
vital,
delivering
or in some
advertisements that are
cases,
specific
only
to an
social
individual
outlet. I
based
certainly, a
on
lot of my
their
friends
online
are
behavior,
not
and the
in
information that may
DC.
be
I can
collected
only
about them.
interact with them
So think of
online. And
perhaps creating a
if
profile or a
it becomes
dossier
harder
on an
to communicate with
individual.
people online,
Machine would do this and then
people
deliver
will be more
advertisements
isolated,
that
and that will
seem
have real
suitable according to
consequences.
the automated system to that individual. Chairman, Ranking Member Pallone.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was saying that's a really good point. And something we've raised quite a bit. The research on how the internet impacts youth is actually quite mixed. Trends a little negative, but there are a lot of positives and a lot of, negatives, and they mix in weird ways. And I think that a lot of research on this has been sort of like
specific information and creating a repository of very
distorted in a way in which it's, they're pretending like everything online is awful for minors and whoever. One of the sort of interesting aspects, and like even the report that the Biden administration released, that I think a lot of the parents groups and stuff were relying on, identified an interesting aspect with like LGBTQ youth, and they were just like better at using the internet than everyone else. Like legitimately, I think probably because it was a lifeline to find communities of people like them. We're better at curating their own communities, creating sort of like positive mental health communities, and filtering out like negative aspects of the internet.
Depression and eating
And,
disorders, bullying,
and that is something that
trafficking and abuse
is missing in all these
and
conversations,
exposure to
and also
or
just
access
like,
to drugs and
it's
suicidality.
why
And
we
it
fight
feels
so
really
hard
almost
against these
impossible
bills
for
that are going to
parents
cut
to
kids
protect
off from
their kids
communities,
online.
because
This bill,
those
you
communities are
already
the
saw a
ones that are
picture
going
of
to suffer the
Sammy,
most.
is named after Sammy Chapman, who when he was just 16,
Yeah, on a personal
bought a
level, I grew
fentanyl-laced
up
pill
in a
over
really good
Snapchat,
environment
and it killed
personally,
him.
but
One pill.
in a very
And
rural
Sammy's
area.
dad, Sam, is in
And
the room
so the people
today, and
around
I
me
just
were
want to
lovely and
thank you, Sam,
supportive,
for
but
your
also there were
advocacy
like
and
100
for
people that
stepping
I
up to
could
protect other
realistically
kids
interact with
from that same
as a child
fate.
in my immediate
Sammy's law is
area. And
simple.
so
It
for
would
me,
just
the
make sure
internet
parents
was
can
like
monitor their
my main
teens on
social
social
outlet
media, and
for
we worked so
years
hard to
growing
find the
up.
right balance so
It was
parents are
incredibly
alerted
important. And
by
there were
third-party watchdog
definitely
apps,
elements of my internet
but
use that
kids' privacy
were
is
not great
also
for me, I'm
protected.
sure.
And so it's sort of like
And
if
I
certain
think without
topics
it,
rise up,
I would
then
have
a
been far
parent
worse off.
gets a
And I think
warning.
people in
But this
rural
only
areas
works if
tend
the
to not
social
really
media
be
companies will
highlighted as a
allow
group in these
these
discussions. But,
watchdog apps to work with them.
if you live in the middle of
Mr.
nowhere,
Berkman, thank you for being
your
here
friends
today. I
are
was
on the internet,
wondering if you could just
mostly.
expand on why
So
the
it's important that you can
existing
access them.
settings and controls for minors on social media apps just aren't cutting it, and why we need these watchdog apps.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for your co-leadership of this legislation, especially given your background as a pediatrician. And I say that as a son of a pediatrician, so I have reverence for that experience. Sammy's Law is an essential part of this puzzle in terms of protecting children. First of all, it protects against almost the full spectrum of harms that are impacting children. You named a lot of them, not even all of them. There is a lot of them, to be clear. We have mentioned numerous times in this hearing that the social media platforms
Not a
have an
conflict of
inherent
interest.
conflict of interest
Sorry, it's just
between our
annoying.
children's safety and their profits. They move slowly. And a perfect example here is drug trafficking over social media. We started seeing, this was not really a major harm when we started our work as the Organization for Social Media Safety. It really exploded on the scene around 2020, and we started seeing a lot of deceased children because of drugs that they purchased over social media. We saw safety software companies, which do exist today and are actively protecting children, immediately act to make sure that they were keeping up with the language used by dealers to communicate with children, the emojis, the acronyms. Meanwhile, it took these social media platforms years to even acknowledge the problem. And so that is point number one. Point number two, really quickly, I'll make really quickly, is this technology, sending parents alerts, maintaining a child's privacy as well, alerts just on the harm, is incredible technology. We are able to alert parents to imminent risk. The social media platforms cannot do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to cut you off there. I want to make a couple more comments. We've heard about this today. I want to just talk about KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act.
So Sammy's law, just, to refresh people, that was the law that
bill that passed
started off with some good ideas and ended poorly.
Has teeth.
I think that we are
a duty of care for social media companies. Really
generally
accountable. And yet the version
in favor
that we are
of
taking on of KOSA
open protocols,
it is toothless. It
competition,
does not give the enforcement
interoperability.
mechanisms. And all
But
the people, I was a co-lead of
the
last
bill
week,
specifically
supported it
mandates
last time, are
surveilling
feeling
kids
so,
and identifying keywords to
frustrated
send
that,
text
this is
messages
not
or
the best
messages to
we
their
can
parents,
do. And I
highlighting
just
conversations where it was
want
used. And
to emphasize that
kids have privacy rights
previous
too.
bill, the one with teeth, is the one we should be bringing up today to really protect kids online. Similarly,
Yes,
there was a
Simon
discussion
Rogue, I mean,
today
as
about getting
you
kids
brought up
under
the Patriot
16
Act
off
earlier,
social
but
media. I just want to
drug
say
prohibition is another
there is
example of something that
Kids Off
Congress has
Social
been
Media
trying to
Act,
enforce for
COSMA,
decades now,
that
and
also has a
is
bill,
just a
bipartisan, in the
endlessly
Senate
moving
with a
target.
pass that path
They're
that can
not
be
going to
signed by the
stop people
president,
from selling drugs
and we
online.
need to be
That's just not
taking
going to happen.
that bill up if we're serious.
It's already
about doing
illegal to do so.
soon
It's
to
not
protect our
like
kids. Thank
this
you.
is
You're
like
back.
perfectly,
Generally yields
it's not
back
like
over
Congress has
to
never done
Representative
anything to prevent
King
this
for
from
his
happening.
5 minutes of question.
Like the idea
Thank
that
you, Mr.
we
Chairman.
need yet another
And
law
thank you
to do
our
the thing that is
distinguished
already
witnesses
illegal.
for being here today.
Yeah, I would agree
Protecting
with Silent Rogue. This is something I always struggle with. I think
The internet
that,
and social media have brought many
I mean, it's
opportunities to
plausible that there are
American
ways to reduce some
However,
harm.
they've also
Obviously, it
brought
needs to
with
be
them
balanced against
dangerous
privacy
harm
rights and security
America's
risks.
children.
But
I look
for the
forward to
most
hearing
part,
more
like I grew
witnesses on
up
how
also
we can
in
ensure
a
that
small,
parents have the tools
was
necessary
a
to
smaller town,
safely
became
guide
a
their
mid-sized
children
town, but
through
like
their online activities.
had a huge
Video-
volume of
Mr.
drugs
Burke,
coming through, and it's just like,
Video
as a
games
kid,
are
as an adult,
part of
like
daily
I just felt like
activities
everyone
many
knew where to
families in
get
New
drugs at
Jersey
all time, and that
and
was
across this nation.
before anyone was selling anything
While many
online. So
view these games as merely toys, the truth is that many
I don't
video
know.
games
I
have
often
become
try to
fully
like
functioning
equate
social
these laws to what it would look
years,
like in the
the
physical
gaming
world.
industry has defaulted to open communication,
And like
letting
malls, when
anyone
I grew up,
talk
was a
to
big
anyone.
mall parking lots
That
was
is
a big
why
area
I
where people could
introduced
just
Safer
go buy
Gaming.
drugs, and it's like,
My bill requires
you
that
know,
for minors,
do you need to
the
surveil all
default
mall
setting
parking lots?
must
Do
be
you
the
need to like
safest, meaning voice and text chat with
to have
strangers
like strict
is turned off
identity
until
and
parent
other
turns it
things
on.
about people interacting in
Can
mall
you
parking
discuss
lots?
how minors are using
Do you need to
social
put a
gaming
lot of
platforms and the
liability
risks
on
for
mall
minors
owners? I don't know.
using these platforms?
Doesn't really seem like good policy to me.
Thank you very much for the question, Congressman. We believe that these types of gaming platforms that you call social gaming, they are social media. They are a space where children and adults can go on, meet other people on the platform, and exchange content in the gaming situation, context, video and text mainly. And so because of that, we see the same risks, essentially, that we see on other types of social media platforms. Severe cyberbullying, sextortion, sexual predation, abduction as well. So there's a full range of very serious risks here.
So as a follow-up to that, we know that predators often use the shared interest of a video game to build trust with a child. The statistics show that about 2/3 of minors say that an online-only contact has asked them to move from a public chat into a private conversation on another platform.
I have to say that
How
statistic
were the
that he is
default
citing
safeguards in
is
my
pretty
bill,
wild.
which
Like,
limit communication with
uh,
strangers
of
automatically,
course, like that's a
disrupt that
normal
cycle
thing that
before it even
happens.
starts?
Like, I
Well,
mean,
the short answer is
growing up,
it is as
I met a lot
effective
of
as you
people
can
in
get with a
games, and some
legislative
of those
change to
people became my
mitigate
friends
this
in
threat.
other
If we were
contexts. Like,
removing the
he's
ability for
painting every
adults
contact with
to
strangers on the
contact
internet as like
minors over gaming
inherently
platforms,
bad here. He's
that is
basically
almost
saying that
entirely effective in
2/3
terms of
of
mitigation.
children
And let's be clear,
have
when children go
been
on
like
these
that these
gaming
are all
sites, they are
predators, but like
spending
a lot of the
anywhere
times it's
from
other
20 minutes to
kids,
many
right? Like
hours to
many
many
of the
hours a
I would say most
day
of the people
over
as a
months
minor I was interacting with online
with
were also
adults that
minors,
they do
or
not
they
know
were
in real life. That is a lot of
young
time
adults,
for
and
adults
we were
with
playing games together.
malintent to
I just
spend with a child and conduct that grooming process.
I
We
think
saw
it's
in
very
April, I should
bad
note, in
that
April, a 10-year-old
pretty
abducted
normal
after using the gaming
safe
platform
behavior is being
Roblox. This
painted
is an
here as like
active, serious threat.
inherently predatory.
Thank you, Mr. Berkman.
Certainly, there are
Mr.
unsafe
Thayer,
things that can happen
the
online,
data is alarming.
but it
Nearly
feels like we
70%
are,
of
or
teens
Congress
report
anyway, is
playing
coming back
online
to this sort
games
of
with
like stranger
strangers
danger
at least
mentality
weekly,
that
and
has been like
three-quarters of players have
driven
experienced
higher moral panics. That
harassment
like
in these games.
any interaction
My
here
bill
is like
takes an important
suspect.
step to
And
address
it's
that.
like, well, you're
The Safer
advocating
Gambling
for
Act says
isolating
if a
children,
user is
preventing
under
them from
18,
building friendships.
they should
I have
not
so
be
many friends
participating
that
in
I've made
chats,
both as
particularly with
minor and as
adults,
an
unless
adult
a parent
online
explicitly
through
allows
games.
for it.
It's
Mr. Thayer,
this is just
what
personal way of
harms may can
saying.
arise when every teenager playing an online video
Yeah,
game
I actually have a
automatically
counterexample.
communication
When I was
to a
in
random
college
stranger.
and going on through
Well,
most of my
Congressman, the short answer is
20s,
too much.
I joined
And I
a
think you've
gaming
seen that
community
even
that
outside of
was
your typical games that you see on Xbox or
back in the day when
PlayStation,
you would
see
like
it on
run
mobile apps.
servers
I mean,
and build
it's been a
communities and establish
long-standing
relationships,
problem
and you'd
with
always be playing with the
mobile apps
same
in
people.
particular. Pokemon
And we
Go,
had
for instance, was
a like a
originally
general
hot button
rule
game,
of like
and it
no
actually
kids, not like for
indirectly,
content
or
reasons,
actually
just because
directly
like
led kids to the
kids were more
predators,
trolly
because
and
the
annoying
point of the
and
game was to
like
go into public
disrupted
areas,
a lot of
go find
community
Pokemon,
dynamics in
which
ways that were like
guess who picked up
we
that
just were
kid's
sick
life
of it,
back,
like
so
you know,
tracked kids with, Pokemon.
rage baiting, that kind of
So
stuff.
again,
And
this is a
so
long-standing issue. It's been something that's
it was like
strategically
mostly
maybe
people my age
categorically
group,
ignored
college
by the
people
tech
a little
companies,
older.
and maybe it's time for a lot of
But we
congressional
didn't have any
oversight
like
and legal
specific checks or anything. And
Thank your
one
panel
person who was on the
here
forums,
today and
who people generally liked, just like at some point started trolling people, causing a lot of problems, found out that he was like, I think like 14 or something, and it was like kind of like typical like childish behavior. And like I had to deal with the situation of like, do we ban this guy? Like, what do we do? Sat down, had a conversation online through text. Made him understand that like the whole point of the community was to be supportive and like not assholes to each other, and you're like definitely violating that rule. And decided that he was not going to be banned permanently. Came back, great member of the community. Everyone enjoyed playing with him. Went on to college. I completely forgot he existed, and then like messaged me out of the blue and said, when I was a kid, I was falling in with people who were like making me think that like all his behaviors are like great and funny, and like you and the other folks in the community taught me that like we're all human and like people should be treated with like respect and other things, and like really appreciate that. And he was like changed his behavior. He's like got a girlfriend, he's working out, he's having a great college experience, and it was like very heartwarming. But it was like weird for me because again, like this was like not anything that I sought out or any other community member sought out. But yeah, I mean, like those kinds of interactions can be very positive for kids. But like, you know, a lot of times online, you don't know what anyone's age is.
We should all be able to agree today.
Yeah, I think this gets to the point of why like age segregating the internet on an absolute basis is probably not a good idea. Like, I don't know, it's this weird idea that I think has come into the cultural vogue from like 80s or 90s about stranger danger, and this idea that like kids should be strict in kids' spaces, adults should be strict in adult spaces. But you know, for most of human history, people grew up interacting with elders and adults, and there are advantages and disadvantages to both of these things. And certainly there are it is, for
than
example,
preemption.
not at all a bad
There's
thing
no
that there is like
mistake that
kids
the only
media.
Republican proposal
That there
would
are
freeze
like people taking
AI
care to create
and
things
big
that
tech
may be
companies from
more
all
interesting to
oversight.
kids or more
Without a
digestible
comprehensive
to them.
federal
But at the
standard
same time,
existing state laws
participating in
already,
these mixed age
only
spaces
legislation
often
keeping
helps
kids safe
people
online
be better
right now.
socialized, that they like,
Without
as
comprehensive
this kid did
federal
in your story,
online
right?
data
They're
privacy
able
law,
to
all of these attempts
take cues from
at
people
protecting our children
who
online
are
will
more
be in
like
vain.
older and more experienced than them. And at the
Today's
same time, that
legislative
can also
package
protect them too,
is
right?
missing
By
funding.
having these sorts of relationships, if they do run into
This
a situation they're
includes
uncomfortable with,
the
if
state
there are
the
a
state laws
variety of
include state
trusted
bills like the
adults in their
AI
life, it's
companion
easier
law
for them to
in New
come to
York
somebody with a
that
problem.
clearly and
Um,
regularly notify
Whereas
users that they are not
isolated children,
interacting with a
children
human,
who only
and
interact
detect
with other
signs of
kids and
self-harm
their parents,
and can
it becomes
direct
much harder
users to
for
crisis
them to reach out to
resources.
somebody just for
Any kind
advice,
of
even,
broad
right? Like, not, I
preemption
mean,
or
both in a
moratorium on
potentially
existing
dangerous
AI
predatory
state
situation, but just on a,
legislation would
a
kneecap
like a
the
practical,
important
like
work states like New York have
mundane
already done
case.
to protect
As a kid,
kids.
I socialized with a lot of adults,
Instead of
and
talking in
I
circles
felt like I got a lot of
and
wisdom from
restating
that,
the
and
obvious,
learned a lot from being
today
able
I
to have all these
encourage my
figures in my
colleagues
life.
to finally
I think it's
act.
good that kids have that, and
Demand the reinstatement of
strictly
Commissioner
age segregating
Saunter.
the internet
Demand
will,
the exclusion of an
cut some of
AI
that off.
moratorium in must-pass legislation. Demand that Donald Trump stop giving handouts to
Whoops,
big tech
sorry, accidentally
and
closed the
let
stream.
Congress do our job to protect kids and adults online with comprehensive legislation. As I look out at the many families representing their loved ones here today, I find today's hearing extremely vexing. My staff has noted that this committee has had at least 5 hearings on the threats to kids online over the past 5 years. This is ridiculous. It is time for us to act, colleagues. Every moment that we sit here restating the obvious, children and our families are at risk. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
General Lady yields back. Now I recognize Ms. Houchin for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for holding this hearing today and for the bipartisan work reflected in today's hearing. I thank the witnesses for being here and for offering your testimony. The importance of this work is impossible to overstate because behind every policy choice are families who are living with the consequences. I've been deeply moved by the parents, some of who are here today, who, despite losing a child, continue to fight for stronger protections so no other family has to experience the same tragedy. Their experience brings an urgency and a clarity for policymakers, and we owe it to them to turn that into meaningful change. Every parent I talk to is doing everything they can to guide their kids and protect them online, on social media, through gaming platforms, and now AI. And they're simply overwhelmed and cannot keep up. Policymakers can barely keep up with the advance in technology. So this Congress, we're recognizing how quickly the risks are evolving.
There's an interesting
I
contradiction
worked to
here.
launch the bipartisan
She's
Kids
raising
Online
this
Safety
issue that
Caucus so
tech
members can
changes
stay
quickly,
current and
which is
engage with
true and
parents,
is this complicating factor
researchers,
in
schools, and
making
industry.
laws about tech.
I'm also proud that today's
And
hearing
in
includes bills that
theory,
I have been
how
working on, the
KOSA
AWARE
and
Act,
bills like
the
it
Safe Bots
would
Act,
be
and the
more
Reset
responsive
Act,
is
as
by
well as the
putting
Parents Over Platforms Act, which I'm
the FTC
helping
basically in
co-lead
charge
with
of figuring
Representative
out how to
Hawkins' office.
actually implement a lot of this stuff in practice.
Kids deserve the same safety
And
mindset
the contradiction
online
here
that
is
we
that
have
they're also
with car
talking about doing a lot of
seats
preemption,
and
which will
playgrounds
prevent
and
states
other harms.
from trying
The
to react
bills
to new
today
technology.
reflect that approach.
Um,
The AWARE
so
Act gives parents and educators clear,
it's sort
accessible
of doing that.
guidance
It's
on
sort
how
of being
chatbots
like, well, we're going
work,
to do
what red
something
flags to
that
look
will be more
for,
flexible
and where to
because
go
it's setting a new
to for help.
standard,
The Safe Bots Act ensures
but
no
it's
AI
putting it in the
system can
hands of the
impersonate a
FTC,
licensed
who, as we
professional, and
discussed,
requires
is not a
age-appropriate
neutral
disclosure so kids
or
always
effective
know that they're
regulator at
talking
this point.
to software,
And it's
not a
also
human
taking
being.
away
The
those
Reset
options from states.
Act
Just
asks whether 13 should still be the standard, the age of internet adulthood. Given that research shows
Clownfishing, I am
social
horrified
media
that computer
harms
lab
fall
doesn't
below
exist
the
anymore,
age
if
of
that's true.
16,
Most of
bill
my
creates a
childhood
bright
memories,
line and a national
positive
rule that
childhood memories of
platforms
high
may
school
not
were in a
maintain
computer
accounts
lab.
for users under 16. They must delete known under 16 accounts
I'm like
and their data and must
technically
follow a single standard
on the
enforced
edge of
by
being a
the
Zoomer,
FTC and
but
states'
I
attorneys
recently
general.
learned that a lot of
The
kids don't
legal and
understand
global
like
trends
file
point in the
hierarchies
same
anymore.
direction.
And I just
Protecting
like,
minors from
how do
high-risk
you use a
digital
computer if
environments
you don't
is both
understand?
necessary and clearly
I guess people used to
permissible
like
and
apps on
possible.
phone.
Our job is to learn from these developments so we can set guardrails worthy of the moment. And I look forward to working with colleagues on both sides
I
of
will
the
say,
aisle to
and this
accomplish
gets back
that.
to
I do have a few questions with the
Congresswoman
remaining time that I
Houchin's
have. I'm going to go to Mr.
5
Thayer.
minutes,
We've
is
heard a lot
that
of
she spent a lot of
concerns
time talking about the
raised,
parents that she speaks to.
about the First Amendment
And,
with relative to some of these bills.
you know, obviously it's
The
important that all
11th
members
Circuit,
speak to their
decision on HB3,
constituents,
the
but
Florida
like what I've
legislation,
consistently
emphasized that states
found
can act
and is
decisively
that
to
there's a
protect minors
disconnect
from harmful
between
digital environments, even when platforms
who
claim editorial rights.
the members are talking
Does
about on
that
this
signal, in
issue
your view, that
and like the
Congress
broader
can,
community
likewise,
and what they care
adopt
about, and it
Reset's
kind
type
of gives
bright
them
line
a
federal standard under
a
16
distorted
account
lens of
prohibition
what's going
deletion
on. Like
without
they're
triggering First
hearing
Amendment
from
concerns that big tech continues
people
to
that
raise?
suffered tragedy and
Absolutely. So the 11th Circuit
in
has
very
spoken,
specific
did
ways and like no one
uphold a
else.
law that was somewhat similar
And
to
like we talk
what,
to
you're
and we make it a
describing. And
point
just to
to
reiterate
solicit
what
like
the
feedback
ruling
from,
basically
to ask
said,
questions
which was
of
just a
like
rehashing
lots of
of
communities
what,
across the
was cited in the
spectrum,
Supreme
and
Court
obviously folks in this
TikTok.
chat have
Garland
completely
essentially
different
said that,
perspectives
the
and
court
concerns
basically clarified that
and,
the law,
you
a
know,
law that has to be based
ways
off
in
of
which
what it's
these bills
attempting
will
to
impact
regulate.
them and
If
stuff
the,
like
if
that.
the regulation is attempting
And
to regulate something that is a non-speech
they
related,
claims
even
they're
the
not hearing
ancillary
from that. I
aspects
don't know.
of that
Sometimes I think
regulation
that
does
they're
impact
not.
speech,
They're not
it is likely going to be content neutral
being
with
completely
supervised.
honest about that, because I know
So
we've seen a
think
lot
that
of
what
comments
the 11th Circuit did was clarify something
from
that the
those
Supreme Court has
communities.
said, and I think
But
would be very
yeah, I
wise
mean,
to,
there is a problem
heed that
in
guidance
that
when we
like
move forward accordingly.
Thank you.
a lot of
We
these,
talked some today about preemption. I
like
just
when
want
we're
to
talking
note
about
that,
actual constituents that the members are talking to, they're usually
do
like
seek a
upper middle
federal standard
class. It's
so that
usually
states
from like a
cannot go
specific
below.
socioeconomic
I
background.
certainly wouldn't
They usually
want
have
a
certain
state like
perspectives.
California, who has a
And
13-year-old standard.
if that's the only
So if we're
people they're
talking about
hearing from,
preemption, I
it
think we have to be
distorts their
cognizant that
thinking.
if there are, we want the states to
Which
be
is why
nimble,
I'm glad earlier in
but
the
we
hearing we
also don't
talked
want
more
them to go
about,
below,
you know,
a
families
standard
in
set
which,
federally
you know,
that we have determined
there
would
isn't a good
protect
relationship,
kids.
slash
Otherwise,
there
we
could be
might as well
abusive
not do
relationship
this
between
work and
parents
just
and
leave it up to
kids.
the
Like growing
states.
up, I knew of a
Protecting
lot
children
of
in the digital age is
kids
one of our most important
who, or a
responsibilities
few
that we have as
examples again,
elected
small
leaders.
town,
It's
of
clearly
kids who
one
were
of the
thrown out of
most
their house for being
important and moral
gay,
things
who, you know,
responsibilities we have as parents.
parents
AI
were
is not going
awful
away. Social
across the
media is not
different
going away.
types of
It's our
things.
obligation to
And
defend and
like,
protect
you
the
know, when we're
innocent
talking
and the
about
next
like
generation.
how these
Thank you, Mr.
parental
Chairman.
tools, if not
Thank you,
enacted
lady, for all
correctly, is
the
going to
good
give
work.
these parents additional avenues of
Next,
abuse of
we'll
their kids,
recognize Representative Evans for
additional
his
problematic
comments.
contacts. Like,
Thank you,
that's
Mr.
all
Chairman,
stuff that
Ranking
really
Member,
needs to be
and of course,
considered.
to all of our witnesses for coming. My first question will be to Mr. Berkman. Before I came to Congress, I spent over a decade as a cop in the Denver metro area, and I saw the fentanyl crisis grow in my state and across the country. In 2023, Colorado had the second highest overdose rate
So
in the
an
nation
example of
for
what Matt was talking about, I
teenagers, and
posted in the chat.
75% of
It's
that
not
was
totally
attributed
synced up,
to
so you're going
fentanyl.
to see this in a minute.
Earlier
But
this year, we had the sixth largest fentanyl seizure in
a
U.S.
few years
history
ago,
happen in the south side
Fight
of the Denver
helped
metro area.
organize parents of trans
6.8
children
million lethal
and
doses of
delivered
fentanyl
a
in
letter
that
with over 100
seizure.
signatures to
And we know a lot of this
lawmakers
stuff is
bringing
trafficked
up
to our
these problems with
kids
KOSA,
through
the
things like
impact it will
social
have on
media. So
LGBTQ
to
youth.
counter this threat, one of the bills
So
that I'm
it's important to say that, like,
is the No
yeah,
Fentanyl on
not
Social
every
Media
parent
Act,
has this
which
perspective,
seeks to address this problem by
and
assessing the
it
full scope
matters.
of
Like, if
how
you're a
social
parent
media is
and
used to
you
be
care
able
about
to
this
traffic
issue,
fentanyl to our kids.
it's worth
Can you
reaching out and
discuss the
saying,
role
I'm a
of social
parent, this
media
is my
in trafficking
perspective,
drugs and how this piece of legislation
You know,
can
whether you
help
agree
to
with
resolve
us or
that
not,
issue.
Yes, thank
it's
you
really good for
for
them to
your
hear from
legislation. We
a more
enthusiastically
diverse group.
support it, and we need it. Children are acquiring drugs over social media. The accessibility is astonishing. This is not the situation that we had pre-social media in terms of the accessibility. They are able to get on, quickly connect with a drug dealer, sometimes one that they don't know. There is solicitation happening with regularity to teens. They're able to conduct a drug transaction and then have drugs delivered to their door like a pizza. This is the tragic story of what happened to 16-year-old Sammy Chapman as well. I will note this is also happening cross-platform, which is a safety concern, where drug dealers can advertise on one platform, conduct a conversation and transaction on another, and then receive payment on yet another. That is a very severe problem. So we need your bill to understand the full facet of how this is happening, the features that are enabling it to happen as well, and go undetected.
Online games with the chat feature. I mean, again, I saw it during the course of my career. This is for a situation, what we just discussed is situations where somebody is potentially looking to go buy drugs. That's their intent. Can you talk a little bit about storefront apps where maybe somebody is not actually looking to go buy drugs, they just bought a painkiller that they thought was legitimate, but it ends up
I'm sorry, one of my coworkers just sent us a message saying that the phrase "conduct a drug transaction" is the most old white guy phrase she's ever heard.
Or fraudulent pill. So can you just talk about how policy solutions like what we're discussing today can be used to fix some of the storefront nature of these apps where people are buying something they think is legit but ends up being fraudulent?
Well, the focus of this hearing on children, so I'll focus on children there. We see this happening with children. And again, Sammy Chapman
Sorry, I'm not allowed to get the hearing. I was just about to get the
Xanax
phrasing there.
over social media. I wish I could name all the
Yeah, again, this is horrific, right?
That's the case with a lot
overdose
of parents
deaths are horrible
as well.
and
so
it's really
legislation
unclear
like Sammy's
how
law would help
any of these
protect
bills would
against
solve
a
this
child
problem
that is
without
otherwise bored
just
trying to
saying
go
you don't
out
get any
and get
sort of
something like
privacy
Adderall,
anymore.
Xanax,
There's no more private
Vicodin,
messaging,
which we're
which is
now
just not an
seeing
acceptable
being poisoned
trade-off.
with fentanyl and being lethal.
We can't just say
and
no more
that
privacy.
education awareness as well. But Sammy's
This
law
is really
is a
important.
very
It
strong
matters.
deterrent to that behavior.
I will just say that, like,
And then
I have
here,
met with trust and safety people and chatted with them and learned like a little bit more about that field of platform and stuff like that. And I will say that, like,
many situations.
my understanding of trust and safety is that this is the kind of stuff that really keeps them up and is a constant problem and is adversarial in that, like, especially when it comes to a lot of these scams and fraud and other things, there are people overseas who see a lot of money to be made by doing these kinds of things. There was, I heard a presentation from a woman who uncovered like the pig butchering fraud scam, which you can Google. It is insane. It's like heavily integrated in like Chinese mafia and stuff like that. But
20 seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of
our children are
effort
no
being
longer
put
safe in
into
their
figuring
homes.
out how these
That includes
platforms are
cyberbullying
being
as well,
used
which
for
does
like
not end
crime
at the end of this
and
so
finding
there are a
solutions. And
range of
it's like it's never
solutions
going to be
on here. I
perfect.
have 5 seconds. Let me highlight
It's not something
Sammy's
that
law
like
once
a lot of
again.
platforms
All
are
the
ignoring.
dangers that you mentioned,
But to Jabron's point, like the solutions
as
of
that
we're
risk
going to
is
spy on
imminent
everyone's
and
chat
occurring
doesn't
so that
really
they can
work
provide,
for people
immediate
and creates a lot of
life-saving
problems.
Looping the parents sounds good. Yield back, Chairman.
It does also seem like lawmakers are not really like accurately interacting with the facts, because I believe I heard the member say that like video games with a chat are dangerous for kids interacting with drug dealers. And I don't know. I mean, Jabron and I play like a lot of online games, and you don't know who you're. Like there's no like geographic approximation. Like you could be playing with someone across the United States or in Europe. Like there's no real way that I can imagine a drug dealer would start creeping online games as a way of building up their customer base.
Social media has been
I have played more games online than I am willing to disclose publicly. And I will just say, no one has ever tried to sell me drugs in a video game. There's never even remotely come up. I'm just imagining, we play Arc Raiders there. I just imagine someone trying to sell me drugs in Arc Raiders. Like, what? It's totally incoherent.
As a father,
but just sort of raise the point of like, these are like amazing interactions that build community and are like fun and create social interactions. They're often like pro-social, educational, or just silly or weird or random. And like to say that is a threat and to take that away because maybe drugs might be sold by somebody somewhere. It also kind of just gets into this issue that I don't know what the name of it is. I call it the law of big numbers, but it's whenever you have like a big enough population of anything, like something crazy will have happened in that group of people. It could be you know,
Just as brick and mortar
very
stores
bad and
are
tragic.
held responsible for
It could
selling
be
age
good, it could be
restricted material
anything,
like
but like you're
tobacco or
going to
alcohol to
find the
minors.
weirdest
App Store
examples,
Accountability Act
the
requires
most horrific
digital app stores
examples in
accountable
any
for
large enough
providing
population. The
adult
population
or
of
addictive
folks
material
online
to
is
minors.
basically everyone.
Kids cannot
And so it's really hard to tune policy with that. Like
consent.
you're not
And
going to figure
any
out something
company
that works
exposes
in
them to
every
adult
instance
or
that
addictive
solves
material
every
should and
problem,
will be held accountable.
that, you know,
The App
fixes
Store
everything.
Accountability Act holds big
It's
tech
impossible.
companies
And you
to
really
the
have
same
to,
standard as local corner stores.
you know, do your best
the
as a
next generation by empowering
policymaker
parents
to
now and making clear
balance those
that when it comes to
interests.
safeguarding
And
our
it's
children,
unfortunate, but
no one
like
gets a free pass.
we're starting to see the
And I just learned
conversation
this, so I'll get right
shift
to it, Mr.
in a
Thayer.
better way,
As
especially with
excited as
Kate being
I am
on the panel.
to lead
But,
this App
you
Store
know,
Accountability Act,
for a while, we were
I
not
do
hearing
wanna
any
share the
balancing. We're
logic
not
is
hearing
very
any
simple.
sort of like
App stores are a
recognition
gateway
that
to
like
the
some of this
internet
stuff
for
is
social
going
media
to
for
cause a
our
lot of
children.
problems.
You played a
And
very
like,
critical
you know, that
role
was
in shaping similar
very
legislation.
scary
Can you state
for the
one more
internet
time
and for our work.
why placing the burden
Yeah,
to verify
something
a
that
user's age on the App Store
yeah, I certainly noticed, but
rather
watching
than
these
on
and people in
individual
the chat may have
websites or
noticed too is
apps
that
is the
there are
most
actually very few
efficient and
statistics actually cited in these
privacy-protective way
hearings.
to
And like
ensure
one of the
online
few
safety for
statistics
kids?
that was cited
Well,
earlier
thank you, Congressman, for
is
all your
the
work on this.
what
You've been a real champion, and it's
66%
been
of kids
honor and
have
privilege working with you
had
and your
someone
staff.
in an online game try to
I
transition a
think who said it
conversation from a
better
public
was
chat to a private
Congressman
chat.
Obermonte
Like
themselves. They
that's
have the data
basically
already.
meaningless
They
as a
already
statistic.
have all of the access to
Mostly
this
they're focusing
information.
on
And not only
examples,
that,
like
they already are
specific
developing the
stories
tools
that
currently.
are,
So in the states,
again,
we
genuinely
got, I
horrific.
think, 3 states
And
to
the problem
subscribe to the
is
App Store Accountability and pass it. Texas
policymaking is not just
is
about, it's not
among
about
them. And as a result,
preventing
it actually
every
forced Apple
possible
to
bad thing from
create
happening.
the
It's about
APIs that would be
trying
necessary in order
to,
to
on
accomplish all of this.
aggregate,
All the,
minimize
as you
risk,
say, this is a very simple
protect
idea.
people's
Leverage the
rights,
existing infrastructure
create environments where
to
people are
do
free to
a amount
flourish.
of good.
These are the
And at
sorts
the
of
end of
things
the
that
day,
policymaking
they're the
focuses on.
ones calling themselves a
They
store,
need to be
not
macro. They
us.
are
So if they want to be a
right.
store, we should hold
No
them with the
matter
same
what the
accountability as
policy
any
is,
other
there will
store
be
in
horrific
any other
tragedies that
market.
happen.
It's absurd
And
that merely
when the
because you put
conversation
electrons
becomes
into a store,
focused
it's somehow
on
magically new.
these
No, they
stories,
know what they're
as it is, I
selling,
mean,
they
right,
know
we've
what's on their
heard
product, and
many of
most
the same
importantly,
stories
they know
repeated
the age of
here
their user
in this
better
hearing.
than
And I
any
mean,
other
if
company
you
in
watched
the
any of these
world.
hearings
That's
before, like
exactly right.
Matt and I
maybe you can
have,
help me to
the
respond
same
to
stories
some of,
come up
I
again and
won't say
again,
the
right?
critics, but those who
And
may
again,
not
they're
know
horrible
the
stories.
intent
I
or the
completely
details of what we're trying
understand
to do
the
here.
parents of
Can you
these
help
kids
explain
wanting
a
their
little
stories to
bit
be heard,
differently
wanting something to be done because
privacy
of this.
concerns
But
some
that
may
is not the stuff
arise?
of policymaking. We need
So
to think
I actually don't have
on
to,
a
because
macro
as
scale. We
Apple
need to
itself
think
has
about
said that they can
both
actually do
costs
all of
and
this in a
benefits
privacy
on a
conscious
large
way.
scale.
So to be
And
clear, all
it
the
just
act is really
totally
requiring
distorts
Apple
thinking
and Google to do is to
when
share an
we're
API
focused
that's
on how
encrypted.
could we have
And they do this
prevented
on
this
multiple
specific
different layers, not
bad thing that
just
happened
not just to
versus,
verify age, but
well,
actually they've
okay,
done it.
let's take a step
Every
back
time
and
you do
think,
a
what is the
financial
aggregate effect
transaction,
of
that's
these
an
things?
API. That is an
What can we
API that's
do in
connecting with
aggregate that will
some other app that
create
says,
better
hey,
conditions
the
so that
transaction
fewer
has gone
tragedies like
through.
this
Apple,
happen, more
Apple and Google
positive
act
things
as the
happen?
direct,
And
not even
this
intermediaries.
conversation is just so distorted.
They're basically the brokers to all of these issues.
Yeah, just
And
getting
they've
some
been
of the
able to
comments on
say
chat.
with a straight face that they can do so privacy
So,
all the
you know,
safeguards in
Kevin
place.
Sanchez, this
All
goes
this
back to
act
my
does
sort of
is
like
hold them
law of
accountable
big
to what
numbers,
they
or
tell
like
the American
in the
population.
legal
That is it.
profession, you know, when I went to law school, one of the things they would
Thank
always
you,
say
Mr.
is
Thayer.
bad
Thank you,
facts
Chairman
make bad
Johnson.
law. And it's just like
Chairman yields back now. Dr. Joyce.
eventually
You're
something
recognized for your 5 minutes.
highly unlikely will happen. And if it happens in a very horrific or tragic way, like there's a good chance that a lot of attention will be on it. And when you're making law based on that one instance, it's almost always going to be bad law. But at the same time, like the politics of it are really bad for people that care about good law.
AI chatbots.
You know,
And the way that these
to be honest, they're
platforms
bad
can
for
be
lawmakers. Like
keep
we've had
children
meetings
safe.
with offices where they're
As new
like,
technologies
we agree
like
with you,
AI
but if we were
chatbots
to vote against
deployed
this
online,
law, everyone would think we were terrible
honestly
people
evaluate the potential benefits
because
and
of
risks
the messaging
and
around it,
enact
because it's called the,
operational,
like, you know, keep
future-proof
kids safe
safeguards that will
against this
protect
horrific
current and
tragedy
future
that
generations.
definitely happened once, Bill,
So
or
I
whatever
welcome
it
the
is. Like, not to make
opportunity
too
to
much,
learn more
not
about
to make
the
light of it, but
proposals
like,
before us today
I'm
and
sure
how they
that
can achieve
there
our
is a
shared goal of
horrific
protecting
example of a
children
kid that bought
Mr.
drugs
Lucas,
based on an online
the Don't Sell
interaction,
Kids
and
Data
that
Act
like
is predicted
that
and
kind of stuff can
predicated
happen
on the view that data
very rarely,
practices of
but
third
like
parties
if lawmakers are just hearing that story over and over again, they have a bias in thinking that like
protections are essential,
that is
not
a
every
pervasive
use of
problem
data
with the
is
internet.
harmful. In your opinion, as drafted,
So
could
unlike
the
Matt,
Don't
I'm not a
Sell
lawyer,
Kids
but
Data Act
I
bring
have
about
listened to some lawyers talk
unintended
about
adverse
examples of this.
consequences
And one
for
that really
kids
stuck
and
with me
teens?
is in how the death
Thank you for that
penalty
question.
works. That like in most
In my
places, the
view,
death penalty,
yes.
in most states
There
that
are
even
no
still have the death penalty
exemptions
at
in
all,
this law,
there are
and I think
specific requirements. Like it
there's
has to
something
be a
that the
murder
general
under
public doesn't
particular
understand, which is
circumstances.
the many ways in which
And
data
the
is used
conceptual
to
idea here is
overseas
that it
actually
should be
provide us
reserved for
with
like the
benefits that
worst
we
of the
don't see,
worst.
such
And
as
in some
extending
cases,
auto
what
insurance to
happens is
teenagers,
someone will get
or
murdered in a horrible way.
enabling
Then
students
the
to
person charged with
apply
the
for
murder
financial
will
aid
not get the death
or
penalty, they'll get life in
be
prison
scouted
instead.
for college
And then
scholarships. There's a
the
range of
legislature in
possible
that
uses
state
that don't
will
rely
either on their own
social media
volition
data
or
that we've been
through
talking about
lobbying
today, but they
be
rely on data
convinced
that
to pass a
actually is
really
protected by other privacy
specific
laws, the FCRA and the
carve
GLBA.
out saying,
And these
like crime
laws
committed in this
already
very
provide a
particular
means
way
to protect
is
that
death
data so
penalty
it's only
eligible.
used for legitimate purposes.
And it's just like this perfect example of how, like, because there's this horrible
Continuing, Mr.
legal
Lakis,
case
the Don't Sell Kids
and
Data Act
it doesn't
includes
go the
private right of
way that,
action to enforce
I mean,
that bill.
I'm opposed to
And in
death
your written
penalty, so
testimony,
I
you state
definitely
that
think it should be
effective
happening at all. But
enforcement should be
from the
designed
perspective of
to
people who do
improve
support it, it
privacy
doesn't
and safety
the death
practices,
penalty doesn't get
and that
applied when it should.
enforcement shouldn't be
Therefore, we're going to go
watered
change
down
the law.
with
We're going to
private rights of
create this
action. That's a
other
quote
bad
from your
law that
testimony. Can
expands
you
the death penalty.
expand on that
It's
point
just
and
really
discuss how
bad.
a private right of
And
action
yeah,
can actually
you get
weaken
this sort of
enforcement
thing in
and hurt
these
consumers?
tragedies, right? Like,
Happy
maybe
to.
that law never gets
We've seen a
used, but
number
it
of
shouldn't be on the
instances
books.
across the
You
country
don't
in
need to
state
be
laws,
expanding this
especially
piece
with
by
private
piece
rights of action,
every time something
that
horrible
lead to lawsuits that are based on
And
statutory violations.
wanted to comment on
And the impact
Clown
of this,
Fishin.
there's a number of impacts. There's
Was
often-
talking
one is
about
that it causes,
listening to
firms
kids.
to act in a more defensive
Just to
posture.
like
They're trying
toot our own
to
horn. I mean,
minimize
this is
the
something
legal
that
risk
my
rather than
colleague
actually
Sarah
fulfill
Phillips,
what their duty is
works
to their
very
consumers or their
much on.
users, or in some cases, as
It's
a
something
peer
that a lot of our colleagues we work with at
and
ACLU and
another
CDT
thing
have
is it
done,
drives
but
up
like
costs,
we
especially legal and
are always
compliance
looking
costs,
for
particularly,
kids'
hardest
perspectives.
hit are the smallest firms, startups, small and
And
medium-sized enterprises.
Could this deter those
if you go
small
to our
startups and small
website, Fight
firms
for the
from
Future,
entering
if you
into the
go
market?
It very
to
well
ACLU,
could. There have been a lot of
CDT,
studies done on this about the
I
actual
don't know if
economic
ACLU and
costs
CDT are
on
still
some
running
companies
some of these
with
open
privacy
surveys. I know
laws.
EFF has
There's
done
a
it as
law
well.
in
So
Illinois
other
called
folks that we
KOSA,
often
which
work
has been,
with,
particularly helpful in this regard.
collecting a lot
So
of
we want meaningful,
real
we want
kids'
meaningful
perspectives
enforcement
on
and
these laws
accountability.
and how it
We want
affects
that
them.
enforcement accountability to
These are
lead
things that we
to
are
change.
trying to get
And for
as
there
much
to
of as
be a
possible
recourse for individuals who
and to educate Congress on,
So
because
that's why
again,
we
this
would
is
recommend in some
an
of these
important voice that
children's
often doesn't get heard
laws,
because
particularly
kids don't have the
home
means to
context
travel to
is
Congress and go and meet with their Congress
Fay,
members very
many
often.
proposals rely on age verification technology.
And so it's
Some
important
have
to make sure
critiqued
that they're
age
also hearing those perspectives as well.
verification as violating privacy and age gating the internet.
And
What
and yeah,
advances in age
the
verification technology
Clown
give
Fish
you
and Silent River both
confidence
brought up
that
this
we can
Save
effectively
the Kids
verify
law or
users'
cleverly
ages
titled bills.
accurately
Yeah,
while at the same time
honestly,
protecting their privacy?
strategically labeling your
Well,
bill
in short, many.
is
So
very
you saw this
important.
play out
And
in
yeah,
the
it can make
Supreme
it very
Court in the
difficult
Paxton
for
case,
people to
where
publicly oppose
part of
it,
the assessment that
because
the court was
often these
grappling
are
with
very
was not just
complicated
the content
laws,
that was at issue, but also the
and
technological
people,
advances
right?
since the
If
last
you
time
can
they
make an ad that
evaluated this, which I
says,
believe was in
"My
like
opponent
1996 or 90 or
oppose
92,
the
and
Save the Kids,"
the internet has completely
that's very good for
changed,
you. And so
right? I mean, the
politicians
amount
don't
of
want to
sheer
put
amount of
themselves
data
in a
that we give these
situation where
companies
their
have
opponents might
completely
be able
altered
to
the
cut
landscape.
honest
And
ads
now you
that
have
make can
vertically
look
integrated
at
systems
face
like
value.
Apple and Google's systems,
It's
for instance,
really
which
complicated
where Apple and
following all
Google
of
both
this,
own
right?
the
Like,
device,
that's
the
the
operating
government
system,
is
they own
really
the App
complicated.
Store, and
Legislation
they even have their own
is
native
a
apps.
mess,
So the idea that,
and
somehow they
following
know exactly
everything that
when you
happens
go to the bathroom and
afterwards,
what you
like
want to eat,
how
but yet
court
your age
cases
confounds them,
change,
is a
how
bit of a
legislation is being
ridiculous and
implemented,
almost outdated
how
view.
agencies are choosing to
My
interpret
time has expired.
legislation,
Mr.
how they're
Chairman,
actually
again, I
enforcing it.
thank you for
I mean, the
holding this
government is
important
really
hearing, and I
complicated,
yield
and
back.
realistically,
Doctor.
it's
Appreciate it
very
very much.
difficult for
Now I'll
anyone to
recognize
be,
last, but
well informed
certainly
about
not
all of
least,
this. And so,
Dr. Miller
just
Meeks for her
having a
5 minutes of
bill with a
questioning.
name that makes it
Thank you,
sound
Chairman
good,
Bielorakis and Ranking Member
unfortunately,
Sikowski,
can
for
make a
allowing
big
me to
difference.
wave onto this important hearing. I also want to thank our witnesses for being here today.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate
Protecting
sort of
children and
aspect
teens
of
online
politics
is
of
one of the most
lawmaking,
urgent
and it's something that
responsibilities
we
face
are
as
faced with.
policymakers.
And I think that like
As
it
digital
was most
platforms
clearly
become
articulated. What
sensitive
was
to
it
how
like
young
2 years
people
ago,
learn,
Jabron, where we
communicate,
had the
and
hearing,
navigate
and
the
I'm
world,
blanking on the
and
member,
importantly,
but they
how
said we
much
should just
they
pass
trust these
KOSA, let it get
platforms.
struck
We
down by
must
courts,
ensure
and only give
that
us
these
like
spaces are
time
safe, transparent, and designed with
to
their
like
well-being,
think of
not
something
corporate
better
profit as the driving priority.
to regulate the internet and solve some of
One
these
of the
problems.
witnesses' points,
But
it's
it's,
astonishing to
you
me
know,
that we can build computers, build a platform,
when you
build
have,
apps all through a digital
yeah,
Last
world,
fall.
but
I think it was
somehow
Dan Crenshaw who
yeah, it was
said
Dan
that.
Crenshaw, yeah,
can
I'm
verify
pretty sure.
your age.
yeah, and
No matter
so
how old you look,
I mean,
a
like,
digital
you keep having to
platform
come
that
back
is
to
remarkable
like
innovation can't
politicians
verify
are
age
people, and
when inappropriate apps
they aren't
or content is
necessarily like
accessed.
exceptional across any
So
spectrum. Like,
my bill,
and they
the Spy
have,
Kids Act, takes
you
an
know,
important step
human
towards that
inclinations.
goal
And
by
so
prohibiting online
when they
platforms from
feel
conducting
like a lot of their
for
constituents are
profit-focused
coming and
research
yelling at
on
them,
children under 13.
even if they're only
By
hearing
requiring
from a small
verifiable
group, even
parental
if,
consent
you know,
before such research can be
it's
conducted on teens.
somewhat
After all,
unusual
being
and
the
sort of the
public
harms
health
that
community
they're
has
having
raised
and
red
so on.
flags
And
about
even if the
cereal
bills
companies
that
marketing
people are
directly to
pitching
children
to them
for the
are
type of cereal
bad
that they would purchase.
and
So
don't
it's
solve
not
the
impossible
problem,
that we
but
do
they
this.
could be marketed
This
as solving the
legislation
problem.
matters
Like,
because the online environment our
the
children
politics
encounter
of it
today
is
fundamentally
that,
different
yeah,
from
I mean,
anything
they're going to be
previous
tempted to
generations
just like
have
hold their
experienced.
nose and vote
Platforms are
and hope
engineered to
that
capture
it either
attention,
doesn't
collect
pass
sensitive
or that it gets struck down by
information, and
courts
shape
or that
behavior
someone
in
else
ways
fixes
that
the
young
problem.
users may not
Because,
recognize
you
or
know,
be able to navigate safely.
and
Children
also
and
to be
teens
honest,
should
like
not
a
be
lot of
targeted,
members,
studied, or targeted for commercial
I won't make
advantage,
this as a
especially
generalization,
without
but
parental
something I've
oversight.
noticed in DC
By
is that
limiting
like
how
when you look at
platforms can
people,
analyze and
even
monetize
people who work
minors' data,
in this
the Spy
town
Kids
who
Act
like
helps reduce the risk
have like a very
of
clear
manipulative marketing
sort of
practices,
moral
strengthens
like
privacy
responsibility, and they
protections,
really
and
want to solve
reinforces
one
the
thing that's like a
principle
legitimate
that the
harm, and they
well-being of
want to
America's
like
youth must
make
come
people's
before
lives
business
better.
models of technology
They will
companies.
sometimes
Our goal is
sacrifice
simple:
other areas
build
where
an
they just
online
don't
ecosystem
care
where
or don't want to
children can
know,
grow,
and they'll be
learn,
like, whatever,
and
you
connect
know,
without being
I
exploited in the
like,
process.
I'm not going to look at
Mr.
this.
Bergman,
I'm not
before
going
I
to care
came
too
to
much
Congress,
about
I was the
this.
doctor and
I
director
care
of
about
the
healthcare
Department of
costs. I
Public
care
Health.
about,
The CDC recommended
you know,
limits
some
to
other
screen
issue.
time, and in the medical world, we have
And
strict ethical rules
and
about
so
conducting
these are
research
all
by
sort of
children.
things that we are
You cannot just
constantly
use the powerful
negotiating.
research without the parents'
And
informed
one of the hardest
consent, even
positions to
when it
be
comes
is
to
where
drawing
we are with all
cord
these
blood.
kids' safety
And it
bills, is
seems
that
that big
like
tech companies run tests and
they are
psychological
marketed very
experiments on
well.
our
They have a good
children
narrative
every
behind them,
single day
but they
to
like
see which color or sound
they're
keeps
not
them addicted the longest.
particularly
In their
well
view, what are the most
drafted, both
pressing
in
risks
targeting the
minors face from
problems
being
and also
profiled
causing a lot
or
of
studied for
unintended
commercial
harms.
purposes online?
And
I
you know,
would
they're just
refer
not
the
they're not
members
great
to
laws.
former
And
Surgeon
so
General's advisory
sometimes we
on
do run
mental
into
health.
situations
First of
where
all,
folks
the
are like,
longer our children are
sorry, my
online,
boss
the
is going to
more
vote
at
for
risk
it
they are
because,
for adverse
politics,
mental health outcomes,
but we
including
hope to come
suicide.
up with a better solution
They're
later.
also more at risk for all the acute harms that we see through social media, cyberbullying, sextortion,
Welcome,
and
Sarah, to the
trafficking
stream.
as
Matt,
well.
I think you might need to
So
adjust OBS so that
innovation
we can see
in the
Sarah
social
as well on
media
the screen.
industry means how many features can we design to get our children
But
to
yes, I
use
completely
the social
agree
media
with that.
platforms more. Our children's time is their profit.
Thank you. Mr. Thayer, how can behavioral research targeting minors be used to shape features that may increase addictive or manipulative design patterns?
Well, we're seeing it play out
Sarah,
in real
you
time.
have
So
a fan in
the
chat.
textbook experiment with our kids is evidence of that.
I don't know if you're looking.
Not to mention, as Congressman James noted, there are immense amount of research that demonstrates that these addictive behaviors
Yeah, you got to
will
shout out
actually
before you were on
manifest in
Yeah.
multiple different ways.
Wow. I feel like
outside the access to
chat
the
is
app. So
loading.
even after
Oh,
the app is
I
long
see.
turned off, they're still they're still susceptible to all of the harm that has been caused based
Yeah,
off of the
I think
repetitive nature of the videos,
to
based
Matt's
off
point
of the
about
inundation of
how
all the
uh,
materials, and even the
how
features
people will like
themselves,
sacrifice an
which
area.
happens
Part of
not
that is
just
just like
at the
the
app layer,
experience
but the apps
of
really in the
working in
operating
Congress.
system. And
I
these
interned for an
devices
office 2 years
on the
ago.
whole
It's
are
just a
designed to keep you
barrage of
addicted and
information,
designed
and
to keep
it
you
is just
experience.
impossible to stay on
I
top
guess
of
the visual
everything.
called that this is
And
more of
so
it's called FOMO.
there's an
And
understandable
so
element to this that
ultimately,
they just
if
go,
you take,
okay,
I
there's
mean,
some things
just
I
ask any
can't
parent
worry
who's ever
about. I can't
taken
think
a
about.
tablet or
But
phone away from
it
a
has real
child. I
consequences.
mean,
And
you'll recognize that these
what
kids
Congress
do
chooses to
not
neglect, or what
regulate
members,
themselves
individual members choose to
after that. They
neglect,
act a lot
matters a
like
lot.
your average drug addict.
I've seen it in my doctor's office with both parents and with children. Thank you
Yeah,
so
I had a
much for
friend
that. I yield back.
that briefly was a congressional staffer, did not enjoy it, but I
However,
had
now I would like to
a few interesting meetings with them where I was like, hey, unfortunately, I have to lobby you on this important like online issue. And they would just be like, I love you, but if this is not a real bill, don't talk to me because I'm buried under all this work.
Mr. Chairman.
And so, you know, that is part of the unfortunate realities of Congress. And like, if you're wondering why things always seem broken and not working, even when, you know, sometimes you do run into a decent amount of well-meaning people, it's just because it is from the bottom up dysfunctional.
House and Energy and Commerce, urging them to pass the Senate KOSA and stand
You know, I was
strongly
talking
against
to
the
a
demands of
reporter
tech
yesterday
industry. We got
about
this
this
and other
dynamic,
children's online
about
privacy and safety legislation.
like
Common Sense
Congress
Media
itself
opposition
limiting
letter
us so
December
much on
1st,
what actual solutions
opposing
are. Like, I know y'all have
these
talked about this
versions of
before,
KOSA
but
2.0.
I feel like so much of the
Parents,
stuff they talk
SOS
about,
KOSA one-pager
like in
of
organizing
December 1st.
spaces, are not
Coalition of over 20
considered tech
families who've
issues,
lost
but they're
their children
considered
to online
healthcare
harms
issues
with
or
significant concerns
access
about
issues
in-house
or,
KOSA
you
draft.
know, a lack of
Mr.
resources in a lot of communities. Like
mentioned
y'all were
the U.S.
talking about
Surgeon
living in
General's
small
advisory
towns, you
from
know,
2023. It's
and
important that that is in the
we're
record.
tasking
The
House Energy and
2023
Commerce with
American
it
Psychological
because
Association
it's
advisory
politically
examining the
feasible
potential
to maybe
beneficial and harmful
pass a
effects of
package
social
of
media,
tech bills,
including 10
but
recommendations
it
based
doesn't
on
seem as
scientific
feasible to
evidence.
pass other
The Pew
resources.
Research Center
And
report on
I don't
teen
know, that
social
like
media and
really,
mental health
really
of
deeply
2025
irritates me. And I feel like
found that
I
roughly 1
am a
in 5
broken record
teens
on
say
this
social
issue.
media sites hurt
So
their
much
mental
of
health,
people who I
and a
work,
growing
who
share
I
think
know
that
or
they
and
harm
organize
people their
in like
age.
harm reduction
Also, the
spaces around drugs, for
2024
example,
Federal Trade Commission
would not
report
consider
looked
more
behind the
censorship and
scenes. That is
surveillance and
the
more visibility
detailed
for
report
police as an
finding
answer
large social
to
media and video
youth drug
streaming
use or
companies
overdoses.
engage
They
in
would
vast
consider harm
surveillance of
reduction
users with lax
policies
privacy
as
controls
solutions
and
to
inadequate safeguards
youth
for
drug
kids and
use.
teens. The
And that's not
Decide
even
for
being
Us
considered in this
letter of December
conversation
1st,
at all because
2025,
we're being
several
boxed in by what
organizations led
Congress
by
says
Design
is
for Us
feasible and
in
what
support
Congress
of a
says
strong KOSA
are solutions. And I
in
often
opposition
tell
to a
people
federal
like,
provision that would
there's so
undermine
many creative,
existing state law
productive
protection for kids. And the
ideas like
Senate
in
Judiciary hearing
policy and
materials.
organizing
If you haven't
communities
read
that
through the
are not
written
even on the
report,
table. And so like the
materials
conversation
for
gets
the
so
transcripts and the questions
narrowed
that
based
will
on
be
what is on the
testifying
table in Congress and what feels
for
feasible
legislation.
and
the master
in this
complaint
like
in Amendment Lawsuit
congressional
2025.
bureaucratic
And
nonsense of
seeing
how they
accounts
actually
broken
pass bills.
promises,
Like
how
what
Instagram is
actually
failing to
productive
protect
gets cut or
minors.
is not even
The
considered is like
2025 Fair
huge,
Play
like you're
report on
saying
the
that. Like
weaknesses of Meta's
it
tech
has a
accounts,
huge impact
spearheaded by a
on
whistleblower and verified by university
what we're
researchers.
able to
Thank you for
do.
including these in the record today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just like,
I asked unanimous consent.
I mean, this is a good panel, but they're talking about issues that are fundamental to like trust and safety, which is the term that industry uses for how they organically deal with these problems. And there is not one single professional. I don't know that I've ever seen a trust and safety professional in one of these panels. And like they have the real expert knowledge. And like a lot of times Congress would rather bring a CEO in who doesn't know it much about how the company is being run like at a granular level and yell at them than like get someone that knows what they're doing from a technical level and like ask them real questions. And it, like again, this is like one of the better hearings.
Appreciate you so very much. And
Yeah.
personal stories.
The bar is low.
And
in
just to
terms
go
of who we're
back
talking
to chat, I guess we're just going to hang out and chat for a little bit longer, but the hearing is now over. But to
Is it over or adjourned? I didn't catch at the end if it was a break or if it was over.
I think it's adjourned. Yes. Okay. So we can hang out and answer questions for a little bit, but just to answer Andrew's question. So this was a like informational hearing. The way Congress works is that the way it's supposed to work, it doesn't always, is that when you have bills that are introduced, you're supposed to first have an informational hearing where members can ask experts questions about, you know, what works, what doesn't work with the bill, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have a markup, and the markup is where the committee is, again, supposed to look and examine amendments to fix the bill, if there's any fixes that need to be done, and approve those amendments, and then vote that bill out of committee. And then once it's voted out of committee, it is available to
Recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening
It's
statement.
restarting. It's available to the leadership to schedule a floor vote on that bill, and amendments can still happen between the markup and the floor vote. But it's like the process of that is like no longer transparent to people because it's out of the public eye. So what we just watched was the informational hearing. So next up is the markup. So it's a long way of saying that, like, if you don't like these bills, there's plenty of time still, and you should be calling now. Sarah has helped put together a call tool, is running our action, a lot of the age verification aspects of this bill right now. And so I'll let you kind of chime in on like what our tools are, but we have a number of tools that'll like make that easy for you.
Yeah, so specifically with this hearing, we set up a call tool with some context on the bills on badinternetbills.com. When you go to badinternetbills.com, a pop-up will come up with a script specifically about this package of bills. And just so folks are not confused, I set it up so that it calls important members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, who y'all just heard talk, in this hearing, and then it should call both your Senate member and your House rep as well. So there'll be multiple offices for you to call. It'll automatically guide you through how to get from office to office. There's a script on the site when you go to badinternetbills.com if you want some guidance on what to say. We are also running a week of action against online ID checks this week. We've got multiple events going on. If you go to our socials at Fight for the Future, you'll be able to see links to share our socials. We have some infographics and events coming up this week on ways to get involved in stopping online ID check mandates, and also holding companies accountable for going ahead and pre-complying and implementing online ID checks, folks like YouTube, for example. And all of those links are housed on our Week of Action page, which you can find on our socials. Tomorrow we'll be having another event. We're doing an AMA on Thursday. If you tuned in late to this stream, you can go ahead and watch the entire stream, also on the site as well. And yeah, the most important things to do is definitely call today if you can, to make clear that folks were watching and reacting to the bills and are opposed to ID checks and censorship bills.
Yeah, I wanted I wanted to answer a question in the chat. Someone asked, why do the campaign websites ask for so much personal information like addresses? It's intimidating to sign or fill that out, to be honest. That's understandable. Unfortunately, it is the only way we can make sure we're getting you to the right House member, because, and in fact, it can matter with the Senate as well, a few zip codes intersect various states. So yeah, that is unfortunately a necessity for routing stuff to Congress. If you're not comfortable filling the petition out on our website, we urge you to call. You can find your member pretty easily online. If you know what district you're in, that's super easy. You just look that up and find your member of the House. There's also a website, findmymember.gov or something like that. You can enter your address there. It won't be saved or associated with any of your other information. You can then use that to get your member's phone number.
Yeah.
So, and I just also want to say one other thing. Great to reach out to your senators. Many of these bills have Senate versions, or right, this is an issue on both sides, like both chambers, but this specific hearing was a House hearing. So your senators might be a little confused if you're like, why didn't you do blah blah here? Like, yeah, so definitely do both. It matters in both cases, but this was specifically a House hearing.
I will say that, like, really appreciate that healthy skepticism of entering information, what Gibran says, right? I know, like, our tech person is who designed all these, does everything that he can to make sure that, like, this data is protected and respected. But like Gibran said, we have to find out where you live to find out who your members are. And there's no way around that. So So yeah, if that's important to you, you can find it out just by Googling. But our tools are just designed to make it as easy as possible.
And someone's asking the stream end. Yeah, the hearing is over, and so we're no longer streaming that. We were just hanging on for a minute to answer questions. And I just to just say one more point about this. You can also just call other members of Congress, particularly on issue area committees, even if they're not your member. That being said, most offices will record whether a call comes from a constituent or not, and they care more about constituent calls. So if you can call your member, that is best. But if you can't, understandable. And yeah, the committee members matter a lot. They have a lot of influence on the process.
Yeah, we set it up to call leadership of the. So it's Sarah, you could probably answer this better, but it's usually preference based on leadership in your own members of Congress, so that you kind of get them all. If you kind of use the tool, it'll walk you through how to hit them all up. I also wanted to comment. Spooky Fawn said, "I doubt they'll pass, but that doesn't mean we should stop putting pressure on them." 100% agree. Like, dysfunction in Congress means that like the likelihood of anything getting through is always low, especially with this Congress. However, I will say the risk is the highest when it comes to kid safety, because members on the whole feel like they have a lot of pressure from certain groups to do something, even if what they do is bad, just to say they've done something. And so, so yeah, those are the most likely, I think, to pass for like substantive policy right now. But we honestly have no idea what shape that might take, because I don't think members of Congress have any idea what shape that might take. And so, yes, you should be calling, you should be emailing, you should be letting your voice heard, because that all goes into how likely these things are to move. And the more sort of like pushback they get, the less likely it'll be that these bills get prioritized for passing.
Yeah, and I also just want to say, like, as a big picture, a lot of this to me is about more than what House ENC will do. For example, in this package, like, I've still like fresh in this space, as in like I've been working on this for 3 years, and we see these bills come up over and over and over and over again. I know so many people in this space who are fighting bills that they've been fighting for almost a decade, right? Like, or some version of the same bill, the same bad idea behind these bills, that more surveillance and more censorship will protect kids. And we kind of need to make these kinds of bills, this framework around tech, really controversial and really clear to people that this amounts to censorship, this amounts to more data being collected, this amounts to more surveillance of folks, more information that could be hacked being out there. We kind of need to be just really loud about the entire issue. And in one way, like, I think Congress is showing us that they do think of all of these things as its own ecosystem, all of these things together, by packaging these bills together and showing us just how many bills are actually being considered, have been written around kid safety that do amount to censorship. And so I think we need to be like loud about these bills, not only because Congress might pass these, but also because like we're seeing like around the world this framework really taking root. And so I think in your own communities, making those connections for people and helping them understand that, you know, what sounds good on paper is not actually great in the common sense long view of like preserving our right to information online is really, really important. And hopefully our tools help you do that. But I think like there's a lot of questions in the chat about like what a regular person can do. Like if you're not super tapped into DC or the Hill, or you're a little uncomfortable about like calling or writing Congress, like it's actually really impactful to like go to your niche community and say like, how is ID checks going to affect like the gaming Discord I'm in? How would KOSA affect a fandom community that I'm in online? Like how would more surveillance around kids impact healthcare. I work in healthcare. I'm a social worker. I'm a teacher, or I'm just a member of a community online, right? Like, it's really important to go back to your communities and say, like, I heard about this thing. It really does impact us. We all need to take action. That's actually really, really important. I feel like it's one of the biggest ways we've been able to actually hold KOSA back, honestly. There's writing and calling Congress, and then there's also just showing Congress and like lawmakers writ large that this is like deeply unpopular and not the way to go. So I think there's actually a lot of different ways you can impact the conversation here.
Yeah, we'll say that, like, we've said this throughout the stream, but like, lawmakers care what their constituents think, even if it's just for self-preservation, because they're the ones that would be voting them either out or to remain in office. There is sort of like a chain of engagement of what matters. I think that emails and calls are really important, especially like if you can generate a lot of them. For people that have access or able to get a meeting with their member face to face, those are the most important interactions. And I think convince members to like do good or bad things, depending on who is the last person to talk to them and convince them to do something. Those are obviously challenging to set up or to get access to. And if like that's not something you can do, obviously just calls and emails are still really great. I think that what Sarah was saying, like gathering testimonials, gathering people's opinions on things, sending them to Congress, also very important. And just completely shifting topics to what Jabron was talking about in the chat. Yes, so a lot of how lawmaking works today, again, because Congress is under budget and understaffed, is interest groups. And that's not always a scary term. It could be civil society like us. It could be, other sort of well-meaning groups. It could be well-meaning groups with bad ideas. It could be horrible groups with good ideas sometimes, which is weird when that happens. But yeah, you can essentially like give them what you want, like as long as it is like sufficiently detailed, their legislation staff will take it from there. You have to convince them to introduce it, and to do that, often you want to work in coalitions with other community members. It really helps when you have like a local community that all support your idea. But that kind of civic engagement and stuff that like makes me really happy when it happens, especially in a good way. I can't talk too much about it, but like an example for us, and this is sort of a new thing for us as a smaller group, is that we found a state bill that really tackles a lot of the privacy issues around these arms that we really liked, and that was negotiated with a lot of members of the community, both parents and LGBTQ groups and other groups that represented their perspectives. And so we are hopefully working with a member to get it introduced. And yeah, I think it's been a rewarding process. Obviously, organizations with much more resources, this happens a lot more often. But I mean, one of the things is you kind of have to hand Congress what you want them to do, because most of the time they just don't have the staff manpower to come up with it on their own. I have worked with a lot of professors who have good ideas that I've, helped them connect with, members of Congress, and they always like, I gave them 100-page paper. Why didn't they turn it into a law? And it's because no one's got time to do that. If you want that to be a law, you have to write it and hand it to them. You can't read them you can't give them a homework assignment. You got to tell them what to do and show them how to do it.
And I want to get back to the thing that Sarah said about how engaging with your community is incredibly important here. Matt and I spend a lot of our time staring into the void of Congress and trying to influence it. And the reality is, Congress doesn't act in a vacuum. We've talked on the stream several times already about how a lot of these bad bills are the result of bad ideas that are widely held, or at least widely enough held. And so engaging with how people are talking about child safety online, that's a way that you can have an impact on this too. And ultimately, this politics is something that's always a moving target, right? If you're only focused on defeating a bad bill, well, it'll come back next year, right? If we want to really win on this stuff, it's about shifting culture, it's about shifting our ideas and getting people to think about safety differently. Think about it through community care, think about it through privacy. It's complicated. Think about it through harm reduction, right? And these things are complicated and they're long-term projects, but you do not have to have the calling to engage with Congress all the time. I like doing that. I enjoy that, but you don't have to. You can find other ways of really, like, if you care a lot about harm reduction, if you care a lot about building community resources, that is incredibly important. And it's really, those are the solutions ultimately to a lot of these problems. And showing that those solutions work by helping build them in your life is a really great way to have both immediate impact and also to help shift these ideas, these narratives, cause these bills to come back year after year.
And I want to answer another question by Silent Rogue. Again, not a dumb question. We have, when available, talked to some parents and other folks that are active on this issue. And like, I can't really get into the conversations, a lot of it, private and so on. But I will say that like a lot of the folks that we have had conversations with and dialogues with, like, we are increasingly on the same page, and that they've been helpful. But like, because, and this is again, like, unfortunate incentives with Congress and its dysfunction, because it's so hard to pass a bill, and because there's sort of like a sunk cost fallacy, and that like we've already done all this work, like we just need to like get it over the finish line, that like even folks that I think are allies or have become allies with us would easily take these flawed bills because they want to see something done if available. I think that like they'd also, if possible, would want to shape these bills in a better direction. But yeah, I think for a lot of them, they're already very much invested in having something done and doing something. And think, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I probably think that like these problems can be fixed later. Whereas we don't believe that. We think that these problems are going to be pervasive, are going to impact communities that often don't have a voice and are ignored. And that because of that, like they will not get fixed. And in a lot of cases are actively targets of certain politicians and culture wars and stuff like that. So that's why we need to make sure that we solve these problems beforehand. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I run into that a lot of like, oh, if it has that effect, we'll sue, or like, if it will work it out later. And I think there's a lot of like, I wish hindsight was 2020 with Congress. Like, we say that, it's literally not. I think they're actually very forgetful on how these things have gone in the past. And I mean, I feel like Matt and I bring up Sesta Fosta. DeBron probably brings up Sesta Fosta like often. And most people on the internet who were like online actually saw repercussions from Sesta Fosta, whether or not they understood it as that, right? Like communities were taken down, like a lot of information was censored. Companies reacted in a certain way that resulted in a lot of folks losing their platforms or losing communities online that they had built around like sex ed or harm reduction, topics that companies didn't want to be liable for under Sesta Fosta, right? And Tumblr, like I was an avid Tumblr user when Sesta Fosta passed, and there was a huge effect on Tumblr. And I think the biggest problem is that these are marginalized people on the internet, right? That can't, honestly fly into DC every time there's a hearing to talk about the impacts on their lives. And the information that we lose is life-saving information. It's not, just the byproduct of some law. It's like actually really consequential. Sex ed, harm reduction, are life-saving resources, whether or not people in power consider them to be. So it has to have real effects. You can't just fix that later. People had actual effects on their lives from laws that Congress has already passed. And I expect the same, right? If some of these laws were to move.
Yeah, I kept meaning to and forgetting to bring up Sesta Fosta during this whole stream, but we actually have a report, which I can't find right now, but it's on our website somewhere, that we put out recently about looking back on all the harms of Sesta Fosta. And it was something that like Five Future and a lot of other organizations were explaining exactly what was going to happen. And then it did happen. And, you know, going back to earlier points about, you know, this was about sex trafficking. The bill had a scary name. There were a lot of celebrities that came out in support of it and made ads for it because just the narrative was you're standing up for sex trafficking or standing against sex trafficking. And yeah, it didn't actually do anything good and caused a lot of harm. And a lot of it was related to, you know, either intentional or unintentional conflating of like LGBTQ with adult/sexual. So there was a lot of increased moderation of LGBTQ communities. And then, as Sarah pointed out, there was a lot of shutting down of safety tools for sex workers and made their lives more dangerous. And yeah.
When Matt says it didn't do anything good, that is literally the case. There is a Government Accountability Office report, I think from 2022, that at that point it had literally not been used successfully in a single case to prosecute anybody, but it had caused all of these harms despite not actually being used by prosecutors against sex traffickers at all. And so, like, and I think, you know, I think, Sarah, you bring up a really important point. Like, sure, maybe it gets struck down later, but we have to think in the aggregate, right? Like, if a bad law that affects 350 million people is on the books for a couple of years, like, litigation isn't quick. It takes a while for these laws to get struck down, and negatively influencing people's lives for all of that time. Maybe the individual impact isn't massive. Maybe it is. But even if it's a small individual impact, we're still talking about a big collective harm. And as Sarah's pointing out, right, if communities are disrupted even temporarily, they may never reconstitute or come back with like the same kinds of resources they had before. I've been living on the internet pretty much my whole life, and a lot of communities I was part of a decade ago basically don't exist anymore. And things are lost in that. I think many people have seen that communities change potentially quickly, and a lot can get lost in the churn.
Oh, awesome. Sarah
I found a link.
Yeah, I think if anyone has any last questions, if not, we've got Leah, so it's a party. We're just doing our wrap-up thoughts because the hearing is now over.
Yeah, here for my participation points only. So part of working in West Coast is that all these hearings happen so darn early.
Yeah, it was early for me, and I'm central, so
yeah, fair, totally fair. I also get on late, but yeah, this has been long, you guys. How long have you been on here for? Like 3 hours?
Yeah. The hearing just wrapped like 15 minutes ago, and so we're hanging out with the viewers because we've got good participation in chat and really great questions.
Thank you all for hanging with us.
Yeah.
These are long.
These are long, boring hearings.
Yeah, this is our job, but y'all like chose to be with us for all this. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being engaged.
Yeah. Do you guys have a recap so far of how this thing went, like what they did, and any takeaways for us?
I mean, my takeaway is like cautiously optimistic in that like we always knew that we had a problem with narrative, which is something we've been working on and working with people who are, you know, viewers now who have written and stuff like that. But I thought that a lot more questions were targeted at the harms of these bills than I expected. The fact that they invited Kate from CDT, who is an expert on a lot of this stuff, and who has a lot of criticisms is a big deal, because sometimes when they run these hearings, it's all like, I only want people who are going to tell me how awesome I am and how great my ideas are. And that didn't happen. There was some interesting dialogue. As I say, like, we still have a lot of work to do, but I feel like the right conversations are happening, the right questions are being asked, and it's helping that we are getting into substantive conversations. And my camera died again. Sorry, folks. It's been overheating all day.
Oh, I love Kate. Kate does fantastic work, but I really think who should have been on there is probably Sarah Phillips.
I don't know about that one. Work for my own self-preservation.
It's also just painful to be on a panel, and yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't have anything else to add to that. Just thinking about how much Kate had to go through in order to advocate for us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I share a similar takeaway to Matt. I think the scariest thing that could have come out of this hearing is that if it seemed like everyone was really on the same page and they were just like going to bulldoze through some version of this. And I don't really think that's what we saw at all. I think there were definitely, right, there are some pervasive narratives that are still really strong, but we saw a lot of people pulling in different directions on these things. People bringing up speech issues with KOSA, which is, there have been hearings where one member brings up a speech issue with KOSA. It's like, oh, clip that. And here, like, this was pretty common. People were talking about this really openly. Like, this is something that seems to have like really drilled in, and people seem to like get it. Whether they're gonna act like adequately on that remains to be seen. But it really, like, comparing this to last year's last KOSA hearing, it does feel like the dialogue has shifted pretty considerably from, look, we just have to get this done, like, just push it through. This is inevitable. Why are people like holding this up, to like a lot more real debate? And definitely not all of that debate is in our favor. Certainly, we have not won the battle of ideas here altogether, but it was often these are pretty depressing hearings, and this wasn't particularly depressing, to be honest. Like, I come out of it going, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I think that over the last 3 years, that change has been palpable, but I also think that we need to acknowledge like why that change has happened, and it's because so many people have been so loud about how much they hate KOSA. Like, we're talking, these are offices that have gotten thousands of emails and calls over every single time that there's a committee hearing, every single time there's a markup, every single time we're like, hey, like, this is happening right now, we need like all these people calling your offices. Like, that is why they're approaching this with the delicacy that they are now, because they realize that there is actually like a force watching that is very aware of what the issues are. And I work with like a lot of young people who are really angry about KOSA, and the experts they have become in like internet speech has been like, I mean, the fuel that like has really been behind this has been like online communities not wanting to deal with this again, not wanting to experience Estefasta again, and really realizing like the issues that they're having with the internet are not at all going to be solved by KOSA or online ID checks. And they're also really frustrated with just like the amount of energy and time we waste on censorship bills when we have like clear paths forward on like what needs to happen, right? So like, that's why they're approaching it like this. I also think like someone just mentioned in the chat, UCOSA, right? Like that's why I like talking about it as like a global issue too, because we're not just dealing with the US, right? Like, if we're talking about Blue Sky, YouTube, Reddit, these are companies that service all over the world, right? And so they're having to react to KOSA, they're having to react to like the Australian, efforts to get kids off the internet or fence off the internet from kids. And so we're seeing actually like how this is going down in other countries as well. And like the backlash from KOSA of people actually realizing like, wow, I have to upload a face scan or my government ID or my mortgage or water bill or whatever the other options were to get into like a Reddit thread. Like that's ridiculous, right? And so yeah, I just want to acknowledge like there's a actual like effort here and energy that's changed and shifted the narrative, and it's been because people are active about it. And so I don't want people to feel like, oh, I've been like writing and calling on this issue for years and they're still talking about it. The reason that they're still talking about KOSA in a preliminary hearing in the House is because they have tried to get it to the finish line so many times and have had to stop because people were so active on the issue, right? So like the reason that we're still talking about it in a preliminary sense is because of that energy, not like I want to kind of flip the narrative on that a little bit. We've actually had a large effect on this bill and where we're at with kid safety policy in general right now.
And so much of that work, I want to give credit, like where the chat is giving credit is it has been labor of like Sarah and Matt and Gibran and folks here at Fight for the Future specifically, just day in and day out for years on these issues. And we have our week of action that's happening now. And it almost feels like early December is a KOSA and ID check nexus to a certain extent, because Australia is about to roll out their bill too, or the implementation of ID check laws in Australia is about to happen, right? And I mean, for my part, I'm not anticipating that that's going to go well.
Yeah, I think, it's terrible for UK, but to a certain extent, the fact that some of these other countries went before us and it went the way we told them it was going to go has been helpful. EFF has a report about all like rounding up all the harms. We have one that we're hopefully going to be releasing soon. And so, our argument is that like it's not only bad law, it's bad politics because everyone just hates that bill. And VPN usage is like skyrocketed in UK. It's created a problem where like our next defense we know is going to be VPNs because they are now under attack because of that.
And I mean, for my part too, I was just reading about Australia, like none of the major tech companies are even telling how they're going to do age verification in advance. Everybody's been just looking around like, what is this even going to look like when it's implemented? And I'm, I've got my stock of hater popcorn ready for for when Australia takes the plunge down bad idea lane.
Of the big I told you so.
I do want to say it, and like, one of the reasons why we're so optimistic, having all these good conversations, having someone like Kate on the panel, all that stuff, and this hearing is because like 3-4 years ago, like it was bad. Like, it was, a lot of sort of bad narrative, misinformation on what this bill is going to do and what it's going to accomplish. People telling us that we were liars on highlighting the harms, and through our work, through our coalition work, through a lot of active engagement by young people and other stuff that really understand the internet and how things work, everything has kind of improved dramatically. And so even though like it still is not great, like it does make me hopeful. And like what Sarah was saying earlier, like one of the things that makes me so happy is all the young people that like care and are engaged and are like becoming active. I just think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's depressing on one hand that we have to have this fight every year. But on the other hand, the fact that we haven't lost it and that in fact things have really shifted is really a testament to everyone who has been pushing back on this for years. Because to return to the Patriot Act analogy from earlier in the stream, right? Like tragedies easily beget bad legislation, and then you're stuck with it indefinitely. And in this case, that hasn't happened yet, and it doesn't have to happen. And if we keep fighting, it won't. And we certainly intend to. I hope you continue to join us in all this, and thank you for everything you all have done so far.
All right, y'all, we ready to wrap?
Yeah, that's a good spot to end, I think.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us. And this was an experiment. If you liked it, please let us know because we'll do it again.
Yeah, we're ready for our streamer errors, I think. We could do something more fun than a congressional hearing at some point, though.
Yeah.
We had ideas on stand up while you all were on stream. We've got some fun ideas.
Oh.
So now we're just teasing people.
What do you mean, more fun than a congressional hearing? What's more fun than a congressional hearing, Sarah?
I can think of so many things. Thanks for joining, y'all. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Yeah.
More to come.